In the darkest region of a medieval world, a short, dirty, hunchbacked man with a disfigured face walks into the main hall of a gigantic fortress. In his hand he held a human eyeball, which was all that remained of his master Aiden, an evil sorcerer who chose to do battle with the royal wizard Elzador. Aiden's goal was to kill two birds with one stone, by killing Elzador, the only being with the knowledge and power to match his own, and at the same time gain control of the world he thought he knew. The dirty little man approached an emerald placed on a stone mantle in the middle of the hall, and put the only remains of his master on it. Also, green energy began to slither around the eye until there was a flash of energy. After the smoke cleared, the dirty little man saw standing before him a tall, naked Caucasian male with long brown hair and dark black eyes. "Sire, is that you?" timidly inquired the disfigured man, unable to recognize his master. The emerald that was placed in the main hall of the fortress belonged to a tribe of mystical healers that was made extinct by Aiden. The emerald, when touched, will take any being to its strongest form. This was why, instead of seeing the advanced age master he served for most of his life, he saw what seemed to be a 21-year-old male in the prime of his youth. "Yes, Colin, it is me. The jewel has restored my youth as well as my life," confirmed Aiden, using his powers to clothe himself in a long black robe as he walked into the throne room of his fortress, with Colin following closely behind him. "Colin! Why is it Elzador lives when I told you to poison him?" asked Aiden, raising his voice in anger as he sat on his throne. "Sire, I did exactly what you asked of me," pleaded Colin, whose fear had thrown him to his hands and knees. "Of course you did. Elzador, as a master of sorcery, will be immune to such," Aiden said to himself, for as well as curing physical imperfection, the emerald also cured most forms of ignorance. Aiden then gave out a loud and uncontrollable laughter that echoed through his fortress and presented an insight into the level of his insanity. For the emerald's power somehow presented Aiden with what seemed to be the perfect means of destroying all that he despised. Episode 1. In the kingdom of Nale, a land ruled by a just king and protected by the greatest warriors, a banquet for the festival of Thanksgiving was held in the grand hall of the royal castle. There was music and dancing. Everyone at the festival was celebrating, for the prosperous season that had passed had given them more than enough reason to be thankful. The king, a stern-looking middle-aged man, sat on the high table with his beautiful wife on his right-hand side and his lovely teenage daughter on his left. Princess Lilith was a beautiful young lady with long blonde hair, kind blue eyes, and a sweet, angelic voice. Beside the queen sat the royal wizard Elzador, an old-looking man who didn't look a day over 70, with long grey hair and a long grey beard. Apart from him being the royal wizard, no one really knew anything about him, which was why there were many versions of the story about his past that spread throughout the kingdom. Some claimed he was thousands of years old. Others claimed he was a good spirit who chose to take the form of a man. Whatever his past was, it was certain that he would stand in the way of anything that threatened the kingdom. The festival came to a pause as trumpets went off to give notice of the arrival of the highest ranked men amongst Nale's greatest warriors, the knights. The doors to the banquet opened, and in walked 6 tall, heavily built men, partially armored up and armed only with a special individual sword. A young Caucasian-looking man with short black hair and a pair of overzealous brown eyes led the group of respected knights. His name was Nathaniel, and at the age of 20 had already proven himself on over 100 occasions to be the bravest knight Nale had ever appointed from his generation. "Sire, we the knights of Nale wish you a happy Thanksgiving," said Nathaniel as he and his fellow knights knelt before the high table. "Thank you. You are welcome to join the festivities," responded the king, as he stood up from his throne with a cup of wine in his hand. The crowd of people then went back to celebrating, and the knights joined in. "Nathaniel, please join us at the table," insisted the king, for he favored the young knights. Nathaniel accepted the offer and took a seat beside the princess. "Good day, fair princess," greeted Nathaniel, putting on a persona he perceived to be charming. "Good day, Sir Nathaniel," responded Lilith, with an amused look that said, "Don't even bother. Tell me, fair princess, what would it take a man like me to win your heart?" asked Nathaniel, sensing his inability to gain the princess's interest. "All you have to do is drop the act of pride and arrogance. I can do that." "Really? Because you've been saying that for the past 3 seasons, and in all that time, you haven't changed a bit." The king, watching the young knight and his daughter converse from a distance, turned to his wife. "Young love, isn't it sublime?" said the king, already having thoughts of marriage. "If you say so," responded the queen, who could tell her daughter wasn't at all interested in Nathaniel. "Bring in the main entertainment," cried out the king, drawing everyone's attention to the center of the royal hall. Then, a young, oriental-looking man, no taller than 5'7", cartwheeled to the center of the hall in front of the banquet table, in an outfit like a little elf in a child's storybook, that consisted of a green, peasant-like shirt under which he wore a pair of green tights, with a funny-looking hat with 8 little bells on it. His name was Jacob, and he was the royal court's jester. Out of a little brown pouch he carried with him, Jacob brought out 6 balls and began to juggle them with his hands. Then, with pure speed and skill, he flipped into a handstand and began to juggle the balls with his feet. Everyone clapped and cheered, for they were thoroughly entertained by this. "I think it's disgraceful. A grown man prancing around like an idiot. My God, look at how he's dressed," commented Nathaniel as he reluctantly clapped along with the room. "I think it's admirable a man would choose to dedicate his life to make others happy," said Lilith, having nothing to do with the knight's critique. Suddenly, the jester's act was interrupted by a strong breeze that violently swung open the doors leading into the royal hall. Then through the doorway walked Aiden, as though he hadn't a care in the world. "Happy Thanksgiving," yelled out the sorcerer, mocking the very meaning of the words. "And who might you be?" asked the now disturbed king, unable to recognize the foe he had faced as a teenage prince. "He is Aiden, the one that tried to destroy you and the kingdom of Nale 20 years ago," answered Elzador, who wasn't at all fooled by Aiden's new look. "Aiden? Wow, he looks very healthy for one who is meant to be 300 years old," Nathaniel said to himself as he mentally prepared himself for battle. Jacob, glaring at the sorcerer with sheer hatred in his eyes, took off his funny-looking hat. "My old friend Elzador, trust you to spoil all the fun," said Aiden, who then shot out a green energy blast at the royal wizard, who in turn tried to retaliate but was too late. The green energy surrounded Elzador and imprisoned him in a green impenetrable bubble of energy. All the guards in the hall began to make their way towards the evil sorcerer. "Fools!" said Aiden, then laughing as he created a flood of green energy to cover the entire floor. Then an army of demonic beings, made up of molten rock, possessing no sense of fear or pain, violently emerged out of the floor of the royal hall, all under Aiden's service and all armed with a sword possessing a flaming blade. Aiden's army began to slaughter the royal guards, whose weapons were useless against them. This caused a panic and people were soon running and screaming everywhere. By this time, Nathaniel ordered the 5 elite knights to take the king and queen to safety. Seconds after he had placed that order, half a dozen molten warriors had begun to approach his area. "Get back, demon!" yelled out Nathaniel as he pushed the princess behind him and drew out the enchanted sword given to him by the royal wizard, and used it to shatter one of the many molten warriors attempting to attack him. Jacob, who was smack in the middle of all the chaos, found himself under attack by a molten warrior. The demonic being viciously swung its sword at Jacob, who in turn ducked, causing the evil warrior to decapitate one of its own. The molten warrior continued its mission to harm Jacob and attempted to drive his sword right through the jester, who in turn spun out of the way, again causing the demonic being to kill its own. The monstrous-looking follower of Aiden was now very frustrated and began to attack Jacob with immense determination. Jacob, using a natural smooth movement, comfortably dodged all the molten warrior's attacks and leaped on the top of the banquet's high table. Over-eager to take the jester's life, the demonic being ran towards Jacob, who in turn executed a somersault twist over the molten warrior, landing right behind the creature. Immediately the jester's feet touched the ground, he kicked up a fallen molten warrior's sword from the ground into his hand and vanquished his persistent foe before he had a chance to turn around. Jacob then found himself using his knowledge of Kung Fu to battle through half a dozen of newly found attackers with style and grace. Aiden, becoming a cloud of smoke, flew across the room to where Nathaniel single-handedly fought off a dozen of molten warriors, with the princess constantly behind him. Right in front of the elite knight, the evil sorcerer transformed into a giant black fire-breathing dragon. "I won't let you take her," said Nathaniel, violently standing his ground as he made it very clear he would die first before letting anything happen to the princess. "Her? You've got it all wrong. It's you who I'm after. Although now that you've mentioned it, the princess does have her uses," said Aiden in an echoing tone as he stood over Nathaniel and Lilith. He then used his sorcery to bind both the princess and the knight with an invisible force before vanishing with them in a mist of smoke. As Aiden left the hall, all the molten warriors became dust, and Elzador suddenly became free from his impenetrable prison. Jacob, not even to stop to think, runs out of the royal grounds and rides towards the dark regions outside the Nale kingdom. Hours later, Nathaniel awoke with his whole upper body exposed and chained to a stone wall that had been placed in the middle of Aiden's fortress hall by his own evil sorcery. 50 meters away lay the large black coffin in the middle of a satanic symbol. As Nathaniel gained full consciousness, he attempted to use his freakishly brute strength to break free, but all his efforts were in vain. As he stopped to desperately think of a way out of his predicament, he noticed Colun standing at the side of him, staring intensely. "I've seen men like you, who even in the darkest of hours show nothing but bravery and strength," said Colun, now coming extremely close to the chained warrior. "Others I've seen have it because they were noble. Others because the fate of an entire race lay in their hands. Some even have it for the sake of love. But you have it for other reasons. You have it because you try to fill a role. You're trying to be something when really you are nothing. Underneath that warrior exterior is a scared little nobody," taunted Colin, allowing his sewage breath to draft right into Nathaniel's face. Nathaniel responded by looking Colin right in the eye before headbutting him in the face. The little disfigured henchman of Aiden fell to the floor with a broken nose. "Colin, you know as well as I that a desperate man can be one of the most dangerous of animals," reminded Aiden after walking into the hall unnoticed. He then fired a bolt of electricity at Nathaniel, who gnashed his teeth as he took in the pain. "What do you want with me?" asked Nathaniel, now in a very weak state. "Have you ever heard of Thorax?" asked Aiden as he walked round the physically beaten warrior. "Hell's Knight," answered Nathaniel, very familiar with the legend Aiden was referring to. "That's right, a being so powerful it could single-handedly destroy the Nale kingdom, including Elzador." "You fool. What makes you think you would be able to control such a powerful being?" "I'm a 350-year-old sorcerer, who if not for a technicality would have gained control of the whole world. Don't you think I thought of that?" said Aiden, then firing another bolt of electricity at Nathaniel, causing him this time to yell out in pain. "But for me to release this being with its full power, I need to drain all the blood of a valiant warrior and cover Thorax's coffin with it." "You should be flattered. Me choosing you for this ritual is a testament to your worth as a warrior," said Aiden, then using an invisible force to slit Nathaniel's wrist, causing the young man's blood to pour down to the ground and flow towards the coffin placed in front of him. Aiden then entered a trance as he chanted out incantations for the ritual. Meanwhile, in one of the fortress's many dungeons, Princess Lilith sat alone in the darkness, worried about Nathaniel's well-being and scared to death about what could be laid in store for her. Suddenly the door to her dungeon opens, but instead of seeing the ugly and grotesque dungeon keeper, she saw standing in the doorway her secret lover. "Jacob!" she cried out, then running to hug and kiss passionately the love of her life, who she thought she would never see again. "You have to get out of here," reminded Jacob, then taking his lover by the hand to lead her out of the castle. "Wait, what about Nathaniel?" said Lilith, not at all ready to leave the night behind. Minutes later, Nathaniel was close to death, and Aiden was already halfway through the ritual. Jacob ran into the hall, expecting to fight a whole army. but was stopped by no one, for the sorcerer had focused all his power and thoughts to the resurrection of Thorax. Jacob, realizing Aiden was in a trance, released Nathaniel from his chains and carried him out of the hall. Colin tried to stop him, but Jacob knocked out the little man with one kick. Hours later, Aiden finished the ritual before realizing Nathaniel had been taken. How long ago was he taken? Sire, an army sent by the Nale kingdom took him about 3 hours ago, lied Colin in an effort to preserve his life. No matter, I got enough blood to bring him back. However, it would take several days for him to awaken, and even more days for him to restore his full power, the kind of power that will be useful to me. Sire, by that time, Nale will have sent another army to destroy you, especially now that young Nathaniel knows your plan, pointed out Colin timidly. You are right, said Aiden, thinking out loud. He then used his sorcery to open up a portal to another world, and out of it walked 5 hazelites, demonic beings made out of pure energy, each possessing the ability to bend a natural element to their control. Go, my servants, and make the path to my fortress 100 more times treacherous. Asking no questions, all 5 hazelites flew out of the fortress to carry out the evil sorcerer's instruction. It took 2 hours for Jacob and Lilith to get back to the kingdom of Nale, by which time they had already feared the worst for Nathaniel. Jacob, now covered in the knight's blood, carried Nathaniel to Elzador's workroom in the royal castle and laid the injured young man on the wizard's work table. I think he's dead, said Jacob hesitantly, as he was reluctant to upset Lilith with the prospect of Nathaniel's demise. She in turn hugged Jacob to give and receive moral support. He isn't dead. He has, however, lost a lot of blood, said Elzador, examining the injured young man. Leave us, ordered Elzador as he got ready to treat the fallen warrior. Jacob and the princess did as they were told. As Jacob stepped outside the workroom, Lilith dragged him into a dark corner and kissed him passionately. Thank you for saving us, said the princess as she gazed into her lover's eyes, while her hand still caressed his face. Promise me you won't tell your father of my actions, asked Jacob, for he knew if the king knew of his heroics, he would be forced to take part in a life he wanted nothing to do with. I promise, said the princess, understanding her lover's request. I wanted to ask you one last thing, said Jacob, then getting down on one knee. Will you marry me? Yes, my dear Jacob, I will, answered the princess, filled with more happiness than she could handle. I will come for you tonight, so that we may go and start a life together on a land outside the kingdom left to me by my father, where we will never be found, promised the young jester. I will leave my window open and wait for you, informed the princess, then kissing her lover again, before finally making her way to her father's house. Hours later, the king, allowing the presence of his family, called a meeting for all Nale's finest warriors. Champions of Nale, I have called you all because your kingdom will soon be attacked by a very powerful evil. Because of this, I need you all to go to the dark regions of this land and vanquish this threat, announced the king, emanating a great deal of urgency. Sire, that won't be wise. I fear this evil that has been released onto the world is an evil we don't have the power to face head-on. It needs to be vanquished at the source with a great deal of precision. If we attempt to do this with 100 men, Aiden will spot and destroy them before they get a mile away from his region. This quest is for one man, pointed out Elzador. And that man is me, cried out Nathaniel, marching into the hall in his full armor, with his strength and confidence fully restored. Nathaniel, Nale's finest knight, and a man who did not hesitate to follow my daughter into the jaws of evil. Yes, young knight, you may have this quest, granted the king in great faith. Thank you, sire. Later that day, Jacob sat on a rock in the middle of Nale's countryside, playing on his flute, a melody his mother used to sing to him as a child. Alas, that tune brings back a lot of memories, said Elzador as he approached the jester from behind and took a seat beside him. Good day, Elzador. Good day, young Jacob. What you did was a very brave thing. Not only did you save Nathaniel's life, but you stopped Aiden from summoning Thorax with its full strength. There are countless young men that would have done the same if given the opportunity. But not all would have succeeded, stated Elzador, then rising to his feet to stand in front of the young man. Aiden got a great deal of Nathaniel's blood, enough to summon the Hell Knight Thorax. It will take days for Thorax to awaken and even more days for the demon to gain its full strength. The Hell Knight must be destroyed before this can happen, or we all will be doomed, informed Elzador with a great deal of seriousness. You are a man with vast knowledge and skill. Surely you can destroy Aiden and Thorax before they do any harm, pointed out Jacob, sensing the favor that was soon to be asked of him. Aiden has come back from his demise stronger and smarter than before. I sense it is better I stay and protect the royal family, which is why I allowed the king to send Nathaniel out on the quest to vanquish Thorax's evil. Then we have nothing to fear. Sir Nathaniel is more than capable of carrying out such a task, said Jacob with a great deal of relief, assuming there was no possible way he could be asked to be involved in the Aiden saga. No, he isn't. He, like many young warriors, is simply out to prove his worth as a man. Because of this, he will make many foolish decisions and die, which is why I want you to accompany him. I can't. Me rescuing the princess and the knight was nothing more than a fluke. I do not have the heart to walk the path of a warrior, insisted Jacob. A true warrior acts, not because of what his reward may be, or because of how people may perceive him after his act. A true warrior acts only on what his heart represents, and will fight only for what he believes in, nothing more. Jacob, that is the kind of warrior you are, and that is the kind of warrior Nale needs right now, argued Elzador, noticing Jacob was still not convinced. I can tell you love Princess Lilith very much. You know of that? Whispered Jacob, now a bit uneasy. The wizard knew of his secret love affair. Yes, I know. I also know you two belong together. But that will not come to pass if you do not take it upon yourself to rid this world of Thorax's evil. After Elzador left him with those words, Jacob went back to his home and removed from under his bed a large wooden chest. In it was an aspect of his life he had gone out of his way to forget for the last 3 years. The chest contained a jet black Robin Hood-like outfit, which was the last thing he wore as a knight in training. The chest also contained the only 2 weapons he gave his father a chance to hand down to him: a long metal combat staff and an enchanted silver boomerang that could cut through any material known to man. Jacob wore his old uniform, took hold of his old weapons, and used the rest of the day to practice all the fighting styles taught to him by both his parents. Later that evening, the princess waited patiently, packed and ready to leave her father's house, to start a new life with the first and only man she would ever love. Her heart raced with excitement as she heard the sound made by someone climbing up her balcony. But to her disappointment, it wasn't her lover Jacob. "Evening, fair princess," said Nathaniel, dressed in light battle armor, assuming the princess would be happy to see him. "Oh, it's you," said Lilith, in a tone that clearly gave away her disappointment. "Hey, don't be like that. Before I set out on my latest quest, I hope to entertain you a little," said Nathaniel. He then brought out 6 blue balls and clumsily attempted to juggle them, but his attempt to mimic Jacob's performance at the banquet was more than terrible. It was ridiculous. He, however, did succeed in entertaining the young princess, for she couldn't at all hold in her amusement at the usual proud knight making a complete fool of himself. "Make sure you come back in one piece," said the princess, touched by Nathaniel's effort. She then kissed the young warrior softly on the cheek. "Why, princess, I didn't know you cared," said the knight, a bit shocked by the princess's actions. "You may be an arrogant pest, but I do still care about what happens to you," said Lilith, then playfully messing up his hair with her hand. "Don't worry, my fair lady. I will be back to win your heart," promised Nathaniel, as he left her room through the same way he made his entrance. The princess watched him leave with a smile on her face. Nathaniel that night was sweet, but Lilith still longed for her true love, Jacob. 5 years had passed since she met him, and yet in all that time he had managed to keep the same level of kindness and sincerity in his heart and eyes. Lilith began to reminisce about how it all started. That day, as a 14-year-old princess, already expected to know and do so much, she had been invited by 16-year-old Nathaniel to watch him as he trained for a chance at knighthood in the heart of Nale's countryside. After about 45 minutes of watching Nathaniel flex his muscles and perform some combat theories, Lilith got bored and sneaked away from her egotistical friend. She wandered deep into the countryside until she came to a little house by a lake. Unknown to her at the time, it was the home of Sir Hymer, the mightiest warrior ever to serve the throne of Nale. In front of the house was 15-year-old Jacob practicing Tai Chi. "Hello there," greeted the princess, a bit puzzled by what Jacob was doing. "Are you lost?" asked Jacob, continuing with the form. "No, not really. What are you doing?" "Tai Chi, the perfect means of becoming one with your center," responded Jacob, yet to make eye contact. "Would you teach me?" asked Lilith, who was genuinely curious about what Jacob was doing. "Sure," answered Jacob, finally stopping to look at his first student, only to be mesmerized by her beauty. For the rest of the year, every late afternoon, Princess Lilith sneaked off to learn Tai Chi from Jacob. She learned that apart from it being a therapy exercise, it was a unique fighting style that mainly focused on using an attacker's foes to one's own advantage. In that time with Jacob, she watched him perform numerous other kung fu styles with a vast range of weapons, most of which she had never seen before. "Who taught you all this?" asked the princess one afternoon, after Jacob amazed her with his drunken sword form. "Most of the empty hand stuff were taught to me by my mother. My dad learnt all the weaponry from her father and passed all his knowledge down to me," answered Jacob as he sat down beside her to take a drink of water. "I would like to meet your parents. They sound like interesting people." "My mother left when I was 12 to go back to her home, far in the east, to help resolve some problems. My father, however, serves the royal court as a knight," informed Jacob. "Tell me, Jacob, do you wish to follow in your father's footsteps and become a knight for the royal throne?" inquired Princess Lilith. "Yes, he does. And who knows, little princess, one day he might win your heart," answered Sir Hymer, before his son was able to utter a word. Jacob quickly got to his feet to show his father respect. Lilith did the same. "Sir Hymer, I had no idea," responded Lilith, a bit stunned. "It's okay. My home is open to you anytime," assured Sir Hymer, then making his way into his house. Jacob attempted following, with the intent to prepare his father some food. "It's okay. Entertain your new friend," insisted Jacob's father. "Princess, why didn't you tell me?" asked Jacob in his usual soft tone. "It kind of slipped my mind. Please don't be angry with me," playfully pleaded the princess. "I'm not. Come, I want to show you something," said Jacob, then taking Princess Lilith by the hand and leading her to a beautiful open field 10 minutes away from his home. He then sat her down and began to perform all sorts of amazing tricks with 6 blue balls. After watching a 15-minute performance by Jacob, the princess applauded him, for she was fully entertained. "I have a secret that you must promise to keep," said Jacob, now becoming very serious as he took a seat beside the princess. "Your secret is safe with me," responded Lilith in a tone that made a futile attempt to maintain the lightened mood created by Jacob's performance. "I do not wish to be a knight like my father," revealed Jacob. Noticing the sudden gasp that took hold of Lilith, he got up to his feet and turned his back to her. "Now that you know this, do you think any less of me?" asked Jacob, already preparing himself to lose a friend. "No, of course not. I just think you'd make a great knight," said Lilith as she rose to her feet and gently placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Maybe, but I'd rather make people happy than dedicate my life to the battlefield," pointed out Jacob passionately. Sir Hymer was right. Jacob did win over the prince's heart, but he didn't do so by slaying dragons or conquering armies. He did so by sharing his passion for making people smile. As time went on, they both became fond of each other, beyond the realm of plain friendship. While Nathaniel tried to impress the princess by proving his worth as a warrior, Jacob successfully wooed her with flowers and poetry. 2 years later, Jacob, in an effort to fill his lover's heart with happiness, ventured into the dark regions outside the Nale kingdom to get the rarest and most beautiful flower. Unknown to him, removing the flower from its root was the key to unlocking the evil sorcerer Aiden from a prison created by Elzador. When Jacob took the flower, Aiden, as an old and insane-looking man, emerged from the earth naked. Aiden's eyes glowed with joy and evil as he had the intention to murder young Jacob, but his weakened state did not allow him to act on his desire. Jacob never forgot the eyes of the evil sorcerer, and yet kept the whole incident to himself, until the day he found out that that very same sorcerer took the life of his father while attempting to take over the Nale kingdom. Jacob never forgave himself. The only thing that kept his sanity intact was Princess Lilith's love. The princess's dreamlike state was broken, as she again heard someone climb up her bedroom window. Lilith then ran and hugged Jacob as he climbed through her window dressed in his own personal battle gear. "My love, I am so sorry, but we can't leave this night," informed Jacob gently. "We can't?" responded the princess, disappointed for the second time that evening. "Lilith, my love, if anything happens to me, promise me you will not stop yourself from finding love elsewhere," asked Jacob, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst. Lilith, after staring her lover in the eyes, gave him a passionate kiss. "Now you promised me 2 things. The first thing is that you take care of Nathaniel, and the second thing is that you come back alive," said Princess, unable to give in to her lover's request. Jacob, now very sure he had found the only woman he would love, looked Lilith in the eyes and said, "I promise." Wearing his full armor, while carrying his father's shield like a modern backpack, along with his enchanted sword, Nathaniel rode on the path to the sorcerer's fortress on a strong white steed. Then, with no warning at all, a rope was pulled across the path, tripping Nathaniel and his horse to the ground. As Nathaniel got to his feet, ensuring there were no cuts or bruises, he found himself surrounded by over 30 kazars, a race of scavengers that were half man, half cat. They had long razor-sharp claws and moved at an incredible speed. Nathaniel, not even flinching at the fact that he was outnumbered, drew out his sword and prepared for battle. The head of the small Kazarian army gave out a shrieking battle cry, which signaled all his men to attack. The kazars began to attack without mercy, but Nathaniel was a top Nale knight, trained to face almost any kind of foe. Nathaniel sliced, kicked, flung, punched, and headbutted his way through almost half the kazars that attacked him. But in the end, there were too many, all possessing mind-blowing speed. And he was just one man. An hour later, Nathaniel gained consciousness in a giant bird-like cage that was being pushed into a giant sandy area by a small and weak-looking Kazarian boy. When the cage got to the center of the area, the mutant child unlocked the door of the knight's prison and ran out of the arena, with 2 thick metal gates closing behind him. Nathaniel got out of the cage and observed the fact that he was standing in the middle of an arena surrounded by thousands of Kazarian people. Sitting on a throne in the midst of its people was a Kazarian king, a 10-foot lion that stood like a man with large hawk-like wings. From the crowd, the knight's weapons that were confiscated during his capture were thrown to him. As Nathaniel wasted no time in arming himself, another thick metallic gate set in front of him opened, and through it walked a gigantic Kazarian male. Like a true warrior, Nathaniel hid his fear well, but it was clear he had been kidnapped to fight for the amusement of this crowd around him. The monstrous-looking foe began to charge at the seamless, fearless knight, who had already braced himself for impact with his father's shield. Then, without warning, a silver metallic boomerang shot through the air and decapitated Nathaniel's opponent before spinning back to its owner, which was Jacob, who caught it as he galloped through the arena gate on a strong black steed. Needing no instructions, the young knight leaped on the back of Jacob's horse as it took a U-turn past him and galloped out of the way it came in. Chased by almost an entire Kazarian army, Jacob and Nathaniel had already begun to head towards the exit of the Kazarian territory. The chase ended when Jacob's horse leaped over a wall of fire the young noble warrior had created earlier. Knowing very well kazars feared intense heat, Jacob then paused the movement of his horse and glanced at the success of his trap. But before he could continue his ride into retreat, both warriors were struck off the horse with one powerful blow from the Kazarian king. As both men struggled to get to their feet, their feline attacker swooped down with a double clothesline, which threw both warriors violently to the ground. Lying flat on his face, Jacob through the side of his eye sighted the mutant moving in for another attack. Then, with impeccable timing, he leaped up from the ground, taking the large kazar by surprise, and slashed it across the chest with his boomerang, causing the creature to give a loud roar of pain. Nathaniel, also aware of the attacker's movement, took this opportunity to drive his sword through the Kazarian king. Then, wasting no time, both men continued their retreat, leaving the huge kazar to face its demise in the midst of flames. It was an hour before Jacob stopped riding to allow his horse to quench its thirst at a stream. "Much time has been wasted," said Nathaniel as he observed the sky and noticed the fact it was getting dark. He then turned to Jacob and said, "From here on it gets very dangerous. It's best you turn back." Did you realize that before or after I saved your life? Sarcastically responded Jacob, not believing the nerve of the young knights. I'm grateful for your efforts, but there is greater evil to face up ahead, pointed out Nathaniel with a sense of superiority. Look, the path to the evil sorcerer's fortress has become more dangerous since you last walked it. Elzador sent me to guide you through it because I grew up in the countryside and I know my way around areas like these. Okay, you can accompany me, but you must not slow me down. Both men then made camp by the stream and continued their journey the next morning, with Nathaniel assuming command of Jacob's horse without even asking. Take that path, advised Jacob. Why? The sorcerer's fortress is in the opposite direction. Yes, but Elzador said all our clothing and weapons must be touched by the waters on top of the Hilarion mountain. Nathaniel, unable to argue with any sentence that had the name Elzador in it, listened to the words of young Jacob. After more than an hour of riding, the knight suddenly stopped Jacob's horse. What is that? Nathaniel then asked, pointing to a black unicorn with large wings at its sides, along with 2 piercing red eyes. Quick, get away from that thing, instructed Jacob, recognizing the beast even though it stood more than 100 meters away from them. Nathaniel, reading the panic in Jacob's voice, obeyed, but it was too late. The dark-colored unicorn took to the air and began to pursue them. What is it? Again asked Nathaniel as he made Jacob's horse move as fast as possible. That, my friend, is a demonic creature known as Death's Steed. My father once encountered it on his travels. It is said the creature can kill you with a simple touch. Well, it seems to be catching up with us. Is there any way we can kill it? Asked Nathaniel, sensing the horse would get tired before the demonic unicorn. The only thing that can vanquish this creature is an enchanted weapon, but our weapons have not yet been touched by the waters of the Hilarion mountain. My sword was made enchanted by Elzador as I was given my knighthood, informed Nathaniel, instantly inspiring Jacob with a plan. Head back towards me after 20 meters, ordered Jacob. What? Cried out Nathaniel, but before he could realize what Jacob was up to, the noble warrior drew Nathaniel's sword and leaped up into a tree as the knight rode past it. Still being chased by Death's Steed, Nathaniel remembered Jacob's instruction and avoided the demonic horse as he skillfully rode towards the brave warrior after he rode 20 meters away from him. As Nathaniel rode past the tree Jacob jumped into, the noble warrior leaped out and cut off the head of the demonic steed that was in pursuit of the knight. As Jacob's feet touched the ground, the threat of Death's Steed was no more. The presence of Death's Steed means much evil has been released onto this world, said Jacob to himself as he stared down the path that lay before him and his new comrade. Almost 2 hours after the encounter with the dark unicorn, Jacob and Nathaniel reached the foot of the Hilarion mountain. Now what? Impatiently asked Nathaniel. We climb it. You don't have a problem with that now, responded Jacob, ensuring the knight was as capable of rock climbing as he was. No, not at all, lied Nathaniel, hiding the fact he had a slight fear of heights. Almost an hour later, Jacob eventually made it to the top of the mountain. There it is, the well that holds the mystic waters, said Jacob, pointing to a very ordinary-looking well, about 10 meters away from where he stood, as Nathaniel struggled to climb the last bit of the mountain. Then, out of nowhere, before Nathaniel could catch his breath, a giant prehistoric-looking bird, bearing the colors of an eagle, swooped down and knocked both warriors off their feet. Before he even understood the nature of his attacker, Jacob found himself holding on to Nathaniel, who was by now dangling off the cliff. Jacob looked back and spotted the giant bird flying towards him for another attack. Despite their cliff-hanging predicament, Jacob, thinking of only one solution, turned to the knight and shared it. I'm going to let go. What? Screamed out the knight, unable to see the fruit of Jacob's plan. But before he could get his say, Jacob let go of his hand, causing him to fall several feet before managing to hold on to a little ledge of the mountain. Meanwhile, back on top, Jacob stayed out of harm's way by moving around the mountain bird with his extraordinary agility. At one point, Jacob managed to throw his weapons into the well, giving the prehistoric-looking animal the opportunity to strike him to the floor with its wing. The bird, with the intent to snap Jacob in two with its beak, flew towards the dazed warrior. But taking the feathered foe by surprise, Nathaniel, fresh from reclimbing a quarter of the mountain, leaped onto the monster and drove its sword into its back, causing the creature to give out a loud cry of pain. Jacob, recovering from the giant bird's attack, retrieved his newly enchanted staff from the well. He then leaped up into the air and used it to shatter the skull of the vicious attacker. After watching the giant bird fall to the ground dead, both men wasted no time in dipping all their weapons and clothing into the waters of the mystic well. "I don't believe you let go," complained Nathaniel as he put on his armor that was now enchanted. "I hinted what my intention was before I dropped you, for I knew a simple warning would be more than enough to set off your survival instincts," explained Jacob, who then suddenly got an uneasy feeling. "We must cover ground quickly," pointed out Jacob, as he and the knight prepared themselves to climb down the mountain, for he could somehow sense Aiden's joy at the awakening of Thorax. Nathaniel's eagerness to get off high ground gave him a couple of minutes head start over Jacob. As the knight's feet touched the ground, he was greeted with a strong wind, which, if not for his armor and clothing that were now touched by the Hilarion waters, would have thrown him violently to the ground. The wind, moving like it was alive, gathered itself into a large whirlwind, uprooted the nearby tree and flung it at the knight. Nathaniel, who had been using his hands as cover to prevent dust from flying into his eyes, just about managed to roll out of the way of the incoming tree. As he got to his feet, Nathaniel fell into hand-to-hand combat with the winged hazelite, an athletically built Caucasian male wearing only a pair of brown peasant trousers. Nathaniel was well built and had mastered a fighting style that had cleverly combined the art of boxing and wrestling. However, the winged hazelite not only controlled the wind, but the hazelite moved like it as well. Nathaniel was no match for him, for after a 5-minute attempt, the knight was floored by his supernatural opponent. Witnessing Nathaniel's defeat, Jacob leaped at the hazelite from 11 feet up the mountain with an aerial kick that struck the demonic being continuously across several meters. On the 8th meter, the hazelite grabbed Jacob by the leg and threw him into the side of the mountain. Before the demonic being could follow up its counterattack, Nathaniel got to his feet and swung his sword at the hazelite. Avoiding the knight's attack with a series of slick movements, the demonic being finally disarmed Nathaniel with a solid punch to his chest. As Nathaniel dropped to his knee in pain, the hazelite kicked up the young knight's sword and began to pursue his original plan. Jacob, now fully recovered from the hazelite's assault, flipped to his feet and sighted the demonic being approaching him with Nathaniel's sword. Jacob responded by drawing out his staff and displaying several artistic rotations before finally stopping in his combat stance. Hazelite began its merciless attack, and despite the weight of the knight's sword, was still able to move as gracefully as Jacob did at an incredible speed. After a 15-minute battle between Jacob and the hazelite, no one had the upper hand. The hazelite's incredible strength and speed kept Jacob at bay, while Jacob's agility and impeccable combat skills kept the young warrior away from harm. Finally, Jacob found the opportunity he needed as the hazelite took a powerful swing at him with Nathaniel's sword. Jacob jumped over the attack, at the same time striking his foe on the head with his newly enchanted staff. The hazelite, dazed by the attack, began to get struck continuously by the noble warrior. Jacob, now having full advantage over the elemental fiend, struck the knight's sword out of its hand. Nathaniel in turn caught his sword and decapitated the evil hazelite as it staggered back. The evil being's body then turned into dust and flew off with a light breeze. After a short recuperation, Jacob and Nathaniel began to make their way back onto the path leading to the evil sorcerer's fortress. "What's your story? You're obviously a great warrior, so why be the royal fool?" asked Nathaniel. "Jester," corrected Jacob. "Whatever, why?" "When I was 10, some outlaws attacked my family's home. Naturally, my dad, being the man and warrior of the house, protected me and my mother. That day, I saw a side of him I had never seen before. He fought like a wild animal, and the scary thing was, he seemed to be enjoying himself. As I watched my father kill every one of those men, I knew I wanted no part of such an existence," said Jacob, certain his story would justify the path he chose in life. "You watched your warrior defend his family in battle? If anything, that should inspire you to be a warrior," pointed out Nathaniel. "How about you? Why did you decide to be a knight?" asked Jacob, at this point giving up on making Nathaniel see his point of view. "My father once told me the battlefield was the best place for a man to prove his worth. I believed him." "My father told me the same thing. I didn't agree with him." "Why not?" asked Nathaniel. "Because every war man has ever fought has never been on the basis of complete reasoning." "Really? You know what I think? I think it's insane for a grown man to be oblivious to the fact we live in an imperfect world, where men like you and me have to stand up and fight for our beliefs." As the conversation ended on that note, the two young men rode up to the entrance of the Colithian forest, which was now part of the only route left to Aiden's fortress. "It is best we continue our journey on foot," pointed out Jacob as he jumped off his horse. "Why?" asked Nathaniel, unconvinced such a move was necessary. Aiden expects Nale to send warriors to vanquish his evil. It is best we move unnoticed through the forest, explained Jacob. Nathaniel, giving in to Jacob's plan, hesitantly jumps off the horse. Both men then began their journey through the forest on foot. Be on the lookout for fruits or vegetables. We will need to keep our strength up as we journey on, Ali announced Jacob as he and the young knight continued their trek. Nathaniel suddenly stopped Jacob quietly and drew his attention to a frightened little girl, about 8, with long red hair and innocent-looking green eyes. The girl, who wore a dirty white dress, looked frightened and upset as she stood still in an opening of the forest. As the warriors approached the seemingly distressed girl, they noticed what seemed to be a very large and deep trench dug around her. "Hey there, little one. Is everything okay?" asked Nathaniel, trying to make her feel secure. She replied his question with a nod that said no. "Why don't you jump over to us so we can help you get home?" said Nathaniel, trying to gain the girl's trust, but the girl didn't move. It were as though she was scared to move outside the area created by the trench. "Okay, I'll come over there and get you. Is that okay?" asked Nathaniel. But there was no response from the little girl, who still seemed scared. Nathaniel then proceeded to leap over the trench to land by the side of the little girl. "Wait!" yelled out Jacob, sensing something wasn't right, but it was too late. Nathaniel had already made his jump. As the knight's feet touched the ground, there came a rumbling sound as the whole area began to quake. This prompted both warriors to draw out their weapons. Then, from out of the ground, a giant mole-like creature with long razor-sharp claws and teeth violently emerged out of the ground. The beast then thrust its claws at the young knight as the monster sighted him beside its launch. Nathaniel blocked the attack with his sword, causing the creature to shatter its claws on the sword's enchanted blade. The creature, now frightened, quickly submerged back into the ground. Wasting no time at all, Nathaniel took the girl in his arms and leaped out of the area created by the monster. "What the hell was that?" asked Nathaniel as he returned back to the side of his comrade. The area began to quake again as the monster began to burrow towards the young men. Nathaniel and Jacob responded by running as fast as they could. "Split up!" yelled Jacob as both men ran up to a crossroad. Nathaniel, with the girl still in his hands, complied by taking the right path as Jacob took the left. The mole creature continued to pursue Jacob, and as it began to catch up with the noble warrior, it leaped out of the ground in an effort to pounce on him. Jacob responded by leaping back and executing a spinning attack with his staff, striking the creature hard on its chin. The creature, unable to withstand the force of Jacob's enchanted staff, fell to the ground unconscious with a loud thud. "Good work," complimented the young knight as he and the little girl approached Jacob, who was by now out of breath. "Did you find out where she was from?" asked Jacob. "I don't think she can speak," informed Nathaniel. "She's probably a bit traumatized," assumed Jacob, as he watched the little girl walk up to him and tug on his sleeve. "I think she wants to show us something," said Nathaniel, noticing the little girl trying to lead Jacob by the hand. The two warriors then proceeded to follow the little girl, who led them deep into an uncharted area of the forest, where they came to a simple-looking village made up of huts and farms. As the young girl led the warriors through the entrance of the village, all the villagers rushed out to give them a warm welcome. They, like their village, were simple-looking and were all dressed in rags. "Olas, your daughter has returned!" cried out one of the villagers, causing a well-built middle-aged man to run out of one of the huts. It was obvious he was the little girl's father, for he had passed down to her most of his facial features. "Thank you for bringing her back," thanked Olas. "It was nothing," said Nathaniel, who was obviously enjoying the attention. "She shouldn't be wandering the forest on her own," pointed out Jacob, not at all interested in the villagers' praises. "You're right. You see, I took her along on a hunting trip and she wandered off. With all the things that lurk in this forest, it's a miracle you were able to bring her back in one piece. I guess the gods are smiling on us. We have to be on our way now," said Jacob. "Wait, at least let us repay you with a feast. You seem to have been embarking on a long journey. It's only fair we provide you a means to eat and rest," insisted Olas, stopping the warriors from leaving. Olas succeeded in persuading Nathaniel and Jacob to rest and eat in his village. That evening, the village threw a light celebration that involved eating, drinking, and a lot of dancing around the campfire. The quest at hand had made it impossible for Jacob to relax, causing him to spend most of the evening sitting down on his own. Nathaniel, on the other hand, had no problem in joining in with the festivities. "I'm going to ease myself. "I'll be right back," informed Nathaniel, making his whereabouts known to Jacob. The young knight then proceeded to walk up to a quiet, grassy area where he proceeded to urinate. As he headed back to the party, one of the villagers emerged from the shadows and approached him. The villager was a young woman with long black hair and stunning brown eyes. The fact that she wore rags did nothing to hinder her beauty. "Hey there," greeted the young woman. "Hey," replied Nathaniel, lost for words as the intensity of her beauty mesmerized him. "You're very handsome," complimented the woman. "Thank you," said Nathaniel, just about managing not to stammer. The young woman then walked up to the knight and gave him a passionate kiss, but halfway through it, Nathaniel pushed her away. "I'm sorry. My heart belongs to someone else," explained Nathaniel. The woman reacted by striking the knight hard across the face, a strike that was so hard it spun him to the ground. As the knight lay on the ground, recovering from the woman's attack, he noticed the woman's appearance had altered. She had grown long, sharp fangs and her skin had become green and scaly. The woman proceeded to try and crush the young warrior with her foot, but Nathaniel quickly reacted and rolled out of the way. As the knight flipped to his feet, the woman began to engage him in hand-to-hand combat. Nathaniel soon discovered firsthand that his opponent possessed incredible strength, as one of her blows threw him 5 feet through the air before he hit the ground hard. The young knight, fueled mainly by adrenaline, drew his sword as he rose to his feet. The woman ran at him to attack once again, but the blade of his enchanted sword greeted her this time. As Nathaniel's sword struck the woman, her body burnt up almost instantaneously. Back near the fire, Jacob still sat alone, calmly drinking on some wine. Nathaniel, fresh from his fight, took a seat beside the comrade as though nothing had happened, in an attempt to avoid attention. "Jacob, these people are dangerous," said Nathaniel quietly. "I know," said Jacob, still remaining very calm. "You know? Since when?" said Nathaniel, almost about to raise his voice above a whisper. "They are egax. My father told me of these people. They are an ancient tribe cursed by an evil sorceress to live off the flesh of others for the rest of their days." "If you knew all this, then why accept Ola's invitation?" asked Nathaniel, now feeling very uneasy. "When in doubt, stay calm and trust your reflexes." "What?" "It's a piece of advice my father gave when training me for combat. I knew if we had turned down Ola's offer, the whole village would have attacked us there and then. There is no way we would have survived in our exhausted condition, so I took the offer, knowing very well we would be provided with food and a chance to rest." "Okay, that's a very clever plan, but I feel we have had enough rest," insisted Nathaniel. "They don't intend to feed on us until morning. If we leave now, it would only arouse suspicion," pointed out Jacob. "Jacob, I just killed one of them." "In that case, we should leave immediately." But as both warriors rose to their feet, Olas approached them. "Is everything all right?" asked Olas as the whole village began to surround the young men. "Everything is fine. Why do you ask?" answered Jacob as he and the knight pathetically pretended to be ignorant of any threats. "Well, it looked like you were both leaving in a hurry," said Olas as he and the villagers revealed their true forms. "Kill the leader and they all fall," informed Jacob calmly, then ducking, enabling Nathaniel to swing his sword over him and decapitate Olas. This provoked the villagers to attack without mercy, putting both warriors' combat skills to the test. Nathaniel, with his excellent use of the sword, began to slay egax after egax. "They are still attacking," yelled out Nathaniel, who had now begun to make use of his shield as well as his sword. "Olas wasn't the leader. We need to find the leader," cried out Jacob as he artistically worked his way through the mob of demonic beings with his enchanted staff. Jacob, in the heart of battle, then noticed the villagers were putting their lives down to give Olas's little girl protection. "The girl!" yelled out Jacob, which in turn prompted Nathaniel to slash through the little girl's bodyguards. As the knight bravely attempted to move in for the kill, Ola's daughter smiled as she used an invisible force to throw Nathaniel to the floor. She then transformed into a giant lizard creature that stood like a man. At this point, all the villagers stopped fighting. It was almost as if they stopped fighting out of respect for their leader. The giant lizard creature gave out a loud roar-like sound as it made a move to finish off the young knight. Jacob, now only focusing on acting quickly, threw his enchanted boomerang at Nathaniel's attacker. The lizard creature avoided the razor-sharp boomerang by moving to the side, giving the knight enough time to come out of his daze and stab the creature in the foot. As the creature yelled out in pain, he was unable to move out of the way of Jacob's enchanted boomerang while it spun back towards him. as the noble warrior's enchanted weapon cut through the leader of the egax. One by one, all its followers began to burn up. By the time daylight came, Jacob and Nathaniel had already resumed their journey through the forest. "I'm unfamiliar with this area of the forest," announced Jacob as he stopped to figure out where they were. "For someone who is meant to be my guide, hearing you say that isn't very comforting," remarked Nathaniel, using Jacob's pause in movement as an excuse to sit down and rest. Jacob then looked up and noticed the clouds in the sky were grey and restless. "A storm is heading our way. We must find shelter," said Jacob, continuing his way down a path at a fast pace. Both men got caught in the rain and walked for a good hour before finally coming to a set of caves in another unfamiliar area of the forest. "We will have to stay here until the storm passes," verbally noted Jacob. "Look, it seems other travelers have used these caves as shelter," said Nathaniel, observing physical evidence that a campfire had been made in a cave not so long ago. "Good. Then there's a possibility we might find someone to direct us through the forest," pointed out Jacob. "We should scout the cave for twigs we could use to make a fire. Anything outside will be too wet to burn," suggested Nathaniel. Jacob, agreeing, followed the knight on his search for twigs. They had ventured deep into the caves and gathered more than enough twigs when they came to an area of the cave where hundreds of people lay fast asleep. "What is this?" said Jacob, as he and his comrades stood confused by what they saw. Nathaniel dropped all he was carrying and attempted to wake a number of people up, but his efforts were in vain. The people they saw were asleep, but it seemed impossible to wake them up. "I know this place," said Nathaniel as he approached his fellow warrior. "What do you mean?" inquired Jacob. "My father once told me of a cave inhabited by evil spirits that attack you only in your dreams. He said if they manage to kill you in your dream, you will fall into an eternal slumber." "We better return back to the entrance," said Jacob, now feeling uncomfortable about staying in the cave. Both men returned to the entrance and set up a campfire. They were now approaching the evening, and there was no sign the storm was dying down anytime soon. "Looks like we'll have to spend the night here," said Jacob as he lay down near the fire. "The spirits will attack us in our dreams if we sleep here," reminded Nathaniel. "My belief is spirits cannot hurt you. They can only make you hurt yourself. My advice to you is believe yourself and ignore their lies," said Jacob, knowing full well spending the night in the cave was their only real option. Minutes later, both men were asleep, and their subconscious had merged with the dream world. Nathaniel found himself standing in the middle of the Nale royal hall. The knight looked around and noticed his father sitting on the king's throne. "Father, what's going on?" asked Nathaniel. "You're pathetic. You call yourself a knight? Ha! That's a joke," responded Nathaniel's father. "What are you talking about?" asked Nathaniel, now very confused. "Despite what you think or what people have told you, you are no warrior. You're just a lucky young man seeking glory. A true warrior will seek honor. Look at you. Even the royal fool has shown more grit in a couple of days than you have in your whole life." "No, father. I have proven myself worthy of knighthood on countless occasions. I am every bit the warrior and man you were, and I don't need you or anyone else to tell me that," defied Nathaniel in a loud tone. "So you think you're a warrior? If that's the case, you'll have no problem proving it," said the knight's father as a giant being made out of solid rock holding a large sword burst out of the hall's floor. Meanwhile, in Jacob's dream, the noble warrior found himself as a 15-year-old standing on a field in front of his home. Confused, Jacob looked around and suddenly found himself standing in front of his father. "You're a coward for not embracing your destiny as a knight of the Nale kingdom," said Sir Haima. "My destiny is mine and mine alone. I will mold it any way I please," said Jacob, defiant to his father's statement. "You dare speak back to your father?" yelled out Sir Haima, then proceeding to strike Jacob with his hand continuously. After getting struck about 7 times, out of sheer rage, Jacob retaliated with a blow that floored his father on impact. "Father, I'm sorry," said Jacob, regretting his action as he attempted to help his father back up to his feet, but instead found himself helping his mother up. "I am very ashamed of you, son. Not only did you cause your father's death, but you have also dishonored his memory by not becoming a knight and avenging his death," said Jacob's mother, then attacking Jacob furiously with immense speed. Jacob tried to defend himself, but his combat skills seemed nowhere near enough. Back in Nathaniel's dream, the knight had begun to put his excellent skills as a swordsman to the test, as a rock creature attacked viciously with a series of attacks. Nathaniel kept blocking with extreme style and grace, at the same time advancing towards the monster. Until finally, the knight was presented with an opportunity he wasted no time in taking, which was the opportunity to strike his opponent hard across the chest with his sword. Nathaniel then spun back, expecting to see his opponent fall to the ground. Instead, the stone covering the being's body shattered, now revealing a body made out of pure steel that seemed impenetrable. Nathaniel, in turn, staggered back in shock and dismay. That's just like you to let fear take control when the odds are against you. You're no warrior, you're a coward, said Nathaniel's father distastefully. Meanwhile, in Jacob's dream, the noble warrior was receiving what seemed to be the most artistic beating of his life. At one point, Jacob was thrown violently to the ground by his mother. There is no way you can win. I practically taught you everything you know, which isn't even a quarter of what I know, taunted Jacob's mother confidently. As he heard what seemed to be his mother utter those words, a flashback of a training exercise she held with him came flooding back. It was a sunny afternoon, and 13-year-old Jacob was sparring with his mother. It was one of the most frustrating moments of young Jacob's life, for no matter what he did, his mother kept taking him down to the floor. "Focus, son," advised his mother. "I am focusing, but you're a kung fu master and I'm your student. It's not possible for me to win," lamented young Jacob. "Son, combat isn't just about how many moves you have under your belt. It's about timing and strategy. The best strategies can consist of the most basic of moves," said Jacob's mother in an effort to inspire him. Now remembering the true image of his mother, Jacob rose to his feet and said, "You are not my mother, and I will avenge my father's death." The image of his mother smiled as she moved in for another wave of attack. Jacob, this time mapping his opponent's movements, began striking all the attacks thrown his way with both his hands and legs. Image of his mother then attempted to rush into the noble warrior, who in turn spun out of the way and executed a back kick. This caused the image of Jacob's mother to stagger back, giving Jacob all the time he needed to strike her continuously. Back in Nathaniel's dream, the being now made of solid steel had begun to attack the knight without mercy. Nathaniel, just about surviving the attacks, at one point blocked the monster's sword with his own. The steel being in turn kicked the knight to the floor. As he hit the ground, Nathaniel suddenly remembered the words of his comrade. "Believe in yourself and ignore the lies." The steel warrior continued to advance and attempted to crush the knight with its entire body. Nathaniel reacted by quickly rolling out of the way and slicing off one of his opponent's legs while on his knees. The steel being, now without a leg, began to fall to the ground. Nathaniel, wasting no time at all, decapitated the being as it headed towards the floor. As both warriors gave their opponents their final blows, a flash of light brought them back to reality, where it was now morning and the sky was clear. As Jacob and Nathaniel walked out of the Colithian forest, they came to a stream. There they cleaned up, rested, and ate the rest of their fruits. 2 hours later, they continued their journey and walked on for more than 5 miles before stopping. "This must be the volcano Crichton talked of," said Jacob as he and the knight stopped to look at a volcano that seemed a generation away from eruption. "So we're on the right track," pointed out Nathaniel, as he and his comrade began to make a move to walk around it as instructed. As the young men got halfway around the volcano, there was a huge earthquake and hot molten lava began to flow out of the volcano. "Quick, we have to make it to the other side," pointed out Jacob as both men began to move as quickly as possible under the chaotic conditions. But the lava moved fast in an unnatural way and surrounded the two warriors. The lava began to give out a visible purple signature, like it had been charged with electricity, as from the lava, a gigantic black dragon creature with a snake-like body and large bat wings, along with red glowing eyes, emerged. As both men slowly took a step back, Jacob noticed a giant black scorpion-like creature with razor-sharp teeth emerge from the lava behind them. Both warriors, now back-to-back, had only one option: kill or be killed. The dragon lunged forward at the warriors to literally take a bite out of them. Nathaniel rolled out of the way and fell into one-to-one combat with the scorpion creature. Jacob, however, leaped out of the way with a straddle jump, at the same time striking the creature on the head hard with his staff. The noble warrior then used his long weapon to gain momentum to land on the creature's dazed head. The dragon, recovering from the warrior's attack, then literally began to chase Jacob with its head along its own body. Meanwhile, Nathaniel with his shield intercepted a toxic acidic substance spat out of the scorpion creature. The monster then leaped forward with its head, with the intent to put its sharp teeth into the knight. This caused Nathaniel to constantly fall backwards and get scratched across the right side of his face by the monster's tail. The monster then attacked with his tail for the second time. This time, Nathaniel stopped the attack with his shield and then cut the most potent part of it off with his sword. This caused the monster to give out a loud roar, revealing the fact it was now in agony. At this point, Jacob ran down the dragon's body and leaped off its tail and ended up beside his valiant comrade. The dragon then began to breathe fire at the warriors, who in turn leaped out of the way in opposite directions, allowing the stream of fire to hit the scorpion monster and cause it to melt back into the lava it emerged from. Jacob, who had by now got to his feet, flung his boomerang at the dragon creature and took out one of its eyes. This caused the dragon to throw a tantrum, provoked by the pain it was now in. Nathaniel at this point leaped on the mad creature's back and dug his sword into it. The knight then jumped off the monster's back seconds before it began to melt into molten lava. All the lava gathered itself together like it was some kind of organic entity and began to rush towards the Nale warriors, who could only react by running. Jacob and Nathaniel found themselves being chased by a tidal wave of molten lava. Before the warriors could run completely around the volcano, the ground in front of them cracked open, creating a grand canyon that was thousands of feet deep into the earth, meaning now there was up to about 5 meters of thin air between the young warriors and safety. Seeing no other choice, both men took a chance and jumped. Jacob just about made it to the other side with both his feet touching the ground. Nathaniel, however, wasn't as nimble and just about managed to hold on to the ledge of the other side. As Jacob helped the knight up, he watched a wave of liquid fire flow into the canyon that was created for their demise. Seconds after both men made it to the other side safely, Jacob and Nathaniel sat on the floor, thanking their stars they were still in one piece. Both warriors soon found they were too quick to think the threat they had just faced was a distant memory. For while they were still trying to gather their thoughts, the liquid fire blasted out of the canyon and created a high wall of fire that separated the two warriors from each other. Nathaniel at this point was now on edge, but before he could even make a move, a being made out of pure fire emerged from the wall. The inflamed figure transformed into an oriental-looking man that had packed his tail into a long ponytail. He was similar in build as Jacob and wore an outfit similar to Nathaniel's. It was the hazelite of fire, and after doing battle with the warriors using pure sorcery, it had decided to opt for a divide and conquer approach. Hazelite, with a Bruce Lee-like persona, began its attack. The demonic being was fast and strong. Nathaniel tried to defend himself against the ground and aerial attacks coming his way, but all his efforts were futile. After striking Nathaniel with up to 11 hits, the Hazelite leaped into the air to kick the knight in the head. Out of sheer anger and frustration, the young knight grabbed the demonic being's attacking leg and threw the Hazelite to the floor. As the being spun to his feet, he caught a glimpse of Nathaniel drawing his sword. The Hazelite evened up things by creating a sword made out of flames. The knight, unshaken by the evil being's powers, gave out a loud cry and advanced with an attack. The Hazelite was an incredible fighter, and Nathaniel's skill as a swordsman was close to impeccable. In just a few moments, a great deal of speed and combat skills were displayed. At one point, the Hazelite somersaulted over one of Nathaniel's attacks. Without even looking at his opponent, Nathaniel responded by blocking an attack from behind with his sword, and then opened up the evil being as he spun round to slice the elemental fiend across the chest and abdomen. Stunned by pain, the fire Hazelite paused for a second. A second was all the young knight needed, for he took that opportunity to drive his sword right through the evil being. "Tell your master his days are numbered," said Nathaniel as he looked the Hazelite right in the eyes before it became dust and blew off with the wind. After a good night's sleep, the two young men carried on with their journey. They worked for hours on end until finally towards sundown, the harbor was now visible. "We're too late," announced Nathaniel, noticing more than a dozen boats setting off on sail. "Maybe not," said Jacob as he pointed to what seemed to be a large cargo ship. As the two warriors approached the boat, they noticed 18 rough-looking and able-bodied men loading it with a variety of crates, all of different shapes and sizes. "Greetings. We are both travelers on a long journey. I was wondering if it was possible if we could get a ride on your vessel," asked Jacob as he approached the men and their ship. As the men at work sighted the two young-looking warriors, they stopped loading the ship and began to approach them. "We have no money, but we will more than welcome the idea of earning our keep by working throughout our time on your vessel," continued Jacob, at this point becoming a little uneasy as the rough-looking men began to circle him and the young knight. Nathaniel looked around and smiled as he noticed that almost half the men were armed with either a stick or a knife. It was clear at this point that both Nale warriors had been targeted to be victims of an armed robbery. "Why don't you lay down all your valuables and allow us to decide how you pay your way?" said one of the rough-looking men. I know what you're trying to do, and I must tell you that your intentions are ridiculous as well as suicidal, warned Nathaniel, confident he alone was enough to take out all 18 men. As the young knight uttered those words, one of the sailors attempted to attack the young warrior from behind with a stick. Nathaniel, without even looking at his attacker, responded by countering the attack with an elbow to the sailor's sternum, which he followed up with a back fist to the face, which flung the knight's assailant to the floor. This set the pace for all the crooked sailors to attack at once. Nathaniel's brute strength made it impossible for any of his attackers to put up a decent fight, as he punched, headbutted, kneed, and flung his attackers all over the place. Jacob easily kept his attackers at bay, with mainly the use of his smooth movement combined with his accurate kicking attacks. In less than 2 minutes, the gang of crooked sailors were reduced to nothing more than a bunch of incapacitated victims, tamed by inflicted pain. You may sail with us. No payment is needed, said a young, tall, bald and hefty man with an eye patch over his left eye, as he stood on the ship that was clearly his. Dressed in a white shirt over a pair of brown trousers, the stranger had attentively watched the whole fight from where he stood. Minutes later, the ship's crew gathered themselves together and got the ship sailing off. As the ship sailed across the sea, Jacob took time to observe the waters and the beautiful scenery it contributed greatly to create. I see you like to appreciate the beauty of the ocean, said the man who welcomed the noble warrior and his comrade on board the ship. Yes, it's breathtaking. I've never traveled by sea before, admitted Jacob, comfortable with the idea of conversing with the stranger. As captain of a pirate ship, the waters have been my home since the day I took the role as a man. Tell me, great warrior, where are you and your friend going? The dark regions. The dark regions? You two must have a death wish. It's something we have to do. After watching the fight you and your companion had with all my men, I can't help but see it as a waste of 2 talented fighters to risk their lives by going to that place. But that's your choice and I will respect it. I, on the other hand, have no interest in facing almost certain doom with my crew. This is why I will take you to the Essetan region. From there, you'll be able to reach the heart of the dark regions on foot. I understand, responded Jacob sincerely. Your friend doesn't look too good, said the captain. Jacob turned to where Nathaniel sat, only to find the young knight coughing loudly and continuously, while covered in a feverish sweat. Nathaniel, are you all right? Asked Jacob as he approached his comrade with genuine concern. But Nathaniel couldn't even stop coughing long enough to respond. Instead, he fainted. With the help of the captain and some of his crew, Jacob moved Nathaniel to a cabin where he was laid in a bed. His wound has been infected with a deadly poison, informed the captain as he inspected the scar on Nathaniel's face. Is the infection serious? Asked Jacob, now getting a little worried. He may not make it, whispered the captain as he moved close to the noble warrior. Jacob, unprepared for the prospect of Nathaniel's death, took a seat beside his sick comrade. There could be a chance of saving him, but I can't make any promises, said the captain, then leaving Jacob alone in the room with Nathaniel, who seemed to be gaining consciousness. I can't believe this is it for me. I always saw myself dying in battle. It was either that or dying honorably of old age, said Nathaniel, whose voice made it very clear that his strength was deteriorating fast. Everything is going to be fine. A cure is on its way, said Jacob, in an effort to build up the potency of his comrade's fighting spirit. I at least thought I would have at least lived to tell the woman of my dreams how I felt about her, continued Nathaniel, unable to sustain any positive thoughts. Jacob, promise me 2 things. 1, you will destroy Aiden's evil, and 2, you will make sure Princess Lilith has a happy life. Jacob, now taken by Nathaniel's pessimism, held on to the knight's hand and said, I promise. As Jacob completed his vow, the captain walked into the room with a small bottle that had in it a red liquid substance. The pirate then proceeded to ensure Nathaniel drank every drop of the unknown liquid that was clearly bitter in the warrior's mouth. This will restore your strength within the hour. You will, however, need to find a cure in the next 22 days, informed the captain. As promised, Nathaniel's full strength was restored within the hour. The knight, who seemed a bit humbled by his experience, walked up to the upper deck and approached the ship's captain. I owe you my life, said the young knight. Don't worry about it. I did nothing you wouldn't have done if the situation was reversed, said the captain. If you're ever in the kingdom of Nale, and you're in need of anything, go to the royal castle wearing this, and you will get all the help you need and more," said Nathaniel as he presented the pirate a ring given to him by the king, a ring that was only given to the most revered citizens of Nale. "Thank you. I may take you up on your offer," said the captain, touched by the young man's gratitude. Suddenly, with no warning at all, a harsh thunderstorm unnaturally began. A giant prehistoric-looking sea monster then emerged from out of the water and blocked the path of the ship. As the crew worked together to steer the ship away from the creature, a being made totally of water splashed onto the ship. It was the sea hazelites. "Hand over the Nale warrior, or I will destroy you all," said the evil being in a large thundering tone. Jacob instinctively wanted to walk forward, but was held back by Nathaniel's hand. "This thing only need know one of us exists. So far on this quest, I have sustained the most injuries, so it is only right that I go forward. Remember, if anything happens to me, the fate of the kingdom lies solely in your hands," said the knight quietly. At this point, Jacob wanted to object to the knight's decision, but an echo of the words said to him by Elzador held him back. Nathaniel then drew his sword and walked forward. "I am the one you seek," cried out Nathaniel in his usual loud and confident voice. The water hazelite, saying nothing, became a large watery hand and pounced on the knight, causing both of them to fall overboard. Jacob ran to the side of the ship to visually pinpoint Nathaniel, but his effort was in vain. For as the storm passed and the sea creature returned to the depths of the sea, Sir Nathaniel vanished into the water. Pirate ship dropped the noble warrior on the shores of the Essetian region. "Continuing with this quest isn't the only option you have. I would more than welcome a fighter of your caliber as a member of my crew," offered the captain as he shook Jacob's hand. "Thank you, but I must go on. For if I fail, no one will be safe, not me, not you or anyone we love," insisted Jacob. The captain nodded his head as a sign of respect for the young warrior's decision. The pirate ship set sail and Jacob began his journey through the icy wasteland that was the Essetian region. After a day of non-stop trekking, Jacob's body had weakened considerably, for at this point he had run out of food and water. In fact, the only thing that kept him from freezing to death was his clothing that had been touched by the Hilarion waters. A wild blizzard then began to storm through the air. The storm made it almost impossible to see or even move, and to make things worse, there seemed to be absolutely nowhere for the young warrior to take cover. Recalling his father's survival training, Jacob began digging through the snowy ground beneath him. His plan was to dig a hole and take shelter in it until the storm ended. As the young warrior desperately attempted to dig through the ground, a large white yeti-like creature grabbed him by the leg and flung him to the floor. Jacob was drained of so much energy, there was nothing in him to ignite his reflexes or muster up any strength to run from the creature, let alone fight it. The noble warrior tried to get to his feet, but only got as far as his hands and knees, when the monster kicked him hard in the stomach, a kick that threw him more than 8 feet into the air. By the time he hit the ground, he was unconscious. Jacob awoke on a king-sized bed covered in silk sheets, in a large room fit for royalty. As the young warrior looked down at himself to check for wounds, he noticed he was dressed in a red, woolly robe, under which he was totally naked. Jacob was slowly getting off the bed when he noticed his original clothing and weapons arranged neatly on a chair in a corner of the room. "I see you're awake," said a cheerful-looking old man as he entered the room dressed in a long, white cotton gown-like attire. "Who are you?" asked Jacob quietly, a bit wary of his surroundings. "My name is Dolrun, and this castle is my home. Some of my servants rescued you from a wild animal while out gathering supplies," informed the stranger, still maintaining his cheerful persona. "Am I still in the Essetian region?" asked Jacob, now scared that his rescuers may have unwittingly knocked him far off course. "Yes, you are. Is everything all right?" asked the host, who seemed a bit concerned about how jumpy Jacob seemed. "I'm fine. Thank you for everything, but I must be on my way," said Jacob, using the same hastiness he used to speak to put on his clothing. "Slow down, young man. You will not get very far if you don't rest and get a proper meal in your stomach. Besides, it doesn't make sense trying to travel through the storm out there," advised Doran as he watched Jacob display his eagerness to resume his journey. Jacob, seeing sense in the stranger's words, calmed down and took a seat on the bed. Doran then clapped his hands, signaling to some of his servants to push in a large cart full of all sorts of dishes, from roast chicken to boiled rice to a variety of fruits, vegetables, soups and desserts. "Now eat up and get back your strength," advised Dolorun, then leaving the room with his servants. Jacob, who hadn't eaten in a whole day, wasn't able to resist the food placed in front of him. After feasting for a good 1 hour, Jacob decided to take a nap. Minutes later, the door to Jacob's room opened slowly, and a teenage boy peered in. After noticing the noble warrior who seemed to be fast asleep, the boy slowly began to tiptoe towards Jacob. The brown-haired and brown-eyed boy, who was wearing the same robe that was given to Jacob, stood over the noble warrior and watched him sleep. The boy then noticed Jacob's enchanted staff, which was placed beside him on the bed. The boy slowly made an attempt to grab hold of it, when without warning, Jacob, still with his eyes closed, grabbed the boy by the arm and put him in a wrist lock. "Who sent you?" asked Jacob as he lay on the bed with his eyes closed. "No one," answered the boy, who was by now very alarmed. Jacob responded by using the boy's hand to flip him onto the bed while he got to his feet. "What do you want?" asked Jacob, now pointing his staff at the boy's throat. "Nothing. I just wanted to meet another like me," said the boy, now on the verge of being terrified. Jacob looked the boy in the eye before deciding he was telling the truth. The noble warrior then put his staff away and took a seat on the chair opposite the bed. "My name is Kalian, and like you have been given the privilege to cross over in the name of purity," said the boy as he sat up on the bed he was thrown on. "Crossover? Purity?" said Jacob, not having a clue about what Kalian was talking about. "Every season, Doron picks noble individuals from all over the land to take part in this ceremony. Each individual soul is taken and then released into the realm of purity, where the soul will be one with the gods," explained Kalian with great excitement. "Wow, that sounds very exciting," said Jacob sarcastically. "I know. We only have a few hours before they come for us," said Kalian, unable to pick up the real meaning behind Jacob's words. "That's nice. I would like to sleep before the big ceremony. Would you excuse me?" "Sure, no problem," said Kalian, then leaving the room hastily. Shortly after, Jacob got all his things together and began to make a move. His aim was to find the exit of the castle and leave unnoticed. This proved to be more difficult than the noble warrior had expected, for the castle was like a labyrinth. As Jacob continued to look for his way out of Dolorun's castle, he heard the scream of a young man, which sounded like the result of a torturing session. The screams continued, and it sounded like a different person gave out each scream. Jacob decided to follow the unsettling noises and was led to a dark underground chamber. After ensuring he was out of sight, the noble warrior looked around and noticed a young boy, about Kalian's age, laid on a table that was surrounded by Dolorun and 14 of his peers. "Would you like to say anything before we bestow this great honor on you?" asked Dolorun. "I only wish to say that this is the happiest day of my life," replied the young boy. Dolorun then placed his hand on the boy's chest, and a white surge of energy began to suck out the boy's life force. This caused the boy to scream, for the process was extremely painful. As Jacob watched the ceremony, it became very clear that he stumbled onto a very dark custom. Jacob then quietly made his way back up the stairs that led him into the underground chamber. As he got to the top of the stairs, he literally came face to face with one of Dolorun's servants. Before the servant could utter a word, Jacob struck him with a headbutt and then broke his right arm. "Quietly lead me out of the castle, or I will break your other arm," said Jacob as he covered the servant's mouth to prevent him from crying out. The servant then expressed his willingness to cooperate with a nod of his head. As requested, the servant led Jacob out of the castle unnoticed. "I'm going to let go of you now. Go back in without making a sound," instructed Jacob, still covering the servant's mouth, as they both walked onto the icy Isitian landscape. As Jacob let go of the servant, the follower of Dolorun went against Jacob's orders and yelled out a warning at the castle in his mother tongue. Jacob, now very irritated, silenced the servant with a solid kick to the face. But he was too late. The servant's warning was heard, and the entrance to the castle closed behind the noble warrior. Jacob, who was safely outside the castle, at first saw no imminent danger. Suddenly, at the side of the castle, the gates of a giant cage violently swung open, and a demonic-looking polar bear, touched by evil sorcery, charged at Jacob with extreme conviction. The noble warrior reacted by attempting to release the fury of his staff, but he was unable to do so on time, for the bear disarmed him of his enchanted weapon by striking him across the chest with its powerful paw. The creature's attack threw Jacob more than 10 feet into the air. After hitting the snowy ground hard, the noble warrior noticed a wild animal moving in for the kill. Fueled by his own adrenaline, Jacob got to his knees and rolled out of the way of the bear's razor-sharp claws. As the young warrior moved out of harm's way, he noticed his staff, which laid on the floor more than 20 meters away from him. The bear, moving at an incredible speed, attempted to pounce at the noble warrior, but Jacob responded by executing a straddle jump over the creature. The polar bear continued its attack by swinging its paw at the Nale warrior in a back fist motion. Jacob avoided this attack with a backward roll, from which he fell into a series of backflips that finished off with a backward somersault to land right beside his enchanted weapon. Jacob kicked up his staff and spun it into an offensive position, just in time to take on the polar bear that had already begun to leap towards him. Jacob, having no time to show any mercy, greeted the bear in mid-air by striking it as hard as he could in the center of its head. By the time the animal hit the floor, it was dead. After his battle with the wild bear, Jacob noticed a sleigh rigged up to a pack of wolves. Wasting no time, Jacob jumped on the sleigh and rode off. As he rode past some nearby mountains, the snow that covered them came alive and began to chase him in form of a ferocious avalanche. Despite the intensity of his efforts, Jacob was unable to outrun the snowy advocate of destruction, and in a matter of minutes, he and his newly found sleigh were consumed by the roaring snow. A graveyard-like calmness then followed, and all life seemed to be lost. Then from out of the snow, the young warrior struggled to dig his way out. Because of his enchanted clothing, he was lucky enough to emerge from the avalanche's wrath without a broken bone and only a few scratches. As Jacob dusted the snow off his clothing, a being made out of solid ice slowly began to materialize from out of the snow behind him. Sensing that something was behind, the noble warrior swung around with his staff, ready for combat, only to have his weapon hit out of his hand as a hazelite of ice back-kicked him to the floor. The icy being followed up his initial attack by trying to stomp on the young warrior while he was still on the ground, but Jacob reacted by rolling out of the way and flipping up to his feet, and instantaneously fending off the Iceman attacks that consisted of well-placed punches and kicks. Jacob, using his extensive knowledge of the Eastern martial arts, fought the ice hazelite one-on-one with his bare hands. The hazelite was strong and fast, but where Jacob lacked in strength, he made up with flexibility, speed, and agility. The ice hazelite, now more than aware he was facing a formidable opponent, temporarily blinded the noble warrior by blowing a patch of fog in his eyes. This distracted Jacob only for a couple of seconds. However, in those seconds, the Iceman wasted no time in gaining the upper hand. Jacob began to get continuously struck by the demonic being until finally he was thrown to the floor with a powerful uppercut. While the young warrior lay on the floor, stricken with pain, the icy fiend began to use the snow around him to create a thick and spiky armor made out of pure ice. The armor that had merged with the hazelite's body caused the demonic being's mass to multiply 10-folds over. The hazelite of ice then leaped up into the air in an effort to crush the noble warrior with its body weight. Jacob, out of sheer desperation, reacted by quickly rolling out of the way, at the same time flinging his enchanted boomerang at the icy foe. The enchanted boomerang shattered half of the hazelite's body in mid-air. By the time the ice hazelite hit the floor seriously injured, Jacob had regained possession of his staff. In a matter of moments, the noble warrior without hesitation ended his icy assailant's existence. A day after his encounter with the ice hazelite, Jacob walked into Death Valley, a dark, desolate wasteland with a sky coated with thunder and lightning. As he walked into the valley, Jacob came to a black leafless tree. On top of it, he noticed an old, short, skinny and dirty-looking man dressed in rags. The man had long grey hair, insane-looking eyes, and an ape-like posture. "Excuse me, could you tell me the quickest way to get to the center of the dark regions?" asked Jacob, who had been brought up never to judge people by how they looked. But the dirty and insane-looking man responded with a laugh that convinced even Jacob he was a man incapable of reason. Jacob's response was a look that said, "What's your problem?" The bad man then leapt at Jacob with a drop-kick-like attack. Jacob moved out of the way, but was taken totally unawares by a spinning fist attack. The madman followed up immediately. His body made contact with the floor. This attack caused Jacob to stagger back. The madman then struck Jacob again, this time in the stomach with a flying headbutt attack. As Jacob hit the floor, he immediately spun up to his feet and engaged his insane opponent in hand-to-hand combat. Jacob was a skilled fighter, but he found it difficult to adapt to his opponent's unorthodox, agile movements, which were backed up with incredible speed and strength. Jacob was barely able to defend himself and wasn't at all in control of the fight. At one point, the madman took hold of Jacob's staff as he struck him down with a double foot attack that took the form of a backward somersault. The madman then began to display a series of artistic rotations and movements with the young warrior's weapon. Before he knew what was happening, Jacob found himself ducking, diving, flipping and rolling out of the way of his own weapon that shattered everything in its path. Using his own agile movement, Jacob managed to get close to his insane opponent and disarm him with a solid punch. As Jacob took hold of his staff and spun it in a defensive position, the madman jumped back up to the top of the tree and began to laugh again. The madman's laughter then became louder and louder as his eyes began to glow with evil purple energy. The lightning in the sky then began to strike all around the Nale warrior. Zombies then began to emerge out of the ground until finally the noble warrior found himself surrounded by more than 10 zombies. "Attack!" yelled out the madman. Then the zombies all began to attack with some serious martial art moves. Even though they were undead, their movements were as fluid as that of any well-trained living man. Saying Jacob had his hands full at this point would have been an understatement. Luckily for him, his staff gave him an advantage. Utilizing the Shaolin pole work system, Jacob began to do battle with the zombies around him mercilessly. One blow from his staff was enough to dismantle a zombie, but for every one he destroyed, 2 would emerge. All through the gruesome attack, Jacob could hear the madman's laughter echo throughout the area. Then, a familiar-looking enchanted sword came hurling through the air and into the madman's chest. The madman gave out a loud scream before blowing up into dust. As the sword that slew the enigmatic maniac fell to the floor, all the zombies around Jacob broke down into dust. "You're alive? But how?" asked Jacob as he watched Nathaniel pick up his sword. "I don't really know. All I remember is Elzador carrying me out of the water and telling me of a witch that can cure me," explained the knight. "Was it him who removed the scar that was on your face?" asked Jacob, noticing the absence of Nathaniel's battle scar. "Yes. He also told me that because of the trauma I've been through, I don't have much time. This is why I must hurry to the northern area of the dark regions." "I will come with you," insisted Jacob. "That's not necessary. It is best you head to Aiden's domain. There I will meet up with you," suggested the young knight. "Aiden is a powerful foe that must be stopped, and you are a skilled warrior. To vanquish Aiden's evil, I will need all the help I can get. It would be foolish of me to forsake such a strong ally, for you can be the difference between life and death for our kingdom," argued Jacob passionately. "Then it is settled. You will accompany me to the northern area of the dark regions." Both men managed to travel for several hours without drawing any kind of attention. Jacob found this strange, for he expected them to face many obstacles before approaching the destination. "This must be the place," said the young knight as the warriors came to 2 large gates made of solid steel. The gates stood well over 20 feet and seemed to be the only thing standing in between them and the one who could cure Nathaniel. Nathaniel took one look at the gates and seemed sure that his enchanted sword was enough to force his way through them. But as the knight drew his sword, 2 men dressed in long black robes with a hood that covered their faces walked through the gate the way a ghost would. Jacob, who felt uneasy about the appearance of these characters, also readied his weapon. Strange men then each armed themselves from a stream of lightning, with a long-handled gimlet with a razor-sharp blade on its other end. "I don't think these guys are interested in asking any questions," commented Nathaniel. He was right, for as soon as he finished his sentence, the dark strangers attacked. Moving in a synchronized motion, the dark strangers moved at the young warriors with a butterfly kick, before unleashing the wrath of their weapons powered by their magnificent martial arts skills. Both young men, once again proving their worth as warriors, were just about managing to defend themselves, until finally the dark strangers, using their weapons for leverage, kicked the fighters from Nale, causing the 2 young men to stagger back a couple of meters. The dark strangers then moved back with an impressive mid-air spin and proceeded to spin their weapons into an offensive position. "I know that style," said Jacob, recognizing the cloaking shadow technique the opponents were utilizing. The dark strangers then began to somersault their way towards the young fighters for a second wave of attacks. "Follow my lead," yelled out Jacob as both men readied themselves to engage the dark strangers in combat. Nathaniel, yielding to the words of his comrade, ended up helping to produce a counter-combat maneuver for the opponent's mode of attack. This maneuver involved both men moving towards their foes in a circular motion around each other, allowing them to engage both opponents turn by turn, giving the dark strangers absolutely no time to adapt to any of their combat styles. This maneuver proved to be effective, for just after 5 minutes of fighting, the Nale warriors had already gained the upper hand. At this point, Jacob moved in and disarmed both dark strangers with his staff, and then allowed Nathaniel to spin into action and finish him off with 2 well-placed attacks from his enchanted sword. Nathaniel then broke through the gates with his sword and walked through the remains accompanied by Jacob. Both men then found themselves in a huge courtyard covered with sand. "I don't see any witch," observed Jacob. As the noble warriors uttered those words, a giant ogre-looking being with an equally giant axe leaped out of the sand and disarmed both men with one swing of its weapon. It then floored the Nale warriors by executing a leg sweep with its huge legs. Aiming to finish off the 2 young men, who by now were lying dazed on the floor, the being thrust its axe at them in a devastating chopping motion. Reacting quickly, both men rolled out of the way. Jacob, getting to his feet first, took hold of his boomerang and threw it at the huge fiend. but the gigantic being hit aside the approaching enchanted weapon like it was an insignificant fly. Nathaniel then ran up to the being for an unarmed attack. The being responded by swinging his axe at him. The knight, however, ducked under the attack and struck the giant fiend by leaping up with an extremely powerful uppercut that caused the monster to drop his axe and stagger back. Nathaniel, with a kung fu persona, began to strike the being with a number of kicking attacks, before finally picking up the being's axe and driving it into the monster's skull, causing the creature to hit the ground lifeless. "I've never seen you move like that," said Jacob, noticing a considerable improvement in the level of Nathaniel's agility. "What can I say? I'm a fast learner," bragged the young knight. Before the young knight could say any more, the giant being got to its feet, took the axe out of his head and morphed its right hand into a chainsaw. The warriors, noticing their weapons inconveniently lying behind it, knew the odds were against them. The being then slowly began to walk towards them. Then, without warning, the being was split in two from behind with Nathaniel's enchanted sword. Jacob was stricken by shock, before even able to give the gods thanks in his mind, for the identity of his rescuer was Nathaniel. "How can this be?" Jacob quietly uttered as he slowly and subconsciously moved into the middle of the two Nathaniels. "Get away from him, he's a fake," cried out the knight that had just saved his life. "Aiden's sorcery knows no bounds," said the knight he had just fought side by side with, indirectly claiming his authenticity. The other Nathaniel, no longer able to contain himself, ran at his look-alike knight with the enchanted sword and a battle cry. Jacob, still confused, saw no choice but to react and stopped the attacking knight with a back kick to his stomach. Jacob then followed up the attack with a roundhouse kick, which floored the attacking Nathaniel. "I can understand your confusion, but I will kill that thing, even if it means going through you," said the struck Nathaniel as he slowly got to his feet. Jacob noticed that before the struck Nathaniel spoke, he cleaned off some blood from the side of his lip. This and the fact the struck Nathaniel still possessed on his face a battle scar, which was given to him by a giant scorpion, opened Jacob's eyes to the truth. The imposter behind Jacob, noticing the noble warrior's wake-up call, revealed his true identity by transforming into his true form, which was that of Han, a slim, white, faceless and rubbery being that could mimic the form of any living creature. Han, wasting no time, began to attack the young warriors of Nale, who were now standing side by side. Han was an incredible fighter with a fighting style that embraced all the basic concepts of every fighting style in existence, but he was at a disadvantage, for he was fighting two gifted warriors whose combat skills possessed the same caliber as his. As the shapeshifter moved in for attack, Jacob, with extreme aggression, greeted him with a series of blocks and counter strikes. By standing his ground, Jacob was able to pressure the being into moving back into Nathaniel's powerful clothesline. As Han collided with the knight's attack, he turned into a liquid substance and moved out of his opponent's range. The shapeshifter then became a heavily built version of himself and leaped at the young warriors for another round. This time, Jacob and Nathaniel were absolutely no match for him, but Han had become the perfect combatant, possessing all Jacob's speed, agility and combat skills, along with Nathaniel's brute strength and merciless fighting approach. After being manhandled by the shapeshifter for a good couple of minutes, Jacob and Nathaniel drew out their weapons and moved in for another round. Jacob artistically leapt at Han with a swinging attack. Han responded by stopping the staff with his hand and kicking Jacob across several meters while still in mid-air. He then used the same leg to sweep Nathaniel to the floor before the knight could successfully attack him from behind. "Enough," said a voice, halting Han's next movement that intended to shatter the knight's skull with Jacob's staff. Han had stopped because he had heard the voice of his master, Elos, a powerful sorceress that took the form of a beautiful Caucasian female with long brown hair dressed in a long white gown. "Why did you stop? I was just getting warmed up," yelled out Nathaniel as he and his comrade got themselves together. "Really?" responded Elos, not at all impressed by the knight's fighting spirit. She then fired a bolt of purple energy that struck Jacob before he could even move and turned him into stone. "Undo your sorcery or I will kill you where you stand," demanded Nathaniel, now engulfed in a calm rage. "Even if that was possible, it wouldn't save your friend," replied Elos, who seemed rather amused by the knight's threat. Nathaniel, unable to contain his rage any longer, ran at the sorceress with the intention to slay her. Using an invisible force, Elos effortlessly disarmed the knight and suspended him in mid-air. "The passion with which you fight shows there is much honor in you," said the sorceress as she watched the knight dangle helplessly over the ground. "What do you want?" asked Nathaniel, forced to accept the harsh reality of his situation. "There was a time I roamed this world freely, as the one possessing the most powerful sorcery. No one could rival me, not even your beloved Elzador. Then, out of sheer spite, Elzador, Aiden, and an eastern priest by the name of Zeong all teamed up and imprisoned me here for all eternity. Now if I walk through those gates, I will perish," explained Elos, bearing a facial expression that made it known she was reminiscing mentally as well as verbally. "What does any of this have to do with me?" asked the knight impatiently. "The nature of my plight for centuries has caused me to love violent warriors like yourself and live off their souls. All that can change with your help." "Why should I help you? I'm on a quest to destroy an evil entity that sounds no different from you." "I am nothing like Aiden or the Hell Knight he has released. I only wish to have my freedom and live a life away from your world," replied Elos, with her temper now aroused. The sorceress then calmed herself down and continued. "All I ask is for you to help me acquire the soul of Nemesis, for that is the only thing that can free me." "Nemesis?" "He is an extremely powerful and evil being that is immune to any kind of sorcery. He is unheard of by mortals because he has been forced to live his life in solitude by the gods, and is surrounded only by a handful of minions." "Why not send your faceless slave?" "Because he is a byproduct of my sorcery and will not survive the interdimensional travel that is needed to enter Nemesis' domain." "I will not help you," said the knight defiantly. "Then you and your friend will die and your kingdom will be destroyed." "If we fail, someone else will destroy the Hell Knight," pointed out the young knight, unfazed by the sorcerer's threat. "That is untrue, for if the Hell Knight regains its full power, it will be invincible. If you fail on your quest, then we will all perish." "That means if you kill me, you're committing suicide," pointed out Nathaniel. "I will gladly take death over another century in this prison. All I'm asking is that you help me regain my freedom, so I may live a dignified life away from your world. If you do this, I will not only release your comrade, but I will grant you safe passage into Aiden's fortress." "Okay, I will help you," reluctantly responded Nathaniel, at this point seeing no way out. Elos then released her hold on the knight, causing him to drop to the ground. "The task is simple. I will open a portal into Nemesis' world, and you will find him and engage him in battle. Injure him and then push him through a portal I will open, once I sense the level of his life force fall. Any questions?" "No." "Good." The sorceress then opened an interdimensional portal and Nathaniel picked up his sword. "Remember, if you fail or try to double-cross me in any way, everything you have ever fought for will be destroyed," reminded Elos. Nathaniel took in the words of the sorceress and walked through the portal. Nathaniel then found himself in Nemesis' domain, a tropical paradise that harbored all sorts of beautiful creatures. As the portal closed behind him, the young knight noticed a beautiful deer run up to a stream and quench its thirst. The purity of the stream's water began to flood his mind with memories of his battle with the water hazelite. After hitting him off the pirate ship, the water hazelite dragged him several feet underwater. Nathaniel didn't drown because of the protection given to him by his enchanted clothing. The water hazelite, noticing Nathaniel was still alive, began to strike the knight continuously. The young warrior tried to defend himself, but the water around him retarded his movements. Even with his enchanted clothing, Nathaniel knew he wouldn't survive much longer if he kept getting hit. He had one chance, for he noticed seconds before every time the water being attacked, the watery atmosphere around him vibrated a little. As a plan came to Nathaniel, he felt the water vibrate behind him. Without even looking behind, the young warrior thrust his sword backwards into the evil being's chest, destroying its threat instantly. Nathaniel managed to swim to shore, where Han attacked him from behind and stole his sword as well as his identity. Suddenly, Nathaniel was shook out of his memories when at an incredible speed, a zebra-colored mutant rabbit that stood like a slim-built man of about 6 feet in height leaped out of the bushes and began to devour the defenseless deer using its razor-sharp claws and teeth. Nathaniel, disgusted at what he saw, reawoken his warrior instincts. The rabbit creature then sighted the knight and in one quick movement disarmed and floored the young warrior before he could even twitch a muscle. By the time Nathaniel had got to his feet, determined to take on a new challenge, he found himself standing in front of a tall, athletically built man with short brown hair and stern-looking black eyes. The stranger, who had on black armor that was only slightly different from his own, stood in the middle of two gruesome-looking henchmen. One on his right was the rabbit creature that disarmed the young warrior earlier on, and on his left was a huge tiger beast that stood like a heavily built man of about 8 feet in height. The man's name was Silas, and he was Nemesis' most trusted servant. "Are you Nemesis?" asked Nathaniel. "No," replied Silas with a tone that was far from welcoming. "I'm looking for the one called Nemesis. Do you know where I can find him?" asked Nathaniel, already sensing he wasn't talking to a kind stranger. Nemesis doesn't welcome strangers, especially ones sent by Elos, informed Silas. I don't have time for this. Either take me to Nemesis or step aside, said Nathaniel in an authoritative tone, not at all dwelling on the fact he was outnumbered and probably outmatched. You talk tough, responded Silas. The rabbit creature then wanted to make a move to attack, but was calmly stopped by Silas. Seeing as you are keen to meet Nemesis, I'll give you a chance to. All you have to do is get past us, challenged Silas with a cocky grin on his face. As the servant of Nemesis uttered those words, the tiger beast with no warning leapt at the knight, using its shoulder to push him violently to the floor. The tiger beast then stomped into the young warrior's stomach before grabbing his head and lifting him to his feet. The tiger beast then used its knee to strike Nathaniel twice in the stomach and then once in the face before finally flinging him into a nearby tree. Go back to Elos, you are beaten, said Silas as he watched Nathaniel catch his breath while still on his knees. Silas and his creatures then turned to walk away when a familiar voice stopped them, saying, Is that all you've got? Silas turned around only to find Nathaniel on his feet with a lot of fight in him despite his wounds. The tiger beast moved to attack the knight once again by swinging at him its razor-sharp claws. The young warrior ducked under the beast's attack and began to bombard the creature's face with right and left hooks before finally knocking it out with an extremely powerful uppercut. As the tiger beast's unconscious body hit the ground, the rabbit creature moved into action and, making good use of its speed, it began to strike the knight from all angles before finally flooring him with a leg sweep-like attack. As Nathaniel quickly got himself together on the floor, he noticed his sword lying practically beside him. Anticipating his attacker's next move, the knight grabbed hold of his sword and from his knees lunged forward with it. This caused the blade of his sword to stab right through the rabbit creature as it ran at him, killing it almost instantly. As Nathaniel witnessed the rabbit creature face its demise, he noticed the tiger beast, now fully conscious, run fiercely towards him. Utilizing his skills as a swordman, the young warrior in one motion pulled his sword out of the rabbit creature and decapitated the tiger beast. Taking the knight totally by surprise, Silas, using his right leg, kicked Nathaniel's sword out of his hand and used the same leg to kick him in the stomach. As Nathaniel staggered back, Silas began to attack the young knight mercilessly with a kickboxing-like fighting style. Nathaniel, weakened by his battle with the mutants, found himself getting struck by various types of punches and kicks, before finally he was sent to the ground with an aerial back kick. Slightly dazed, Nathaniel could see Silas moving in to finish him off with a skull-crushing axe kick. Acting quickly, Nathaniel rushed into Silas and grabbed hold of his attacking leg, and then struck the servant of Nemesis as hard as he could with a back elbow strike. Nathaniel's attack, reinforced with his freakish strength, broke Silas's neck on impact. The knight then flung Silas's body to the floor and bent down to catch his breath. His last battle had somehow accelerated the effect of the poison flowing through his body. As the knight got himself together, he noticed a gigantic castle up ahead. Nathaniel then picked up his sword and began to make his way towards the castle. As the young warrior approached the castle, it seemed to be deserted. There were no guards, servants, or animals. Not a single living creature seemed to be around. Nathaniel entered the castle's throne room and noticed a man with long black hair and piercing brown eyes sitting on the throne placed on a stage that was 5 feet high. Even though the man was sitting on it, it was quite clear he was very big and was made out of pure muscle. He seemed to have nothing on but a pant made out of bear skin and 2 large bracelets made out of pure gold around his wrists. "Greetings, warrior. I've been expecting you," said the man in a rough British accent. Nathaniel, saying nothing, responded by drawing his sword and readying his shield. "How is it an honorable warrior such as yourself has no problem being Elos' assassin?" asked the man. "If I do not destroy Nemesis, my comrade will die and my kingdom will fall. Besides, I see Nemesis as an evil my people would eventually have to face." "Evil? What makes you think Nemesis is evil? Hasn't it ever occurred to you that Elzada and Aiden, 2 rival wizards, teamed up to defeat Elos for a reason? Nathaniel, I am capable of great sorcery, and I know your story. You do have what it takes to continue this quest without Jacob. I will personally grant you passageway into Aiden's domain. I will not forsake a man who would, without a moment's hesitation, lay his life down for me. Besides, you are wrong. I cannot complete this quest without him," responded Nathaniel passionately. "Admirable. It's a shame you, like the rest of your kingdom, are deceived and doomed regardless of what happens here today," commented the man. "What nonsense are you babbling about?" asked Nathaniel. "Nemesis, Elos, Aiden, and Elzada all possess great power as far as you're concerned, because they are not human. They are 4 of thousands of fallen angels who gave up their first estate to indulge in the pleasure of man. They, as well as the other fallen ones, are the reasons why monsters roam your world and the reason why many gifted warriors come out of the Nale kingdom, explained the man. I don't understand, said Nathaniel, not knowing what to think. While many of the fallen ones, after fully embracing mortality, have died and been imprisoned in the abyss until the one true God judges all of mankind, Nemesis and Elzador, almost regretting their decisions immediately, held on to their power. Elzador to protect man in an effort to work his way back into heaven, and Nemesis to hold on to immortality for as long as possible, hoping at some point a way back home will be given to him by the one true God. Aiden and Elos, however, gave up on regaining favor and instead opted for using their power to rule over your world. The rest? Well, you already know, continued the man. Nothing you say matters to me. All I'm interested in right now is to slay Nemesis and nothing else, said Nathaniel, resisting the urge to be overwhelmed by all he had just heard. Okay, it's your funeral, said the man, revealing the fact that he was 9 feet tall as he got to his feet and leapt off the stage. As his feet touched the ground, the whole throne room shook. I am Nemesis, and know this, a battle against me is as good as suicide, said the man, then throwing a solid punch at the young warrior. Nathaniel blocked the attack with his shield, but was still thrown into a wall that was about 15 meters away from him. As the knight recovered from the attack, he noticed a huge dent in his shield. This worried Nathaniel because he was raised to believe nothing could damage a weapon touched by the Hilarion waters. Nathaniel then looked at Nemesis and noticed the powerful being had displaced all the bones in the arm he had used to punch the shield. Seeing this revived Nathaniel's confidence, for he knew now that he held a means to hurt the powerful being. As Nathaniel flung aside the dented shield and readied his sword, Nemesis put all the displaced bones in his arms back in place without any sign of pain. The powerful being then began a vicious attack on the knight, who in turn, out of sheer desperation, began to display quick and agile movements he had subconsciously picked up from his time with Jacob. Nathaniel, only just managing to get hold of the opportunity, slashed Nemesis across the chest with his sword. The attack caused the powerful being to stagger back and see his blood for the first time in 1,000 years. Then, taking both men by surprise, a portal courtesy of Elos opened up and released a powerful vacuous air that sucked both men through it. As both men are pulled into Elos' domain, Nathaniel hit the ground while a stream of purple energy created by the sorceress caught Nemesis. Then, using a technique similar to that of the Isitians, Elos began to absorb all the powerful being's life force. As the sorceress drained Nemesis of the very essence of his life, a strong wind began to blow through the area and lightning began to shatter all the walls. Then there was silence. Nemesis was no more, and Elos now possessed a power that enabled her to leave her prison. I've kept my part of the bargain. Now keep yours, cried out Nathaniel as he began to cough. His fight with Nemesis had further provoked the poison in his body, and now his health had begun to deteriorate. The witch then took one look at the knight and began to laugh. At that moment, Nathaniel thought the sorceress would betray him. Elos proved his assumption to be wrong by firing an orange ray of light over Jacob to restore his human form. What's going on? Asked Jacob as he gained consciousness. Your friend doesn't have much time, said Elos, pointing to Nathaniel, whose illness had taken him to his knees. What have you done? Asked Jacob as he ran up to Nathaniel and helped him to his feet. I gave him the chance to save your life. I'm assuming you would like to return the favor. She then opened a portal just a few meters away from where the Nale warriors stood. This portal will take you into the heart of Aiden's fortress. The element of surprise will leave you both at an advantage. Your friend's condition can be cured instantly. All he has to do is touch a magical emerald placed in the middle of the fortress's main hall, advised Elos. Jacob responded with a look of intense suspicion, before finally walking through the portal with his comrade. After stepping through Elos' portal, the young warriors found themselves standing in Aiden's main hall. The emerald the sorcerer spoke of was about 30 meters in front of them, with a black coffin placed behind it. I should have known Elzador would find a way to sneak you into my domain. Well, warriors of Nale, all you have managed to do is seal your doom, for this fortress will be your tomb, said Aiden, as he stood on a balcony that was 50 feet away from the ground and on the right-hand side from where Jacob and Nathaniel stood. The evil sorcerer then used his sorcery to surround the young warriors with an army of molten warriors. Are you strong enough to fight? Asked Jacob as he stood prepared for battle. Until my last breath, replied Nathaniel as he drew out his sword. The molten warriors began to attack and the young warriors responded with a merciless assault. Nathaniel, despite the poison in his body, moved through a dozen molten warriors with incredible combat skills, while Jacob, using the full extension of his staff, vanquished every molten warrior around him. But the Nale warriors seemed to be fighting a never-ending battle, for more and more molten warriors kept on emerging from the depths of Aiden's sorcery. After taking out more than 30 molten warriors, the knight's illness began to get the better of him. Jacob, who had his hands full, knew his comrade wouldn't be able to keep fighting in his condition. This caused the young warrior to decide to hit the problem at its source. So, as he executed a gravity-defying aerial spin kick to keep 6 molten warriors at bay, Jacob threw his enchanted boomerang at Aiden, which in turn cut off the evil sorcerer's left hand. While Aiden screamed in pain, Jacob, with his mind-blowing agility, utilized his staff, the head of a dazed molten warrior, as well as 2 nearby walls to get on the sorcerer's balcony. Giving the sorcerer no chance to get his act together, Jacob began to assault Aiden with extreme aggression, fueled by his urge to avenge all the innocent lives taken by the sorcerer, including the life of his father. Aiden found himself on the receiving end of all sorts of punches and kicks, so much so he lost control over his molten warriors. As Jacob floored the evil sorcerer with a solid roundhouse kick, all the molten warriors disappeared. Nathaniel, who was now seriously wounded, wasted no time in limping towards the emerald and touching it. A flash of green light that temporarily blinded everyone in the hall followed. When the light was gone, Nathaniel stood tall and proud with a newfound strength that far exceeded his norm. The coffin behind the mystical emerald then slid open and released a burst of energy that flung the healed knight across several feet and caught Jacob's attention. "You're too late," cried out Aiden, then laughing hysterically. Jacob, sick of the sorcerer's mockery, attempted to make a move to finish him off, but was instead thrown to the floor by an invisible force created by the sorcerer's power. Aiden then got to his feet and transformed his clothing into a black sleeveless combat outfit. "Thorax's power has been released, and it is mine to control. Now you and your precious kingdom will fall before me, just like your pathetic father did," taunted Aiden confidently. Jacob, filled with rage, flipped to his feet and attacked the evil sorcerer. But he soon found out that Aiden had been toying with him from the moment he and Nathaniel entered the hall. For the evil sorcerer began to display an almost flawless fighting style. As Jacob moved in with a combination that included an aerial roundhouse kick, 3 rapid punches and a jumping front kick, Aiden effortlessly ducked and countered the rushed attacks before punching the noble warrior hard in the chest and sending him to the floor with a concrete smashing back kick. Meanwhile, Nathaniel, slightly dazed, got to his feet, only to witness emerging out of the coffin a reanimated rotting corpse that began to walk with its eyes closed. What appeared to be a mindless zombie was actually Thorax, the Hell Knight that was fed even by the great wizard Elzador. The demon stopped walking and stood next to the mystical emerald, and then showed its eyes that were both engulfed in a purple flame. Thorax smiled as it touched the emerald, and like with Nathaniel's healing process, there was a blinding flash of green light. When the light cleared, Thorax stood as a naked man possessing a stature identical to Nathaniel's, only he had long brown hair and his eyes were still engulfed in purple flames. Thorax used his power to clothe itself in an outfit similar to that of a knight from Nale. The demon then stamped down on the floor with its left foot, causing the ground in front of it to crack open slightly and released into the air a sword engulfed in a ball of fire that eventually set still in front of the demon. Thorax grabbed hold of the sword and yanked it out of the fireball, which in turn caused the ball of fire to shoot towards Nathaniel, who in turn responded by vanquishing it with his enchanted sword. "Ready or not, here I come," taunted Thorax in a deep demonic voice. Meanwhile, on the balcony, Jacob had already begun to receive the beating of his life. For although he was a gifted fighter with an extensive knowledge of the martial arts, his opponent had more than 2 centuries to perfect his fighting style. After releasing a series of gravity-defying attacks, Aiden flung the noble warrior through the balcony's marble railings. Jacob, on the verge of falling off, just about managed to hold on to the balcony's ledge. Below the noble warrior's predicament, Nathaniel had begun to defend himself against Thorax's merciless attacks in a no-holds-barred swords fight. The Hell Knight used the same fighting style as the Nale warrior, only it was stronger, faster, and far more aggressive. It seemed whatever move Nathaniel decided to make, the demon was always one step ahead of him. At one point, with the use of a spinning attack, Thorax disarmed Nathaniel and drove its sword through the young warrior's left shoulder. "Ah!" yelled Nathaniel, for the pain of his injury felt like the blade in his shoulder was on fire. "Don't be such a baby," mocked Thorax, then yanking its sword out of the knight's shoulder and flooring him with a back fist. Meanwhile, 50 feet up, Jacob was still dangling off the balcony. Aiden, who had by now savored the moment, produced from his magic a sword with a blade made out of purple energy. The sorcerer then manipulated the blade into a long chain with the potential to cut through anything, and began to approach the noble warrior wielding the weapon in a pendulum-like motion. 50 feet below, Nathaniel was on the floor, injured and in pain.
So you're the one that has been sent to destroy me. I must say, I am disappointed. I expected more of a challenge,
taunted Thorax, then thrusting its sword towards the seamlessly helpless knight. Nathaniel, despite his injured state, acted quickly and rolled out of the way, at the same time grabbing hold of Jacob's enchanted staff that was lying on the floor. Nathaniel, despite the pain he was in, engaged the demon in another round of combat. Thorax rewarded Nathaniel's resilience by applying more strength, aggression, and speed to its attacks. Upon the balcony, Aiden had begun an intense attack on Jacob, who had no choice but to put his agility to good use to avoid the wrath of the sorcerer's weapon. This, however, didn't at all put Aiden off, for he continued to use his weapon to put the noble warrior through his paces, using a series of artistic movements. Several feet below, Nathaniel's injury had begun to make him lose focus. As he used Jacob's staff to block Thorax's sword from literally descending on his head, he allowed the demon to make use of the opportunity to kick him hard in his abdomen and strike him in the face with its knee. As Nathaniel fell to the floor, the Hell Knight drove its sword through the young warrior's right thigh. This caused the young knight to yell out so loudly his voice echoed throughout the hall. As soon as Thorax yanked his sword out of his leg, Nathaniel rolled away from the evil being and only managed to get to his hands and knees.
All this yelling, and I haven't even started,
said the Hell Knight as he made a move to finish off the Nale warrior. Nathaniel, spotting his comrade's boomerang lying beside him, took the only chance he had left and threw it at the attacking demon. The enchanted boomerang sliced through Thorax's sternum like it was a hot knife slicing through butter. This caused the Hell Knight to stop in its tracks and cough out blood. Nathaniel, fueled mainly by heart and adrenaline, rose to his feet and took hold of his sword.
"You are finished!"
yelled the knight, then beheading the advocate of evil with one swing of his sword. Meanwhile, on the balcony, Jacob was still desperately trying to stay out of harm's way. While jumping around, the noble warrior grabbed hold of a piece of broken marble and flung it towards Aiden's feet, causing the sorcerer to lose balance for a couple of seconds. The noble warrior then used this opportunity to spin up to the evil sorcerer, elbow him in the stomach, and take hold of his weapon. Before Aiden could realize the consequence of his one mistake, Jacob used the sorcerer's own sword to slice him in two. As Aiden met his demise, the whole area began to quake, for all Aiden's sorcery gathered up over his fortress into a cloud of purple energy, before finally accompanying him to the realm of the dead. This meant the road to Nale was no longer treacherous, and the dark region was no more. Many days had passed since Sir Nathaniel had set out to save his homeland Nale. The kingdom's chief councilman, now in a restless state, called the attention of the monarch and met with the king and his great wizard Elzador in the royal throne room. "Sire, it's been almost a month now, and there has been no word from Sir Nathaniel. The council and many of the people are finding it very hard to entrust the fate of our kingdom in the hands of one knight," said one of the councillors, with the support of his colleagues. "Is there a particular solution you had in mind?" asked the king. "Yes, sire. We, the council, think more men should be sent to destroy Aiden's evil," answered the councillor. "I've seen all your soldiers, knights, and freelance warriors, and none of them are any better than Sir Nathaniel. This problem is a very delicate one, and requires more than just swords and sorcery. Sending more men will do nothing to improve the situation," pointed out Elzador. "Okay, wizard, what do you suggest we do if the young knight fails his mission?" asked another council representative. "Then I will step in. I've already created an aura around the kingdom that will keep out Thorax's power. If no word is heard from Nathaniel in the next 7 days, then I and I alone will face Aiden and the Hell Knight," announced the great wizard. His words did nothing to put the council's mind at ease. But then at that point nothing could, except total freedom from the prospect of being destroyed by Thorax. Suddenly, a guard barged into the throne room in an ecstatic state. "Sire, he has returned," informed the guard, then allowing into the throne room, escorted by many rejoicing citizens of Nale, Nathaniel, and Jacob. "Good night. Your safe return is encouraging. Tell me, did you succeed in your mission?" asked the king. "Yes, sire. Aiden and the threat he posed is no more," answered Nathaniel, as he and his comrade bowed before the king. These words triggered the spur of laughter and rejoice amongst the crowd of the people in the room. "I, however, cannot take full credit, for without the help of Jacob, this man beside me, Nale would surely have faced destruction. When he first told me he was the son of a knight to the throne, I didn't believe him. But his actions on many occasions was that of one who inherited a keen sense of honor and bravery. These are virtues that I have only seen amongst Nale's most elite knights, continued Nathaniel, focusing a great deal of recognition on the noble warrior. Young man, what is your father's name? Asked the king. Sir Hymer, replied Jacob proudly. If what Sir Nathaniel says is true, then you are truly the son of your father. And if you're even half the man your father was, it would be a great loss to Nale if you didn't serve the throne, said the king, now approaching both men, who were still on their knees. The king then drew his sword and gently placed its blade on Jacob's shoulder. I bestow upon thee the honor of knighthood. From this day forth, you will be known as Sir Jacob. The king then turned to the people who had gathered and announced, tonight there will be a celebration for the people in the royal hall. There I will give Sir Nathaniel his reward. That evening, the royal hall became a haven for laughter, dancing, drinking, and eating. The celebration brought forth so much rejoicing in the air that it was almost tangible. Now fully clothed in the attire of an elite knight of the throne, Jacob was introduced by Nathaniel to other fellow knights. Amongst them, he gained admiration instantaneously, for in their eyes, anyone who could win over the respect of Nathaniel must be a great warrior. But the noble warrior's main focus of attention, while conversing, was on his one true love, who seemed so far out of reach, as she sat in her place beside the king and queen on the high table. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" said the king, about managing to put the celebration on pause, as he called Nathaniel to stand beside him. "Young knights, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of the people. Over the years, you have defended this kingdom with your bravery and your honor, and for that, you will always have my favor. This is why I would like you to take my daughter's hand in marriage," said the king. As he uttered those words, the whole room became silent as an anticipation to hear Nathaniel's response materialized. "My loyalty lies with your throne. Until my last breath, I will continue to fight for this kingdom. But I will not take your daughter's hand in marriage unless she consents to it first," responded Nathaniel, noticing the shocked expression on Lilith's face. "So what say you, daughter? Will you marry Sir Nathaniel?" asked the king, at this point certain his daughter would give only one answer. "Yes, father, I will marry him," replied Lilith. As the princess spoke those words, Jacob's entire world shattered into pieces. As the celebration now began to focus around the proposed wedding, Jacob quietly slipped out of the palace. "Where are you going, young warrior?" asked Elzada as he watched Jacob about to walk through the palace gates. "That is no concern of yours," replied Jacob. The noble warrior then took another step and then stopped. In that instant, he decided to make a U-turn and confront the wizard. "I risk my life for the well-being of this kingdom. And for what? In return, I lose my love and get pulled into this life I want no part of," said Jacob, who was clearly frustrated. "Jacob, your father was a great man, and your mother leaving had nothing to do with what he did or who he was. There is nothing wrong with living by the sword if it means protecting the weak," said Elzada with a look of empathy. The wizard then smiled and continued. "Before you leave, you owe it to yourself to speak to her one last time." After the celebration, Lilith returned to her room with a great deal of unhappiness in her heart, only to find Jacob waiting for her. The princess's immediate reaction was to run and hug the noble warrior, but he responded by pulling away. "How could you?" asked Jacob, unable to even look at her. "If I had refused my father's request, he would have lost face in front of the people," explained Lilith. "I too am a knight of the throne that saved the kingdom. If you truly loved me, you would have used that as an opportunity to tell the whole world about us," pointed out Jacob, who was still unable to look at the princess. "How can you say that? You risked your life to save this kingdom, yet you want me to risk my father's favor with the people? You know as well as I that my father has many enemies within the council that are waiting to find any excuse to get him to relinquish power of the throne. Losing favor with the people would surely lead to this, which is why I, as his daughter, could not turn down the people's champion," argued Lilith, now on the verge of crying. Jacob finally turned round, looked his lover in the eyes, gently held her hands and said, "I didn't destroy Aiden to preserve the well-being of this kingdom, or to avenge my father's death. I destroyed Aiden to save you." After hearing those words, the princess kissed Jacob passionately, And in that moment, there was no doubt in her mind that the only life worth living was one by her lover's side. 2 hours later, the queen came back to check on her daughter's well-being. For as a mother, she knew her daughter had no desire to marry Nathaniel. To her dismay, she found her daughter's room empty. Queen, scared her firstborn had run away all by herself, immediately told her husband. In a matter of minutes, by the orders of the king, Nathaniel and his team of elite knights were out looking for her. But the princess was safe, for she had rode off to start a new life with her one true love. "So, where are we going?" asked Lilith, excited about spending the rest of her life with Jacob. "To a home I built for us far away from Nale," answered Jacob, who was equally excited. Suddenly, the noble warrior was forced to stop the movement of his horse, for in his way was Nathaniel and 3 of his fellow knights. An unsettling silence followed, as it became clear to Nathaniel that Lilith's heart would never be his. As a champion to the throne, it was the knight's duty to return the princess to the king and arrest Jacob, who in the eyes of Nale law would immediately be branded as a criminal. But Nathaniel couldn't help seeing a man who would lay down his life for him, and a woman who he loved for most of his life. "Let them pass," ordered Nathaniel. The knights, without questioning his authority, did as they were told. "Thank you," said Jacob, before riding off into the night, knowing very well that Nathaniel's decision was rooted from a bond they now shared. A bond created from the need to embark on a hero's quest. 20 years later. Many years have passed since 2 honorable warriors defended my kingdom against a terrifying evil released by a hungry power sorcerer. These 2 men ended a wave of destruction before it even had a chance to start. Now, 15 years after I was born, my kingdom faces a new threat. A threat that aims to destroy everything I know and love. Much has changed since the demise of Aiden. The great wizard Elzador no longer sits at the side of my father, and Nale only has a handful of real warriors. It seems fate today has given the forces of evil the upper hand. However, in the fight against Aiden's sorcery, it took only 2 men to vanquish his evil. Perhaps, if God permits, that can happen again. On a field, at the center of a quiet rural area many miles away from the kingdom of Nale, 3 teenage boys, dressed in a jet black Robin Hood-like outfit, practiced their martial arts skills with conviction. 2 of the boys, aged 17, trained their reflexes with a contraption designed by their teacher. The machine resembled a modern-day sprinkler, only it was 4 times bigger and was made out of bamboo. And instead of sprinkling water, it shot out hundreds of pebbles from its left and right-hand side at an incredible speed, with only half a second interval between each pebble. On its right-hand side, one of the boys, who was athletically built and no taller than 5 foot 11 inches, avoided all pebbles fired with incredible style and grace, without stepping out of the area allocated to him. The boy's name was Luke, and from his father, he had inherited a natural grasp for the martial arts, as well as an oriental look that was complemented with short black hair. The boy practicing on the left-hand side of the machine, who was of the same age, height, and build as Luke, moved at an impressive speed, slightly slower than that of his fellow student. However, the pebbles he was unable to avoid, he struck with both his hands and feet. His name was Lance, and he was the blonde-haired and blue-eyed son of one of Nale's most revered knights. His father, who had spent a great deal of time training him, finally sent him to train under Luke's father at the age of 12 to instill in him a sense of honor and discipline. Just a few meters away from where Luke and Lance trained, a boy who was 2 years younger and 2 inches taller quietly practiced the art of Tai Chi. The athletically built boy, who had short brown hair and innocent black eyes, was Prince Nathaniel, the heir to the Nale throne, who was named after Lance's father. He was sent to Luke's father at the same time as Lance for the same reasons. After firing for a good half an hour non-stop, the contraption designed to train a man's reflexes ran out of pebbles. "So Nat, have you found the fighting style that best suits you yet?" asked Lance as he and Luke approached young Nathaniel while cleaning the sweat off their foreheads. "Well, because if you haven't, I can give you some help," interrupted Lance, disallowing the young prince to finish his sentence. "Bad idea. Your style relies too much on physical strength and flexibility," pointed out Luke. "And yours doesn't?" responded Lance, insulted by Luke's statement. "No, it doesn't. In fact, anyone can adopt my style," replied Luke. "Really? You do know not everyone has the ability to take to the air like a monkey on heat," pointed out Lance, indirectly mocking Luke's fighting style. A true martial artist would have noticed that underneath all the complex movements I may at times display, my style is mainly made up of simple movements, which utilize the theory of anticipating one's opponent. This is far more effective than aimlessly bombarding an opponent with punches and kicks, argued Luke. My style is not just about punching and kicking, said Lance, resenting the implication of Luke's comment. Wow. If that's the case, I've been observing your lookalike all these years, remarked Luke sarcastically. You know what? I'm tired of your snide comments, said Lance, now stepping right up to Luke. Really? Let me guess, you're getting angry and are thinking of punching and kicking me as much as possible, said Luke, reinforcing his insults. You know what? You're all talk, because when it comes down to the crunch, you know I can take you anytime, anywhere, challenged Lance, looking his rival dead in the eye. How about you take me on right now? Accepted Luke, who despite the fact was calm and collected was always up for a challenge, especially if it came from Lance. Guys, remember what Jacob said, if you guys are caught fighting each other again, he will discard you as his students, reminded Prince Nathaniel, now caught in the middle of an uncomfortable situation. Fair enough, there's only one way to settle this, said Lance, determined to prove he was the better fighter. 3 hours later, a group of hardened and rough-looking men congregated in the clearing of a nearby forest. They were a band of notorious armed robbers, and all 30 of them were dividing amongst themselves what they had just looted from a nearby village. Hurry up and get it over with, before Amok returns, cried out one of the robbers impatiently. Excuse me, gentlemen, can any of you tell me whether there is a town near here? Asked a voice politely. The robbers turned around to see who they were being addressed by and saw innocent-looking Prince Nathaniel wearing what was known as the Royal Seal, a solid gold necklace with priceless diamonds embedded into it. Yeah, we know, but that little piece of information is going to cost you, said one of the robbers, as 10 of his comrades began to surround the young prince. Really? Said the prince in a tone that seemed a bit too relaxed. Suddenly, one of the robbers grabbed him from behind. The young prince reacted by using the back of his head to break his assailant's nose, at the same time kicking another robber who was reaching for his seal. Prince Nathaniel then leaped into the air, from where he kicked down 6 attackers before finally landing on his back. Other men then moved in to take advantage of the prince's position, but the prince was quick to react with a spinning capoeira-like attack that floored more than 8 approaching attackers. He then flipped to his feet and ran through the forest. Get him! Yelled out one of the robbers. All men then chased the prince through the forest into a nearby town, where Lance and Luke stood ready. Okay, here they come. The rules are simple. You take the guys on the right, and I take the guys on the left. The first one to get floored or hurt loses, instructed Lance. Luke nodded in agreement, and both teenagers gave out a short and loud battle cry in unison. As Prince Nathaniel ran past them, Luke and Lance began attacking the ruthless thieves with their individual fighting styles. Lance displayed a style that was 30% hands and 70% feet, with a persona that was cocky and unforgiving. Luke, on the other hand, displayed a fighting style that was 50% hands and 50% feet, with a persona that was calm, aggressive, and artistic. The robbers outnumbered the boys 15-1, but they were no match for them. In less than 15 minutes, all the robbers were on the floor, either crippled or unconscious. Well, lads, it looks like it's a draw, said the prince, impressed by the skills displayed by his fellow students. Then there was a loud roar as a huge man came smashing through the trees. It was Amok, the leader of the robbers. He was an 8-foot-tall, bald Caucasian man with a rock-crushing build. Unknown to the boys, Amok had trained under the teacher for 5 years before he decided to turn to a life of crime. He seems tough, said the prince. I agree. He also seems to be coming from the left, pointed out Luke with a mischievous grin on his face. After giving out a loud battle cry of his own, Amok began running towards the boys. Lance leaped up and executed an aerial back kick that briefly stopped the thug in his tracks. Lance then attempted to follow up his attack with a series of punches, but Amok responded by headbutting the young warrior's fist. As Lance tried to quickly shake off the pain, Amok raised him off the ground by the neck and tossed him aside. Luke and Prince Nathaniel, synchronizing their movements, struck Amok with 2 side kicks to the stomach, which they immediately followed up with 2 backward somersault kicks. This caused the huge bandit to stagger back. With an intent to finish off the staggering giant, both boys leaped towards him with a flying kick. However, Amak recovered quickly and grabbed both boys by the leg while they were still in mid-air and flung them towards where Lance still lay dazed on the floor. "I'm beginning to think this wasn't such a smart idea," said the young prince as he laid on the floor beside his friends. At this time, Amak leaped up into the air with the intent to squash the boys with his body mass. But the young warriors acted quickly and rolled out of the way, causing the huge man to crack the open ground he landed on. The young warriors then got to their feet and began to attack the now slightly dazed giant from all angles. Unable to keep up with all three boys, Amak soon found himself tiring out. Luke, taking advantage of Amak's poor conditioning, delivered the knockout blow that took the form of an aerial roundhouse kick. "You do know you lost the bet," pointed out Luke as he and his comrades caught their breaths in front of Amak's unconscious body. "Hey, that's not fair. He was a monster. Besides, he floored all three of us," argued Lance. "You made the rules, not me, and according to your rules, you lost, which means you have the inferior fighting style," insisted Luke with a big grin on his face. "Besides, a true warrior can face any opponent," mocked the prince, imitating their teacher's voice. "Ha ha ha, really funny," responded Lance sarcastically, not at all amused. A few hours later, off a route near the boys' training ground, a short podgy man tinkered with great excitement on his newest invention. His name was Mitch, and he passed his time exploring the uncharted areas of science. "Good day." "Wow, that is incredible. What is it?" asked Lance as he and his friends walked into the inventor's yard, only to be taken by the sight of a hot air balloon. "I call it the flying machine," said Mitch, who was obviously proud of his work. "Does it work?" asked Luke as he got a closer look while the young prince handed Mitch the reflex training machine that he built. "Yes, it does. The way it works is quite simple. Its main source of elevation is hot air," Mitch vaguely explained. "Can we ride in it?" asked the young prince, already jumping in. "Sure, why not?" said Mitch, eager to take to the skies. In a matter of minutes, Mitch and the students of Jacob took to the skies in his flying machine. Lance, Luke, and Prince Nathaniel had no problems in enjoying their first experience of flight. Meanwhile, hundreds of feet below, in the royal hall of the Nale kingdom, the king of Nale sat with his people's councilmen to discuss the state of his land. Beside the king sat his advisor, Sir Nathaniel, with his once heartthrob face hardened by more than 20 years of living by the sword. Sir Nathaniel's presence reinforced the councilmen's respect for the throne. "Sire, there is talk of a plague outbreak in nearby towns and villages," informed the head councilman. "Has any evidence of this been gathered?" asked the king. "No, but talks of it is making our people wary about buying supplies from neighboring kingdoms. This is putting a strain on the general prosperity of the kingdom," said another councilman. "Sire, I will have my men investigate the matter thoroughly," said Sir Nathaniel, maintaining his usual stern look. "Then it is agreed. Nothing will be done until we know more about the matter," announced the king. "Sire, there is a young man outside who wishes to speak to Sir Nathaniel," informed the guard, interrupting the meeting. "Bring him in," ordered the king. His words prompted Nathaniel to rise from his seat and take a step closer to the entrance of the hall. As ordered, the young man was brought in. "How can I help you?" asked Nathaniel, addressing the stranger, who was a teenage boy of the same age as his son, dressed in an attire usually worn by sailors. The boy responded by handing Nathaniel a ring. The Nale knight inspected the ring, only to find a royal symbol on it, as well as an inscription of his name. "Where did you get this?" asked Nathaniel. "My father gave it to me before he died. I have been training all my life for a chance to be a knight. I was told by my father to reach the shores of Nale and seek you out when I was ready to face the challenges of knighthood," explained the boy, with an aura of enthusiasm and excitement in his eyes. "I owe your father my life, which is why I will give you a chance to prove yourself," promised Nathaniel. Before the young boy could show any form of gratitude, the doors of the hall shattered into pieces, making way for a beautiful young woman to float into the hall gracefully. "Elos," said Nathaniel, drawing out his sword as he immediately recognized the sorceress. Elos responded to Nathaniel's challenge with a simple smile, as hands smashed through the walls and side-kicked the knight in the stomach. Nathaniel, who was thrown across the room and through the meeting table, got to his feet as soon as he hit the ground. Han, knowing there was still much fight left in the night, ran up to the experienced warrior to bombard him with another set of attacks. Nathaniel responded by thrusting his sword at the shapeshifter, who in turn kicked the knight's weapon out of his hand and floored him with a back fist. As soon as Nathaniel dropped to his hands and knees, he leaped up and tackled Han down to the floor, where he began to punch the robbery being continuously in the face. Han, out of sheer frustration, threw Nathaniel off, who in turn went into a roll from which he regained his weapon and got to his feet. Before Han could get himself together, Nathaniel decapitated him with one swing of his enchanted sword. "I see you haven't lost your edge," said Elos, then using an invisible force to disarm the knight and suspend him in mid-air. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. All I'm here to do is take what is rightfully mine," said Elos as she used her powers to revive Han. "Which is?" asked the helpless knight defiantly. "Which is to place as the ruler of this world," answered Elos, increasing the seriousness in her voice. "You're mad," responded Nathaniel. "Really? You're brave and I respect that. But if you do not acknowledge me as your queen, I will destroy you," warned the sorceress. "Go to hell," yelled out Nathaniel. Showing no mercy, Elos effortlessly disintegrated the knight with a purple energy beam. She then proceeded to eliminate everyone in the building, everyone except a single councilman, to whom she left specific instructions. "Tell the people of Nale that they have 14 days to swear their allegiance to me. Anyone who doesn't recognize me as their queen will perish." Meanwhile, back in Mitch's backyard, the inventor and the boys returned from their flight. "That was great! Luke, do you think your dad will let us use this for tomorrow's excursion?" inquired Lance as they jumped out of the flying machine. "No, he won't," said a familiar voice. The boys turned to find it was Jacob. Jacob, now in his early 40s, looked 10 years younger. However, he had lost the fire he once had in his eyes as a young man to a look that had been humbled by fatherhood. "Father, we were just about to head home," said Luke, hoping his father wouldn't realize he and the boys had skipped a great deal of their training time. "Don't bother with the excuses. The training you missed today, you will make up for it this evening," said Jacob, then leaving the compound. The next morning, Jacob and his students rode towards the Hilarion mountain. "My God, my whole body's aching. I can't believe I had to go through all that intense training because of your stupid bets," whispered the young prince to his comrades. "Look, no one forced you to tag along. Besides, the pain would pass once you stretch out for the climb," whispered back Luke, in an effort not to let his father hear their conversation. "I'm curious, what does climbing a stupid mountain have to do with being a warrior? I mean, wouldn't a combat test amongst the three of us be more appropriate?" yelled out Lance as he and his horse lagged behind. "Being a good warrior isn't about being the best fighter. It's about being able to take on any challenge with determination, courage, and honor," responded Jacob as he rode in front. "I guess so. Besides, a fighting contest with these two won't be much of a challenge," bragged Lance. "Lance, could you stay in this reality for at least 5 minutes?" responded Luke. "The need to compete against each other will put you two on very dangerous paths. Believe me, living to be the best is the quickest route to insanity, because no matter how good you think you are, there will always be someone as good or better. My advice to you two is to respect each other and work together," warned Jacob. After about 4 hours of riding, Jacob and his students finally reached the foot of the Hilarion mountain. "So this is it. It's a lot bigger than I imagined," said the young prince as he gazed in amazement. "Please, I could do this climb in my sleep," bragged Lance as he dismounted his horse. "Really? Tell me, Lance, do you have to deceive yourself about everything?" said Luke, putting out doubt over Lance's climbing skills. "Tell you what, I'll race you to the top. The loser passes over all his privileges to the first one up," challenged Lance. "And by privileges you mean?" inquired Luke. "I mean pocket money and the usage of the horses. Plus, the loser has to do all the chores around the compound for a week," clarified Lance. "Are you sure you want to bet all that? I mean, I'm pretty sure you would lose to me," said Luke confidently. "Don't flatter yourself. I'm sure I can beat you with one hand tied behind my back," responded Lance. "Wow. With all that hot air, I'm surprised you haven't reached the top already," responded Luke with a big grin on his face. "Tell you what, I'll let Nat join in, so when I beat you, you can at least claim victory over him," suggested Lance. "Do what you want. It makes no difference to me," said Luke, who had already begun to stretch. "So what do you say? Are you in, Nat?" asked Lance keenly. Sure," said the prince hesitantly, a bit insulted by the notion he wasn't much of a challenge for any of his fellow students. Jacob, who was slightly amused, shook his head in disbelief, for it was clear that the boys had already brushed aside his advice. All three boys raced up the mountain, displaying mind-blowing agility. Lance was right to assume that he and Luke were superior to Prince Nathaniel in terms of mountain climbing. However, they were so engrossed in beating each other, they ended up underestimating the prince, giving him room to get to the top first. "I win!" yelled out Lance. "No you didn't," cried out Luke. "Guys, it was a draw. Besides, I beat both of you," pointed out the prince, feeling rather proud of himself. All three boys then gasped in amazement as they saw custom-made versions of every weapon they ever trained with arranged neatly on the ground. "You three have advanced significantly in your martial arts, so much so you need very little instructions from me to further advance. As a reward for your dedication and hard work, I have given you the honor of picking a weapon of your choice and dipping it into the Hilarion waters," said Jacob after completing his climb. All three boys then picked a weapon that best suited their individual styles. Lance chose a pair of brass-ended nunchucks, Luke picked a spear-headed chain, and Prince Nathaniel took hold of two short swords. After dipping their weapons in the Hilarion waters, the boys got a feel for their new weapons by practicing their individual forms. Finally, after half an hour, the boys decided to make their way down the mountain. "How about a race down?" suggested Lance, eager to redeem himself. "Fine by me," responded Luke and Nathaniel in unison. "Good. This time I will not leave room for lucky breaks," announced Lance. Jacob laughed to himself as he watched his students make their way down the mountain while he stayed behind to gather up the rest of the weapons. By now the race had started, and Luke was in the lead ahead of Lance by a good 5 meters, while the young prince trailed way behind. Prince Nathaniel's eagerness to catch up with his fellow students caused him to slip and fall. Lance, catching sight of the plunging prince, acted quickly and jumped off the mountain in a backward somersault motion, like a human cannonball. As Lance fell past Luke, who had now placed himself in an upside-down position, he opened up, allowing the son of Jacob to grab hold of his legs. As the prince fell past his friends, Lance grabbed hold of his hands and swung him towards the side of the cliff, where the young prince held on. "You do know you disrupted the race," said Luke as he and Lance got themselves together. "You guys are unbelievable. I almost get killed and all you can think of is your stupid race," said the prince, angered by Luke's statement. "Don't be such a woman. You're okay now, aren't you?" responded Lance with a smirk on his face. "Guys, something's happening up there," announced Luke as he noticed the sky light up over the top of the mountain. And he was right, for while they had been executing high-risk maneuvers down the mountain, a portal made out of energy opened up in the presence of their teacher. Jacob then prepared to defend himself as he sees Elos and Han walk out of it. Elos then threw Sir Nathaniel's sword in front of him. "That is all that remains of your comrade. It will be very foolish of you to make the same mistake as he did and oppose me," said Elos. "What do you want?" asked Jacob, not allowing his rage to consume him. "I want you to do what the late Nathaniel couldn't. I want you to bow to me and acknowledge me as your queen," demanded Elos. Jacob looked at Elos, and his eyes revealed a rage that was unsettling. So much so, Han conjured up a sword with a blade made out of flames in an effort to scare him a little. Jacob, saying no more, kicked up the sword of his dead comrade and attacked Han with extreme intensity, fueled by gut-wrenching emotions. Han, barely able to defend himself, managed to hold his ground. A lot had changed since the evil being last faced Jacob, for the noble warrior was no longer a student of the martial arts, he was now a master. Han pumped himself up in order to gain an advantage, but it did him no good. For Jacob's superior fighting technique came from speed and skill and relied very little on strength. With a quick spinning attack, Jacob slashes the shapeshifter across the abdomen. Han staggered back, while Jacob mercilessly advanced forward with the intent to finish him off. Han reacted by multiplying himself into a dozen armed men. Jacob, outnumbered but not outmatched, began attacking the evil beings, who began attacking him from all angles. They couldn't even touch him. Jacob's skill far exceeded theirs, enabling him to make slaying them seem less than easy. It wasn't long before Han was reduced to nothing more than a pile of body parts. Elos, seeing enough, used an invisible force to disarm the noble warrior and suspend him in mid-air. The Hilarion waters will protect one against almost any kind of sorcery. I, however, don't have the powers of a sorcerer. I have the powers of a god, said the sorceress, then using an invisible force to drive the sword of Nathaniel through the noble warrior's chest before allowing him to fall to the ground. Jacob was already a second away from death when Elos disintegrated him with a ray of purple energy. "Father, no!" yelled out Luke as he and his friends made it to the top of the mountain in time to witness his father's death. Elos, satisfied with all that had happened, resurrected Han and teleported off the mountain. father, quietly uttered Lance as he dropped to his knees in front of his father's sword. For he knew that day he had lost two fathers, because as far as he knew, his father, Sir Nathaniel, would only part from his sword in death. Late that evening, Lilith rushed home from the market in an effort to get home and ensure a cooked meal greeted her husband and his students as they walked through the front door. Lilith made her way into the home her husband built, only to find the boys had returned. "What happened?" asked Lilith, instantly feeling an air of despair in the room. Prince Nathaniel sat in the living room area and quietly wept uncontrollably, while Lance stared out of the window in a cold silence. "Do you remember the tale Father told us about the sorceress that turned him into stone?" asked Luke as he sat calmly by the dining table. "Elos, I remember," replied Lilith, at this point feeling very uneasy. "Well, today we saw her kill him," informed Luke, unable to look his mother in the eye. "Are you sure it was her?" asked Lilith, trying so hard to hold back her tears. "Dad's enchanted clothing didn't protect him," said Luke. Luke, seeing his mother's grief about to overwhelm her, quickly got up and dampened it with a hug. After being held in her son's arms for over a minute, Lilith pulled away in an effort to get herself together. It was then that she noticed Lance holding his father's sword. "Lance, I'm so sorry," said Lilith. Seeing the enchanted sword made it very clear to Lilith that she had not only lost her husband, but she had also lost a dear friend. Lilith hugged Lance, and this caused him to break down into tears. Lilith now knew the young warrior, like her, was dealing with the loss of two loved ones. "We need to know how to beat her," said Luke, refusing to join in with the mourning. Lilith, understanding her son's need to be strong, gave him the directions to Elzador's workshop. After a day of traveling, the boys found the wizard's workshop, which was an old-looking cottage in the middle of a forest. "What happened here?" asked Lance as he and his friends entered the workshop, only to find it in a total mess. It was evident a serious battle had taken place here. "Do you think she got him too?" asked the young prince. Lance and Luke gave him no answer, for they didn't even want to consider the possibility that the only person with the knowledge to defeat Elos was no more. "Yikes!" yelled out Lance as he jumped back into his comrades, missing a fired bolt of electricity by an inch. The boys turned to find the person responsible for the attack was a weakened Elzador lying on the floor. "Elzador," said Luke as he and his friends rushed to the wizard and helped him up in a sitting position. "You must be Jacob's boys," said Elzador, recognizing their uniforms. "What happened here?" asked Lance. "Elos," answered Elzador, then coughing uncontrollably. "Is there a way to beat her?" quickly asked Luke, sensing the old wizard didn't have much time. You must go to the far east and seek," said Elzador, then coughing again. "Seek what?" asked Luke, hiding his frustration. "Seek out a man by the name of Zeong," said Elzador with his last breath. The boys then watched helplessly as the old wizard passed away. Elzador's body then dispersed into stars and crossed over into the spirit world. "The Far East. I have family there," announced Luke, reinstalling hope into his comrades and himself. 2 days later, the boys got jobs as deck cleaners on a cargo ship heading towards the Far East. During the 2 weeks of their journey, Luke mourned his father's death in private. A month of traveling passed before the boys fully went back to their individual personalities. Finally, after 6 weeks of traveling, they arrived in the Far East, also known as Ancient China. Half an hour after their arrival, the students of Jacob roamed the market area, wearing black hooded cloaks. "Now that we're here, I think it's best I do the talking," pointed out Luke. "Why should you do all the talking?" asked Lance. "Because this is the home of my bloodline. I speak the language better than any of you, and if you look around in terms of looks, I blend in more," answered Luke. "First of all, I speak the language just as well as you do. Second of all, we're all wearing hoods, so it doesn't really matter what we look like. And third of all, bloodline or not, we would have a better chance of finding this monk if we all asked around," argued Lance. "Guys, can we please focus on the problem at hand?" said Prince Nathaniel. His comrades, as usual, ignored him. "Excuse me, can you tell me where I would be able to find a man called Zeong?" inquired the young prince in the local language as he stopped a young man dressed in grey. "Sure, follow me. I'll take you right to him," said the stranger. The prince, grateful for the gesture, complied and followed the young man, leaving his comrades to continue the argument. "Hold on, where's Nat?" said Lance, noticing the young prince was no longer with them. Meanwhile, Prince Nathaniel was led into a dark alleyway. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" asked Prince Nathaniel, sensing that something was wrong. The stranger responded by unexpectedly kicking the prince hard in the face, so much so the teenage dropped to his knees. "Hand over your money, and I won't hurt you any further," requested the stranger. The prince looked the stranger in the eyes and smiled as he cleaned away some blood at the side of his lip. The stranger responded by throwing another kick at the prince. This time, young Nathaniel grabbed hold of the street criminal's leg and flung him against a wall. The robber recovered quickly and began to attack the young prince, who had by now got to his feet. The stranger displayed the fact that he wasn't just a common thief, but also a gifted fighter. However, the students of Jacob had far surpassed the level of gifted, and at their young ages were already several steps ahead of being a master. The young prince, still with a smile on his face, began to avoid the thief's attack with his hands behind his back. The thief tried everything from kicking to punching to tackling, but young Nathaniel's speed and ability to anticipate his opponent's movements was just too much for him. After seeing the frustration in his attacker's eyes, the young prince dislocated the stranger's left knee with a powerful low kick, causing the thief to fall to his right knee in pain. "Now would you take me to Zeong?" said the prince, pleased he had proved he was no pushover. However, the teenager's cockiness got the better of him, as the stranger threw some hot pepper into his eyes and began to limp out of the alleyway. "Where do you think you're going?" asked Lance, as he and Luke intercepted the thief on his way out. The thief didn't even attempt to put up a fight, for he knew it would be hopeless. After washing the pepper out of the prince's eyes, the students of Jacob interrogated the thief. "Look, I don't know who Zeong is. I'm new here, but there's a woman I know who could help you," insisted the thief. "Take us to this woman," ordered Luke with a stern look on his face. "And don't try any funny business, or I'll make limping seem like a luxury to you," added Lance, giving the impression he was more than willing to beat the thief to a pulp. The now partially crippled crook led the boys deep into the market area to an old rundown-looking shack. "Quack, what happened to your leg? And who are these strangers you have brought with you?" asked an old woman, as the crook led the boys in. "They are foreigners seeking a man called Zeong," answered Quack, while the students of Jacob took off their hoods. "Jacob, Jacob, is that you?" said the old woman as she sighted Luke. "I am Luke. Jacob is my father," replied the young warrior. My God, you are the spitting image of your father," said the old woman as she touched the young warrior's face. "How is it you know my father?" asked Luke. "How is it I know him? Young man, I brought him into this world." "Your teacher's mother?" asked Lance, surprised. "Teacher? I see my Jacob's come a long way since I saw him. How is he these days?" asked the old woman. An unsettling silence followed, until finally Luke spoke. "My father, your son, is dead." "I see," said the old woman, taking a seat. "He was an extraordinary man. In fact, in our land, he was a legend," informed Lance, trying to soften the blow of the news. "How did he die?" asked the old woman. "He died by the hand of an evil sorceress. That is why we're here to seek Zeong. We were told by a great wizard that he was the only man that could tell us how to destroy her," explained Luke. Luke's grandmother closed her eyes as she took in the news. "Quack!" cried out the old woman. "Yes, madam," answered the crook as he limped into the room. "Take these boys to the temple. The man they seek is the head priest there. As you wish, madam." Quack did what he was told and took the boys to the temple, which was a 45-minute horse ride from the market area. As Quack and the students of Jacob approached the temple, two hefty and bold monks stopped them. "State your business," demanded one of the monks. "I was told by Chun to take these men to see Zeong," said Quack. The monks glanced at the teenagers who had covered their faces with their hoods. "You may enter, but your horses stay here," said one of the monks. Quack and the boys complied with the instructions given and were led into the temple by the silent monk. "Aren't monks supposed to be friendly?" quietly asked Lance. "These are harsh times we live in. Even spiritual men have to be trained warriors," explained Quack. The four young men were then taken into a small study area, where an elderly man dressed in a Shaolin monk-like attire meditated. "Master Zeong, there are some people here that wish to speak to you," announced the monk, successfully gaining the attention of the old man. The old man, with the use of a hand gesture, asked the monk to leave the room. The old man then got to his feet and approached the young warriors. "Greetings, Master Zeong. We were sent I know why you're here, said the old man, disallowing Luke to finish his sentence. The old man then walked around the students of Jacob and continued. The sorceress you wish to destroy is Elos, a fallen one like me, who chose to oppress the kind she once watched over. It took the combination of Elzador's mystic powers, Aiden's black magic, and the essence of nature, which I wield, to imprison her. Why didn't you destroy her? Asked Lance. At the time, none of us were strong enough. Even when we combined our powers, she still possessed a little more. We were lucky we only needed half the power attained to imprison her, said Zeong, then taking a seat. But that was a long time ago. Much has happened since then. Both Elzador and Aiden are no more, and Elos has taken the soul of Nemesis, making her practically invincible, pointed out Zeong. Master Zeong, is there any way we can stop her? Asked Luke, unable to give up hope. Maybe, responded Zeong. Maybe, said Lance, who was obviously dissatisfied by Zeong's answer. Now, Elos can only be destroyed by the hands of two mortals, said Zeong as he rose to his feet. How can two mortals do what three fallen ones could not? Asked the young prince. By surviving the gauntlet of the damned, to possess the Yo and Gong armors, explained Zeong. What are these armors? Asked Luke. They are tools, the fallen ones, first used to develop all mortal fighting styles. The Yo armor is said to give the wearer an understanding of all the soft elements of combat, at the same time increasing the wearer's speed and agility by 100 folds. The Gong armor is said to give the wearer the understanding of all the hard elements of combat, at the same time increasing the wearer's strength and endurance by 100 folds. The Yo armor can manipulate any force, while the Gong armor can resist any force, explained Zeong. Master Zeong, please take us to the gauntlet of the damned, asked Luke anxiously. Not until you prove yourselves, insisted Zeong. Prove ourselves? Said Lance, a bit confused. Yes, prove yourselves. I've seen the most gifted of warriors venture into the gauntlet and perish. If you are weak, entering the gauntlet is as good as suicide. Usually I'm able to sense the presence of a good warrior, but all I sense now is overconfidence, arrogance, and inexperience, stated Zeong. What do we have to do to prove ourselves worthy? Asked Luke, determined to venture into the gauntlet. Zeong responded to Luke's question with a simple smile. He then took the warriors to a large courtyard at the back of the temple, where about 50 monks, both young and old, sat around a large circular and sandy arena. In the middle of the arena, two monks, who were obviously very skilled, seemed to be engaging each other in no-holds-barred hand-to-hand combat. As Zeong's presence was made known, everyone in the courtyard, including the fighters, stopped what they were doing and paid their respects. Where is Hong? Inquired Zeong. I'm here, master, said a young man, dressed in an orange Shaolin monk-like uniform, as he emerged from out of the crowd. Despite the youth that radiated off him, his eyes were strong, like that of a soldier who had survived countless battles. Warm up, I have a challenge for you, instructed Zeong. Hong showed his intent to obey with a simple nod before making his way to the center of the ring. Who is he? Asked Lance. He is Hong, the head garrison of the temple and my most gifted pupil. He will now warm up with the two highly skilled warriors in the ring, explained Zeong. As Hong entered the ring, he paid his respects to the two monks that were to be his opponents. The monks in turn returned the gesture. A signal was given, and the two monks together began to attack Hong simultaneously, displaying an incredible level of skill, strength, and speed. Hong, also displaying an incredible level of speed and skill, began to artistically move around the ring, fending off all the attacks thrown his way. The monks attacked as hard and as viciously as they could, but they were unable to touch Hong, who seemed to be just toying with them. After 5 minutes of being on the defensive, Hong took to the air and kicked both monks twice in the chest before finally landing on his feet. As the force of his kicks threw both his opponents to the ground, Hong casually dusted off the sand that had splashed on his outfit. The beaten monks, having no problem acknowledging Hong's superiority as a fighter, got to their feet, paid their respects, and left the ring. Are you sure those guys were highly skilled fighters? Asked Lance, unimpressed by the performance of the monks. I take it you can do better, said Zeong. Actually, I can. Despite what you think, I'm one of the most gifted fighters ever to walk through your gates, bragged Lance humorously. And he's modest, added Luke sarcastically. Please, modesty is nothing more than a polite lie, said Lance, resenting Luke's remark. I'm glad you are feeling confident, because if I'm to be convinced that three of you are strong enough to take the challenge of the gauntlet, one of you has to defeat Hong. pointed out Zeong. I'll do it, volunteered Lance and Luke in unison. I want you to fight Hong, said Zeong, pointing to the young prince. I know as a warrior you are yet to reach the level of your comrades, which is why if you beat Hong, I will be convinced that there is a slim chance that you and your friends could survive the gauntlet, said Zeong as he approached Prince Nathaniel. Okay, I'll fight him, said the young prince, who was really just as confident as Luke and Lance. Nat, the fate of our kingdom is in your hands. Before you make any commitments in the fight, you have to learn his rhythm and show no fear, advanced Lance. But don't waste too much time on feeling his rhythm. After all, you've seen him move. Think fast and focus mainly on breaking his confidence by striking him out or taking him to the ground, advised Luke. Prince Nathaniel laughed to himself, for it seemed even when they were giving him advice, Lance and Luke were competing against one another. The young prince made his way to the center of the ring, where he and Hong paid respects to one another. Zeong then gave a signal and the fight began. Hong, assuming the young prince was a worthy opponent, wasted no time in unleashing a merciless attack. Prince Nathaniel, remembering Lance's advice, stayed on the defensive. He, however, overdid it, enabling Hong to set him up for a powerful scissors kick that flung him several feet into the air before finally hitting the ground. As soon as the young warrior's back touched the ground, he flipped up to his feet. Now utilizing Luke's advice, Prince Nathaniel decided to go on the offensive, displaying a wide variety of punches and kicks. Again, he overdid it, allowing his experienced opponent to manipulate the force of one of his attacks and use it against him. As the young prince hit the floor for the second time, he remembered a piece of advice given to him by his late teacher. Finding your center sometimes means finding what works for you. If you try to imitate others or restrict yourself to one style, you cannot do this. Now stricken with a fresh strategy, the young prince spun to his feet. Hong, now sure he would have no problem defeating his opponent, moved in to finish off Prince Nathaniel with a series of powerful attacks. The students of Jacob greeted the students of Zeong with a fighting style that was 40% hands and 60% legs, with a persona that was cocky, methodical, artistic, and ruthless. Now focused on making good use of all his opportunities, the prince began to lay in some hits on Hong. Hong, not used to being on the receiving end of a fight, began to let his anger and frustration get the better of him. Prince Nathaniel, playing on his opponent's emotions, began to hit him again and again and again, until finally he was able to knock Hong out with a drop kick to the face, after which he landed on his feet and struck a pose. Now that's more like it, yelled out Lance. Well done, said Luke as the prince rejoined them. So, Master Zeong, will you take us to the gauntlet? Asked Lance with a smirk on his face. Follow me, responded Zeong, then leading the young warriors back into the temple. The entrance to the gauntlet does reside in this world. However, it is impossible for any mortal to physically travel there. Only I and Elos presently possess the ability to get there unharmed, informed Zeong. He then summoned up a ball of blue energy and used it to create a portal. This gateway will take you to the entrance of the gauntlet. Be careful. A demon said to be indestructible guards it, warned Zeong. The students signaled their acknowledgement with a simple nod and began to approach the portal. Hold it. The gauntlet will permit only 2 of you to enter it, said Zeong. The young prince, after hearing those words, brought out his 2 short swords and handed them to Luke. I am the youngest, so I will stay behind, volunteered the prince, knowing very well that he was nowhere near the level of his comrades in terms of being a warrior. The gauntlet dwells outside our reality, which is why a month out here will seem like just a few hours in there. Your only chance of survival is to work together, explained Zeong. Don't worry, we'll be okay, said Lance confidently, armed with his nunchucks and his father's sword. Lance and Luke then shook hands and jumped through the portal. The young warriors then found themselves in what seemed to be a rocky underground cavern. That must be it, said Lance, pointing to a portal made out of crystalline energy that constantly changed color. Lance and Luke then began to approach the gateway, which was more than 100 meters away from them. Then, without warning, a 10-foot demon monster came crashing out of the ground. The creature was red in color, with a humanoid upper body and a reptile head. Its lower body resembled that of a giant tarantula spider. The monster, that had razor-sharp claws and teeth, gave out a shrieking roar as it stood in between the warriors and the gauntlet's gate. The demon then began attacking by thrusting its bone-crushing spider legs at the young warriors. Students of Jacob in turn began rolling, jumping and flipping around the creature in an effort to get past the demon and through the doorway. Luke, while avoiding the demon's attacks, managed to roll under it. The young warrior then began to move towards the gauntlet's gateway. The demon, while battling with Lance, sensed Luke's presence near the gauntlet's entrance, which caused the creature to shoot out a brown liquid substance from its backside, which in turn covered the gateway before hardening up. "Disgusting," blurted out Luke, as he tried to break through the unknown substance now covering the gateway. The demon, disregarding Lance as a real threat, turned around and began to approach Luke, who was still chipping away at the substance with Prince Nathaniel's short swords. Lance took this opportunity to draw out his father's sword and cut off the demon's back legs. The monster screamed in pain as it retaliated by backhand slapping Lance, which disarmed the young warrior and flung him to the ground. Luke, pumped on pure adrenaline and armed with his fellow students' short swords, dived at the now crippled demon, digging both blades of the short swords into the creature's neck. The demon, that was evidently in a lot of pain, couldn't even scream. Then, in one ruthless motion, Luke decapitated the monster while yanking out his weapons. This caused the creature to shatter into pieces. Luke then got to his feet and approached the now covered gateway, and with the use of his weapons, shattered it with a powerful spinning attack. "Lance!" called out Luke as he spotted his comrade getting to his feet. "I'm okay," yelled back Lance as he rubbed the back of his head. Luke then noticed the demon's parts regrouping like they were living creatures. "Lance, get over here now! This thing isn't dead!" cried out Luke. "I'll be right there. I have to get my father's sword," answered Lance, running towards the sword that was about 50 meters away from him and 200 meters away from Luke. The demonic body parts regrouped and melted into a red liquid pool. Out of the liquid pool emerged two demon creatures. Both of the demons then began to approach Luke, who in turn readied himself for battle. "Luke, go through! I'll meet you on the other side!" cried out Lance as he ran towards his comrades, now armed with his father's enchanted sword. Luke didn't answer Lance, but he had no intention of going through the gateway without him. Both the demons then leaped at Luke, who in turn reacted by leaping back. Luke, however, leaped a bit too far back and ended up going through the gauntlet's gateway. The creatures then began to make their way towards Lance, at the same time creating what seemed to be a 50-foot wide bottomless canyon with a purple energy blast from their hands. Lance, sighting the extra obstacle in between him and the gateway, took a deep breath and began his one-man assault. Making good use of his incredible martial arts skills, Lance began to move in and out of both demons, cutting off a leg along each movement, until both demons were severely crippled near the edge of the canyon they created. Lance then took 3 steps back and put away his father's sword. He then ran at one of the demons and attacked it with an aerial front kick. As the force of his attack pushed the demon into the canyon, Lance leaped off the edge and in mid-air somersaulted on and off the fallen demon, giving him enough leverage to jump to the other side of the canyon and through the gauntlet's gateway. "They made it through," announced Zeong, observing Lance and Luke's progress through meditation. Prince Nathaniel, who served as the monk's audience, gave out a sigh of relief. After leaping through the portal, Lance found himself standing beside Luke in the middle of a white limbo. "Are you crazy? Your stunt could have got us both killed," yelled out Luke, unable to contain his anger. "It's my father's sword. I couldn't just leave it," quietly responded Lance, understanding Luke's anger. "We were trying to get into the gauntlet to get 2 armors. You know, the 2 armors that are the only thing that can be used to stop Elos," yelled out Luke. "I'm sorry. It's just that the sword holds sentimental value," said Lance. "Sentimental value? Lance, if we fail to get those armors, the kingdom your father died protecting will be lost," pointed out Luke. "Look, if I had lost my sword, how would I protect myself?" argued Lance. "If you had lost your life, how would I get both the armors?" answered Luke, pulling off Lance's nunchucks and dangling them in front of him to answer his question. "Hello, guys. I hope I'm not interrupting," said a voice. Lance and Luke looked towards where the voice was coming from, only to find a 4-foot dog that stood like a man, addressing them. It was black in color with a stripe of white in the middle of its head. I was dressed in a white t-shirt, a pair of blue jeans, a pair of white sneakers, and a black cotton jacket with a big red bee sewn on it. "Hello," replied the boys in unison, not knowing whether to be amused or threatened. "My name is Bequil, and I'm the keeper of the gauntlet. Before we begin, I need to know whether you two wish to go through the gauntlet as a team or as separate individuals," asked the funny-looking creature, as it did an impression of a tour guide in a jovial manner. "We wish to go as separate individuals," answered Luke. "What? The monk said we'll perish if we part ways," reminded Lance. "Well, my instincts tell me we'll perish if we stay together," replied Luke, throwing his comrade's nunchucks back at him. "Fine. Go your way and I'll go my way," said Lance. "Good. Then a decision has been made," said Bequill, then snapping his fingers. There then was a flash of light. "What are they doing?" cried out Zeong. "What is it?" asked Prince Nathaniel. "They have gone their separate ways. They will surely perish," said the monk, breaking his meditation. "Those idiots. Can't they put aside their differences for the sake of the kingdom?" said Prince Nathaniel quietly. The prince then got up and stormed out of the temple. As Lance and Luke were blinded by the flash of light, caused by Bequill, they could hear the keeper of the gauntlet's voice saying, "Surviving the gauntlet of the damned is very straightforward. Each of you will face the challenge of simply surviving through the various aspects of various dimensions. In each world, you will have to avoid certain dangers until a portal that leads you out opens. The gateway out will only open once and will stay open for 60 seconds. If you do not make it through the portal before the 60 seconds is up, you will be left to overcome the dimension's prime danger." The wrath of 6 kings. The flash of blinding light finally passed, and Luke found himself on the floor, covered in dust, in the middle of a dark open field, surrounded by half a dozen cave lions. Luke slowly got to his feet as the snarls and growls of the powerful animals echoed through the air. One of the lions suddenly attacked from behind, causing the son of Jacob to react by somersaulting backwards over the creature and unwittingly using the head of another lion for leverage to jump further out of reach from the attacking beasts. As the young warrior touched the ground, he immediately went into a backward roll, narrowly escaping the prospect of being torn into shreds by 3 hungry lions, while spotting a portal open 15 feet up in mid-air over the ferocious beast's area. Luke, determined not to get trapped in the dimension, ran towards the cave lions that were more than pleased to oblige the gesture by pouncing right at him. As the lions leaped up, so did he. With the use of incredible agility, Luke began jumping on and off each of the attacking lions' heads to gain height and distance towards the gateway. One of the lions jumped several feet higher than its fellow beasts and was on a collision course with the young warrior. Luke, now very focused, avoided facing the beast's power head-on by executing in mid-air a frontward somersault and kicking the back of the creature's head, gaining enough momentum to thrust himself through the portal, with only 1 second to spare. Thank God not all birds can fly. Meanwhile, Lance found himself lying in the shallow end of a beautiful stream. "Where the hell am I?" Lance asked himself as he got up and noticed the beautiful countryside that surrounded him. Lance got onto dry land, unsure of what his next move should be. "What the?" cried out the young warrior as hundreds of terrified sheep stampeded past him. Lance looked in the direction the sheep were running from and sighted a giant multicolored bird that was heavily built and flightless with a long orange razor-sharp beak, which he used to pick up and gobble down sheep that were not fast enough to get away. As the bird spotted Lance, it gave out a loud shrieking sound, out of some form of excitement, and began to run right at the young warrior. Lance, acting quickly, avoided the bird's attacking beak by rolling under the bird before taking to his heels and running as fast as he could. But the young warrior soon found he was running towards a dozen more large and bizarre-looking birds. Lance, determined not to be bird food, drew out his father's sword and ran back towards his original assailant. The giant bird wasted no time in thrusting its beak at Lance, who in turn shattered it with his father's enchanted sword. The young warrior then decapitated the bird with an unforgiving aerial sword assault. As his feet touched the ground, Lance continued to flee from the large carnivorous birds behind him. As the flesh-eating birds were on the verge of catching up with the student of Jacob, blocks shone down on him, and a portal opened right in front of him. Wasting no time, the blonde-haired warrior leaped right through the gateway. The ugly sadist. Luke fell out of the portal in the middle of a muddy ditch. The young warrior crawled out of the ditch and got to his feet, only to find he was in an unknown forest surrounded by a night sky. Luke for several minutes wandered through the forest, when to his pleasant surprise he saw a portal open about 10 meters ahead of him. The young warrior, aiming to reach the gateway before it closed, began running towards it. But before he could jump through it, a giant beast crashed through the trees and jumped in between him and the portal. The beast was white and hairy, with red eyes. It had the upper body and head of a rodent, only its arms were ape-like, while its lower body area was similar to that of a kangaroo. As Luke stopped in his tracks, he caught sight of the portal closed behind the creature. The creature then put on an evil grin and began to mercilessly attack the son of Jacob. Luke put his agility into full swing and was still only just about able to avoid the creature's attacks. The beast attacked with its head, teeth, feet, paws and tail, but Luke's determination to survive prevailed. At one point, the creature attempted to strike Luke down with its version of a dropkick, but Luke acted quickly and rolled right under the attack. As Luke got to his feet, he drew out the short swords given to him. The creature smiled as it unleashed 2 sets of claws, which were at least 10 inches long. The monster then gave out a loud roar-like sound as he moved in for a second round of attacks. Luke, in 3 artistic movements, shattered the creature's claws with the weapons in his hands and drove the blade of one of his short swords into the creature's sternum area. The beast gave out a loud roar as its life force began to fade, and a blinding flash of light followed. Water breached both the hosts of life and destruction. Lance fell out of the other side of the portal onto a large wooden plank that was floating in the middle of an ocean, which was not of this world. While the sun shone brightly, the blonde-haired and blue-eyed warrior got to his feet and noticed he was surrounded by hundreds of wooden planks that just seemed to be floating aimlessly. As the young warrior looked around, he spotted an island that was 400 meters up ahead. Water around him began to rustle as flesh-eating piranhas began to eat away at the plank he was standing on, in an effort to get to him. With the sole aim of staying in one piece, Lance began heading towards the island by jumping from plank to plank, at the same time avoiding thousands of piranhas. After covering about 200 meters, the young warrior noticed a portal open on the island. Lance then began to quicken his pace, but his efforts were in vain, for by the time he got to the island, the portal closed. "Now what?" yelled out Lance, frustrated at the position he was in. Immediately the young warrior uttered those words, a gigantic blue, carnivorous, prehistoric whale raised half its body out of the water, at the same time giving out a loud shrieking sound. "I had to ask," said Lance quietly as he drew out his father's sword to take on the 30-foot monster. The sea monster in one quick motion thrust his head at Lance in an effort to take a bite out of him. Lance reacted by executing a straddle jump, at the same time striking the creature in the eye with his father's sword. The creature, now in a lot of pain, gave out a loud shrieking sound before finally submerging back into the water. Lance, who was now on edge, readied all his warrior instincts as an unsettling silence followed. Suddenly, the whole island began to quake as the sea monster came crushing out of the island's sandy floor. Lance, taken by surprise, decided to fling his sword at the large beast. The blade of the enchanted sword dug deep into the beast's throat area. The monster, that now couldn't even scream, began fighting for its life as it lost the ability to breathe. Lance leaped up in an effort to grab hold of his father's sword, but halted as a flash of white light blinded him. Sometimes running isn't an option. Luke regained his sight, only to find himself on his hands and knees in the middle of an empty, rocky landscape. The son of Jacob got to his feet, bracing his warrior instincts for the worst. 5 meters to his right, he spotted a large and heavily built man, dressed in only a small piece of animal skin. His persona was primitive and animalistic. 5 meters to his left, he sighted the gateway out of the dimension open. Luke didn't bother attempting to make it through the portal, for his instincts told him somehow the primitive man wouldn't allow him. The young warrior stood his ground silently until the portal closed. Almost as if the portal's closing was some kind of signal, the wild man ran at Luke with the intent to crush him with his bare hands. As the cave-like man got into distance, he began to continuously swing his fists at the young warrior. Luke dodged each of the wild man's bone-crushing attacks with ease. After about a minute of trying to hit Luke, the wild man attempted to tackle the young warrior to the ground. But again, Luke was too quick for him and was able to avoid the attack by spinning out of the way. As the wild man turned round to continue his assault, Luke greeted him with a right and left hook, which he followed up with a powerful roundhouse kick. As the wild man staggered back, Luke took to the air and struck him continuously with his feet across 4 meters. The wild man landed on his back, while the young warrior landed on his hands and knees. The primitive attacker got to his feet and ran at Luke, with the sole intent of attempting to grab him. The son of Jacob responded by getting to his feet and running away. Then, taking his opponent completely by surprise, Luke leaped up in the air and ricocheted backwards and struck the wild man in the neck with his fist. The young warrior immediately followed up his attack by spinning his entire body in mid-air and striking the wild man with an aerial kick, which in turn flung the primitive assailant violently to the floor. Luke again landed on his hands and knees, this time backing his opponent. The wild man got to his feet and gave out a loud cry as he metamorphosed into a 12-foot beast that was half man, half rhino. Luke, somehow sensing his opponent's transformation before even taking a look, drew out Prince Nathaniel's short sword before facing his opponent once again. The walking monstrosity charged at Luke, who in turn leaped out of the way. The beast, now able to follow Luke's movement, tried keeping up the attacks by attempting to crush him with his hands, feet and body. Luke was able to stay out of harm's way, mainly with rolls and flips. At one point, Luke ducked under a steel-denting fist, at the same time slashing the monster across the belly. The creature staggered back and cried out in pain. Luke maintained his attacking distance by following the creature with a butterfly kick. The young warrior then proceeded to slash the beast again and again across the monster's arms, legs, back and chest, until finally he drove the blades of his comrade's short swords into the creature's chest. This caused the beast to scream loudly. Luke, unable to show the monster any mercy, drop-kicked the short sword right through its chest. As Luke watched the beast's demise, the young warrior made a move to pick up his comrade's weapons, but was stopped by a blinding flash of white light. No time to think. The blinding flash of light passed, and Lance found himself standing in the middle of a large sand pit, at the center of a deserted sandy terrain. "The sword," said Lance to himself, noticing he was no longer in possession of his father's weapon. But before any form of panic could set in the young warrior, his father's enchanted sword literally fell out of the sky and into the sandy ground in front of him. Lance, more relieved than surprised, pulled the sword out of the ground. As he put away his sword, Lance noticed a dozen men surrounding him armed with sharp axes. The hostile-looking men very much resembled ancient Indian warriors from the Wild West area. One of the men gave out a loud battle cry, using a high-pitched tone, and then they all began to charge at Lance from all angles. Lance, without even thinking about it, drew out his father's sword and began to defend himself. Despite the fact that he was outnumbered 12-1, Lance still proved to be more than a match for his attackers. As Lance struck the 12 warriors one by one, they all broke down into sand. After Lance struck the last throw, he began to scramble out of the pit. As the young warrior climbed out of the pit, the sandy remains of the warriors came alive and swooped their way out of the pit in form of a sandy whirlwind. The students of Jacob made it out of the pit, only to be confronted by this whirlwind. The sand whirlwind then split into 6 parts and transformed into 6 large hyena-like wolves. Lance, trying not to show any fear, slowly began to back away from the flesh-eating beasts. Fate then took the young warrior's side as a portal opened smack in the middle of the pit, and it was at this point the wolves decided to attack. Lance reacted by somersaulting backwards and diving through the portal. All the wolves leaped through the air after him, but only 2 of them made it through the gateway. A little bit of space makes all the difference. After the flash of light, Luke found himself standing in an area that seemed just enough to contain him, with only one ray of light shining into it. The walls around him were rocky, like the side of a mountain, and stood over 100 feet high. Luke, feeling slightly claustrophobic, looked around for a way out, but it seemed the only way to move was to climb up. As the young warrior stood indecisively about how to move, a large razor-sharp claw came smashing through one of the walls, missing Luke's face by just an inch. Now motivated, Luke, utilizing his agility, began to make his way up the wall with an incredible pace, while a giant prehistoric bear wolf came smashing through a wall. The beast then began to intensely pursue the young warrior up the wall. Luke got to the top of the wall, only to find the hole at the top was much too small for him to pass through. Luke then looked down to find the bear wolf closing in on him. Luke, acting quickly, drew out one of his short swords and threw it at the approaching monster. The blade of the sword dug deep into the creature's forehead, causing it to plunge towards the ground. The monster didn't hit the floor, instead it fell through a portal that opened underneath it. Luke attempted to jump through the portal, but was blinded by a flash of light. Unfinished business. As Lance fell out of the portal into a countryside-like scenery, he drew his sword out in mid-air to defend himself against the hyena wolves that fell out with him. The young warrior's efforts to ready himself for battle proved to be futile, as one of the hyena wolves pinned him to the ground before he could gain momentum to make use of his sword. The beast then made a move to literally tear the young warrior apart. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a large entelodont beast came out charging, knocking the hyena wolf off Lance. The force of the entelodont's attack caused the hyena wolf on the young warrior to be flung into its fellow beast, causing both of them to shatter into sand. Lance, having no time to retrieve his sword, rolled out of the way of one of the entelodont's feet that had attempted to crush him. While Lance was nimbly staying clear of the entelodont's attack, the sandy remains of the hyena wolves came alive and transformed into a giant hand. The giant hand then grabbed hold of the entelodont and tossed it more than 200 feet up into the air. As the prehistoric beast landed back first onto Lance's sword, it embraced death almost instantaneously. The sandy hand then transformed into a man that very much resembled Lance. The man then dispersed some sand out of himself and used it to create a hard wooden stick, which he then proceeded to use to display all sorts of rotations before finally stopping in a combat stance. Lance smiled and took out his nunchucks, which he then used to also display some rotations before finally stopping in a combat stance of his own. The man attacked, causing him and the young warrior to engage themselves in combat. Using a style adopted by only the most gifted warriors, Lance kept the man's attacks at bay with an artistic form. At one point, Lance managed to hit the man's stick off course with one nunchuck and strike him in the face with another. The man's face shattered into sand as it got struck, but the headless body regrouped instantly with a body spin and transformed its stick into a whip. While the Sandman made sure Lance was on the receiving end of his whip, he reformed another head. Lance, making use of his natural acrobatic skills, managed to dodge every one of the man's whip attacks until it finally grabbed hold of his leg. As Lance was pulled towards his opponent, he gathered leverage and struck the Sandman, who in turn shattered into sand. The sandy remains then regrouped and reformed the man, only this time he was armed with a sword. The Sandman wasted no time in attacking Lance with a series of devastating attacks. Lance, staying out of harm's way, cleverly led his attacking opponent towards the dead Entelodont. The Sandman ended up slicing the dead dinosaur in two while trying to destroy Lance. This allowed Lance to grab hold of his father's sword and even up the odds. The Sandman and Lance then sword fought intensively. However, Lance intentionally made no move to strike his opponent. Then a portal opened, and Lance disarmed and struck the Sandman, causing him to shatter into sand. This gave Lance more than enough time to leap through the portal and leave his sandy threat behind. The art of survival. The light passed and Luke found himself standing on a giant block of concrete that was suspended in mid-air. The young warrior looked around and noticed he was surrounded by floating blocks of concrete under which was a lake of fire, as vast as the Earth's ocean. Luke, focused on leaving the dimension alive, began to visually scout the area. Then, to his surprise, a portal opened in front of him. But before he could make an attempt to jump through it, the concrete block on which he stood began to crumble. This caused Luke to somersault backwards and land on a neighboring concrete block behind, which also began crumbling immediately after his feet touched it. The young warrior, led by his survival instincts, found himself jumping from block to block and moving further away from the portal. To make matters worse, dozens of razor-sharp discs, which could easily cut a man in two, began shooting towards the young warrior from an unknown source. Luke's mental and physical abilities was put to the test for almost 12 minutes before finally he jumped onto a concrete block that was the size of a football pitch, where he immediately rolled out of the way of an attacking ball and chain. Luke found himself dodging the attacks of a saber-toothed tiger that stood like a heavily built man of about 9 feet. The mutant creature gave out a loud roar as it swung its giant ball and chain at the young warrior. As Luke dived over the assault, he thrust his spear-headed chain into the face of the saber-toothed attacker. Luke's effort blinded the creature in one eye, causing it to drop its weapon and stagger back. Luke, wielding his spear-headed chain in an artistic motion, began to slash up the mutant's face continuously until it fell off the block of concrete into the lake of fire. As Luke looked over the edge to watch the creature's demise, a flash of light blinded him. Desperation is definitely a motivator. Lance fell out the other side of a portal and found himself face to face with a giant armadillo the size of an elephant. It had sharp claws and teeth with a long, steel-crushing tail. The young warrior leaped back, drawing out his father's sword, only to find that he and the creature were in a 4-mile radius compound, enclosed by 4 brick walls that were thousands of feet high. The monster then shot out from its mouth a huge ball of fire. Lance in turn sliced through the fiery attack with his enchanted sword, and leaped at the creature with a spinning sword attack. The blade of the young warrior's sword bounced off the creature's exoskeleton, as it was unable to penetrate it. Lance, stopping in a moment of shock, was rammed to the floor by the monster's big head. Lance flipped to his feet, then immediately dropped flat on the ground, avoiding the creature's attacking tail by mere inches. The giant armadillo's tail didn't strike the young warrior. It did, however, create a big hole in one of the walls that enclosed them. Lance, acting quickly, rolled to his feet and dived through the hole created by the monster. The young warrior soon found his decision to be one of great haste, as he found himself on a vast field filled with thousands of giant armadillo monsters. To Lance's great terror, many of the giant monsters began to run towards him. Acting out of sheer desperation, Lance leaped off one of the creature's head onto another's back. A neighboring armadillo struck the monster Lance was standing on in an effort to get at the young warrior. The student of Jacob then leaped off the now tumbling armadillo onto another. The young warrior kept jumping from armadillo to armadillo until many of the monsters on the field began fighting each other. Lance, however, was lucky enough to leap off the back of an attacking monster through a portal that chose to open in the middle of the field. Some beasts refuse to live up to a title. The flash of light passed, and Luke found himself in a rainforest-like scenery. The young warrior looked around and noticed an 8-foot sloth with long, sharp teeth and claws, fast asleep on a nearby tree. The son of Jacob was about to create distance between him and the large beast, when he suddenly noticed the short sword he thought he had lost against his battle with the bear wolf lying on the floor. Luke bent down to pick up his weapons, and arose only to find that the sloth was no longer resting on the tree. Luke, suddenly alerted by his sixth sense, ducked quickly just about avoiding the sloth's attacking claw, which in turn took down a tree. The sloth, giving Luke absolutely no time to think, continued attacking viciously with a great deal of speed. The young warrior, mainly relying on reflexes, jumped, rolled, ducked and dived, flipped and somersaulted out of harm's way. That also took the form of falling trees, which took the impact of the creature's attacks instead of him. Luke, seizing the first opportunity, took to the trees and made use of his incredible agility and began to flee. The determined killer sloth in turn began a hot pursuit. After fleeing for about 3 minutes, Luke used his spear-headed chain to latch onto a branch he was approaching and executed a 360-degree swing, causing him to land right behind the monster. The blade of the young warrior's short swords greeted the killer sloth that took and missed a chance to eliminate Luke in the middle of his swing. Before the young warrior could fully witness the creature's death, a flash of light blinded him. One tag team deserves another. After narrowly escaping death for the countless time, the students of Jacob found themselves back to back at the center of a gigantic steel cage, surrounded by cheering little gremlins. "You're alive," said Luke, managing to contain the fact that he was happy to see his comrade. "You say that like it's a bad thing," responded Lance, also hiding the fact that he was relieved to know his brethren was alive. "No, it's just that I myself am very lucky to be alive," explained Luke. Gates of the cage on both sides then opened. On the left-hand side walked in a huge beast that was at least 12 feet. It was half man and half mammoth. On the right-hand side, a beast of the same size and stature walked in. It was half man and half rhino. The monster stepped into the arena and the gates behind them closed. The mutant beast then gave out a loud roar before slowly moving in to crush the young warriors. Lance and Luke responded by drawing out their swords, but their plans to finish their large opponents off with their enchanted weapons were short-lived. For one of the cheering gremlins pressed a big red button on the outside of the cage, causing a magnetic field to strip the young warriors off their weapons. "What the?" said Lance as he watched his sword get stuck to the ceiling of the cage. At this point, the beast rushed to ram into the now disarmed warriors. Lance and Luke side-rolled out of harm's way, causing the mutant beast to ram into each other. The cage shook as both beasts hit the ground hard. "I hope the gateway out of this dimension opens in here," said Lance, assuming the opponents were down and out. But his assumption was soon proved wrong, as both beasts suddenly gained consciousness and got to their feet. "We cannot defeat them without our weapons," pointed out Luke, as the beast charged towards them with another round of attacks. Both warriors ran to opposite sides of the cage, with Lance moving to the right and Luke moving to the left. The mammoth beast tried crashing, ramming, and grabbing Lance, but the young warrior was too quick. Lance tried kicking and punching the beast, but found it did little more than shove the beast. Luke, meanwhile, was in the process of seriously frustrating the rhino beast that tried so hard to attack him in any possible way. At one point, the rhino beast charged right at him. In turn, the young warrior executed a straddle jump over the mutant. As Luke's feet touched the ground, he immediately took to the air and kicked the rhino beast across 10 meters into a side of the cage. As the rhino beast crashed into the cage, it caused considerable damage. So much so, the cage lost the magnetic field holding the weapons on the ceiling, causing them to drop to the ground. Lance made his way to his sword with a series of backflips, and Luke picked up his short sword while executing a butterfly kick. Lance picked up his sword and smiled at his comrade, for they both knew their attacking opponents now faced a certain doom. After each warrior's execution of a lethal weaponry attack, a flash of bright light blinded them. The difference between man and ape. Lance regained his sight, only to find himself in the middle of a desert, bombarded with a relentless heat from the sun. The young warrior looked around, but all he could see was sand and a tall mountain-like structure that was 100 meters up ahead. Responding to a rumbling sound, students of Jacob turned around only to see an army of killer apes charging towards him. Lance, without even thinking twice, began to run in the opposite direction as fast as he could. As he approached the mountain-like structure, he decided to climb up it, for it seemed futile to keep running in an open desert he knew nothing about. After climbing more than 80 feet, the young warrior finally reached the top, only to find that there was barely enough space on the top for him to stand. Lance looked down, only to find the killer apes climbing up with a level of determination that seemed very disturbing. Lance, now ready to fight until there was no more energy left in his body, drew out his father's sword and began striking down apes before they could complete their climb. After fighting hard for a good 10 minutes, the young warrior noticed a portal open at the side of the structure. Lance then simultaneously struck down half a dozen apes before executing a twisting somersault through the portal. Make good use of all opportunities. Luke found himself standing armed and ready on grassy land at the foot of a hill. Luke didn't move a muscle, for he could somehow sense danger was close. He was right, for he was thrown to the floor as a 20-foot monster burst out of the ground under him. The creature resembled a giant cobra, only it had 4 strong limbs and was covered with spikes. The monster leaped at Luke as it hit the ground, but the young warrior managed to quickly roll out of harm's way, causing the monster to submerge back into the ground. An unsettling silence followed as Luke could not hear or see his attacker. Suddenly, the beast burst out of the hill and right at him. Luke reacted by falling backwards, at the same time slashing the beast across the stomach as it ended up leaping over him. The creature, now wounded, fell to the floor. Luke in turn moved over to the beast and dug the blades of his short swords into its head, causing it to die and allow him to leave the dimension with a flash of white light. A cursed warrior's wrath. Lance suddenly found himself standing on top of a giant silver sphere, made out of an unknown substance, floating over a live volcano. Standing opposite him was a hefty sprite, who was about 6 feet in height, and dressed in what seemed to be steel armor from the neck down. As Lance and the sprite made eye contact, the monster ran at the young warrior, who in turn drew out his sword and began to defend himself. The sprite was fast and strong, but Lance kept him at bay with his stepping work and kicking attacks, until he made the decision to strike the beast with his sword, only to find its armor was impenetrable. The sprite used this opportunity to disarm the young warrior with one powerful punch. Lance was flung onto his back while the blade of his sword dug into the sphere. The student of Jacob flipped to his feet and took hold of his nunchucks, which he then artistically handled before setting into a kung fu-like stance. The sprite, unfazed by the young warrior's skill, moved in for another round of attacks. Lance, now very focused, countered every one of the beast's attack and struck it continuously in the face with his weapons. After 10 blows to the head, the sprite staggered backwards in a dazed state. Lance, wasting absolutely no time, threw the monster off the sphere with an aerial spin kick. As his feet touched the ground, a flash of bright light blinded him. A shocking opponent. Luke found himself standing in the middle of a large steel room. Standing about 20 feet away from him was a young man of the same height and stature as him. The stranger was dressed in brown rags and had eyes that seemed to have been taken to the depths of insanity and back. The stranger smiled at Luke, who responded by raising an eyebrow. The stranger, with the use of his hands, then suddenly shot out a bolt of electricity at the young warrior, who moved only slightly to dodge the attack. The stranger then widened his grin before firing a series of electrical streams and bolts at Luke, who in turn ran, leaped, jumped and somersaulted around the room to avoid being electrocuted. The master of electricity came close to striking the young warrior in the back with a bolt of electricity, but the student of Jacob just about avoided it by flipping off one of the room's walls. As Luke's feet touched the ground, the electrical stranger blasted the steel floor with electricity, causing the young warrior to be electrocuted. Luke, now weakened by the attack, dropped to his knees. The stranger, who seemed very amused by the young warrior's predicament, confidently approached him. As he came within 5 meters of Luke, their eyes made contact, and in a split second it was made clear to the electrical stranger that there was plenty of fight left in the young warrior. The master of electricity blasted the floor again in an effort to finish off Luke. But before he could effectively harm his opponent, the student of Jacob leaped up and punched his assailant in the neck while in mid-air. The stranger began trying to catch his breath, and Luke decided to show no mercy. The young warrior then struck the electrical stranger with an unforgiving 12-hit combination, which ended with the blade of one of his short swords in his chest. The stranger gave out a loud scream before finally exploding. Sometimes circumstances make the decision for you. Lance found himself on a level cornfield and immediately noticed a dozen vicious Komodo dragons circling an innocent girl who looked no older than 10. As Lance drew out his sword for action, a portal leaning out of the dimension opened right beside him. Without even considering abandoning the girl as an option, the young warrior leaped into action and slew as many beasts as he could before grabbing the girl, putting her over his shoulder and running back towards the portal, fleeing the pack of dragons that had now grown from 6 to 16. The gateway leading out of the dimension closed, but Lance kept running. Finally, the student of Jacob found safety in a cave, which had an entrance that was too small for any of the dragons to pass through. No matter what happens to me, I want you to stay here, instructed Lance as he put the girl down. The girl indicated that she would obey with a simple nod of her head. Lance then went back out of the cave and began to slay all the dragons with incredible style and grace. A single strike with his enchanted sword was enough to vanquish a single dragon. In the heat of battle, after slaying 16 dragons, Lance thrust his sword backwards and drove its blade through an attacker before even looking at it. Lance, now confident he had killed all the dragons in the area, turned round only to find he had driven his sword through the girl he had rescued. As the young warrior froze in horror and disbelief, the girl before his eyes morphed into a Komodo dragon, then back into a girl before dropping to the ground dead. Lance then looked around and found instead of being surrounded by the corpses of giant flesh-eating lizards, he was surrounded by the bodies of dead children. Before the young warrior could take in what had just happened, a flash of light blinded him. All it takes is one bite. The light passed, and Luke found himself under a night sky, roaming through an unknown swamp. The young warrior, uncomfortable with where he stood, grabbed hold of a dangling vine and began to climb into a tree above him. As the young warrior climbed into a tree, an unnaturally huge crocodile leaped out after and missed the chance to take a chunk out of him by mere inches. As Luke gained balance and distance in the tree, he managed to catch a glimpse of the large reptile as it dived back into the swamp. An unsettling silence followed, and Luke prepared for battle by drawing out his short swords. Suddenly, the crocodile emerged out of the swamp and destroyed the tree's foundation with one swing of its tail. As Luke fell towards the swamp, the crocodile leaped up towards him with its mouth wide open. Luke, empowered by sheer desperation, in mid-air managed to manipulate himself into a backward somersault, causing him to move out of harm's way. As the young warrior fell past the determined carnivore, he dug the blades of his short swords into the monster's belly. Luke hit the swamp first, while the now dead crocodile fell towards him. Before the large crocodile could squash the young warrior, a flash of bright light blinded him.
They say the tongue can be deadly.
Light passed, and Lance found himself near a contaminated pond, under a night sky. Lance drew out his sword, ready to face battle, but was unable to lay his eyes on any threat. Suddenly, a long, slimy tongue wrapped round his legs and dragged him along the grassy floor, towards a razor-sharp, teeth-filled mouth of a demonic frog the size of a rhino. Lance swung his sword at the tongue in an effort to cut himself free, but the monster drew back its tongue before his sword's blade made contact with it. The creature then pounced at the young warrior, who in turn rolled out of the way. The son of Jacob soon found himself displaying many acrobatic moves in an effort to stay clear of the monster's sharp teeth. Lance finally gained enough ground to wield his sword, but before Lance could capitalize on this advantage, the frog wrapped its tongue around his sword's handle and began to pull on it, causing Lance to be dragged along with it. Lance put up a great deal of resistance, but in the end he wasn't strong enough. Lance knew the monster was using a great deal of force to pull on his sword. Because of this, he looked the frog in the eye and smiled. The young warrior then let go of his sword, causing it to shoot right through the creature's head, killing it almost instantly. The son of Sir Nathaniel grabbed hold of his father's sword, right before a flash of light once again blinded him.
What a tangled web we weave.
The light passed, and Luke found himself stuck on a gigantic spider web, hanging in the middle of complete darkness. The young warrior, who was unable to move both his hands and legs, noticed a huge spider the size of a lion slowly moving towards him. The son of Jacob began to struggle vigorously in an effort to free himself, but his efforts were in vain, for the substance holding him down to the web was too strong. The spider then shot a dart of green acidic liquid at Luke, who in turn managed to avoid it by tilting his head slightly. The liquid ate away at the web holding the young warrior's body, causing him to fall through it into a deep pit and onto a pile of rotting corpses. Luke, with part of his clothes and skin partially burnt, rose to his feet only to sight the giant spider lowering itself down with a string of web, at the same time continuously shooting darts of green acidic liquid. Luke began to defend himself by stopping the acid attacks with his short swords and leaping up into the air, where he decapitated the creature with one swipe of one of his short swords. As his feet touched back down on the rotting corpses, a flash of bright light blinded him.
Sometimes you have to make the first move.
Lance regained his sight, only to find himself in an underground maze, lit up by burning sticks placed on the walls. Lance, in an effort to find his way out, began to wander around the caves and tunnels. After an hour of walking, the young warrior came to a dead end, where he saw a giant demonic hedgehog fast asleep. Lance's initial reaction was to sneak away, but this was immediately short-lived as he heard the sound of an interdimensional portal open behind him. The young warrior turned around, only to find the portal had opened right behind the creature. "Damn!" cried out Lance by sheer reflex, as his frustration got the better of him. As his voice echoed throughout the maze, the monster woke up and rose to its feet. "Oops," said Lance, realizing his mistake as he drew out his sword for battle. Lance, assuming the creature would pounce at him, had already begun to visualize himself rolling under the monster and jumping through the portal. The monster, however, took Lance by surprise and began to shoot dozens of spikes at the young warrior from off its back. Lance in turn used his sword and agility to block and dodge the spikes. By the time the son of Sir Nathaniel got himself together, the creature had seemed to use up all its spikes, and the portal was now closed. The beast then stood upright in an ape-like manner and unleashed a pair of long, sharp claws. The creature then began to attack the warrior with speed and strength. Lance, utilizing his sword's potential, defended himself with style and grace. The creature was powerful and ruthless, but in the end, Lance's will, heart, and sheer skill prevailed. Making good use of his first opportunity, the young warrior destroyed the beast by literally splitting it in two. After delivering the killing blow, Lance rotated his sword back into his favorite fighting stance, and a bright flash of light followed.
Run!
Luke regained his sight, only to find himself standing on the north side of an exotic jungle. The young warrior then heard buzzing sounds, and sighted a swarm of killer bees, feasting on the meat of a dead carcass at an incredible rate. The swarm of killer bees, which was obviously carnivorous, fed on the corpse until only the bones were left. The young warrior then began to run through the jungle in an effort to create distance between him and the bees. The bees, already with a scent of his flesh, followed. Luke was a fast and agile runner, but slowly and surely the bees began to catch up with him. The demonized insects were in biting rage when suddenly the young warrior fell down a muddy hill. Luke got to his feet quickly, only to face a new problem that took the form of a fully grown Tyrannosaurus. With a well-timed roll, Luke was able to avoid the monster's eager teeth, get to his feet, and run. Meanwhile, 2,000 meters south on the same area, Lance found himself in a rocky desert area. The young warrior walked just over 1,000 meters when a giant winged lizard swooped down in an effort to take a chunk out of him. The young warrior was lucky enough to avoid the unseen attack with a simple reflex duck. Soon afterwards, the winged lizard was in hot pursuit of the son of Sir Nathaniel. The students of Jacob unwittingly found themselves running towards each other in an open grassland, which linked the two sides of the dimension. Both of the students avoided the attacks of their pursuers with well-placed rolls and leaps while running. A portal then opened in the middle of the grassland, and both warriors jumped through it from opposite sides before even catching a glimpse of one another. Ying! Luke fell onto the floor of a large, spacious temple. The young warrior got to his feet and sighted the Yao armor that took the form of a blue metallic-looking ninja suit, placed on a stage-like platform above 3 steps. The young warrior made a move to approach the armor, but was floored by the force of 2 powerful kicks, one in the stomach and one in the face. Luke recovered quickly and flipped to his feet, and came face to face with his attacker, a slim, bald Caucasian man dressed in black, who advertised the leg he used to attack by keeping it raised. Luke, wasting no time, took the fight to his assailant. The young warrior fought valiantly, in his usual artistic manner. In terms of skill and speed, both men were evenly matched. However, it seemed the guardian of the temple had a slight advantage over the student of Jacob. Luke managed to get in a few punches and kicks, but they all seemed to have absolutely no effect. On the other side of the equation, Luke was very much affected by the hits he received. After receiving a 5-hit combination of punches and kicks, Luke was struck to the ground by a somersaulting dropkick. The guardian then leaped into the air in an effort to finish the dazed warrior with a head stomp. Luke quickly responded by spinning to his feet, during which he countered his opponent's aerial attack with a solid kick. As Luke got to his feet, the guardian hit the ground back first. It became clear to the sharp young warrior that his opponent could only be hurt while in mid-air. The guardian, taking a more acrobatic approach, moved in for a second round of attacks. Luke, now very aware of his opponent's weakness, confidently avoided all of his attacks and took the first opportunity to leg sweep him off the floor and strike him with a powerful sidekick before his body had a chance to hit the ground. The force of Luke's kick violently flung the guardian through one of the temple's walls. The guardian got to his feet filled with rage and attacked Luke, this time taking his speed and strength up a notch. Luke tried to tame the guardian's ruthless aggression, but in the end, it proved to be too much for him. The young warrior ended up being on the receiving end of a 15-hit combination of punches, elbows, throws, and kicks, after which the guardian took his right arm and popped it out of its socket. Luke was then thrown to the floor by a gravity-defying scissors kick. The young guardian then leaped up into the air to finish him off with a somersaulting axe kick, but was stopped by a desperate response. Luke put an end to the guardian's attack by throwing one of his short swords at him, which in turn dug into the guardian's chest, causing him to fall to the ground hard. The guardian then got to his feet in an effort to defy death's calling. Luke in turn popped his arm back into his shoulder and allowed the pain to fuel an aerial horizontal spin, from which he unleashed a devastating kick that pushed his short sword right through the guardian, killing him instantly. After catching his breath, the young warrior staggered towards the Yao armor and slowly put it on. The armor in turn began to glow and became a blue bodysuit on him. At this point, all his physical pain and injuries disappeared, and his speed, agility, and skill increased by 1,000-fold, for he had suddenly become enlightened to the secrets of all the soft elements of combat. Yang! Meanwhile, Lance also found himself falling into the hall of a temple, which was only slightly different from the temple that held the Yao armor. In this temple, the red gong armor was kept on a platform above 6 steps. The young warrior drew out his sword and slowly approached the armor, knowing very well that something or someone would be guarding it. Suddenly, a huge muscular man with rough ebony-colored skin came smashing through one of the temple walls, armed with a sword that made totally out of flames. The huge guardian of the temple thrust his sword at the young warrior, who quickly responded by jumping and blocking his attack with the enchanted sword once held by the hands of his father. The young warrior then began to engage the guardian in a vicious sword fight. The guardian was powerful, and his sword cut through marble, concrete, and steel like a hot knife through butter, as Lance quickly discovered while avoiding the fury of his opponent's attacks. After a good 15 minutes of serious battling, Lance's skill as a swordsman began to take center stage and allowed him to strike the guardian across the chest and back. But to his intense disbelief and horror, his sword wasn't even able to make a scratch on his opponent. With his spirit now discouraged by his opponent's resistance to an enchanted blade, Lance began to find it more and more difficult to counter his opponent's merciless attacks. The Guardian then began to get the better of Lance, and the young warrior soon found himself just inches away from being chopped into little pieces by his assailant's fiery sword. Out of sheer desperation, Lance, with the use of his sword, manipulated the Guardian's sword into a circular motion and slashed him across the eyes with his own sword. This caused the Guardian to drop his sword and stagger back. Out of sheer determination to destroy the only obstacle standing between him and the gong armor, Lance grabbed hold of the Guardian's sword, which immediately began to burn his hand. Taking the burning pain of holding the Guardian's fiery sword, Lance swung the sword at his blind assailant, screaming, and in turn sliced him into 2 clean halves. As the guard embraced total annihilation, his sword of flames turned into dust. The pain of his severely burned hand caused Lance to drop to his knees. After dedicating a couple of seconds to calming down, the young warrior got to his feet and wore the gong armor. On him, it became a red bodysuit and took away all his injuries. His strength and stamina increased 1,000 folds, for his eyes were opened to the secret of all the hard elements of combat. One more thing. There was a flash of light, and both warriors found themselves standing in the middle of a white limbo-like environment, right in front of Bequil. "You made it," said the boys in unison, then hugging each other. "We've got the armors. Can we go now?" said Lance, addressing Bequil. "Not so fast. You still have one more obstacle to pass," informed the keeper. "Bring it on. We're more than prepared," said Lance, overconfident in the abilities of the armors they now possessed. "I'm glad you feel that way," said Bequil, then morphing into a 10-foot werewolf-like creature. "Wow, someone's been eating their vegetables," said Lance, unfazed by the guy's transformation. Bequil then proceeded to dish out some vicious attacks that seemed to vibrate the air each time they missed. Luke, taking complete control of the situation, began frustrating the creature by comfortably redirecting the force of all its attacks. He then used the monster's own force to push it into one of Lance's earthquaking blows, which for Bequil seemed to stop time itself. "This isn't personal," said Lance, then finishing off the keeper with a bone-shattering uppercut. There was an explosion of light as an unknown force flung the warriors out of the gauntlet onto Xiong's temple floor. Luke and Lance tried to get to their feet, but they literally couldn't move a muscle, for there was intense pain all over their bodies. Monk, sensing their fading life force, elevated them with an invisible force and encased them in a bubble of pure blue energy. 24 hours later, the 2 students of Jacob awoke in a large, luxurious bedroom. "Man, I had the weirdest dream," said Lance jokingly. "Stop fooling around. We need to figure out where we are," said Luke, unsure of their present position. "You're in my chambers," said Xiong with a tray of herbal tea. "For someone who has taken a vow of celibacy, you have a very inviting bedroom," commented Lance as he glanced around. "What happened?" asked Luke, more concerned about what still had to be achieved. "Your bodies underwent a month's worth of rigorous activity without rest or food. Inside the gauntlet that exists outside our reality, your bodies couldn't feel the effects. But once you returned back to this plane of existence, your bodies had used up too much energy. So much so, if it wasn't for my powers, you wouldn't have survived," informed Xiong, as he handed each warrior a cup of herbal tea. "Where are the armors?" asked Lance, suddenly realizing he was only in underwear. "In a safe place. My advice is to get some rest before you set off to face Elos," suggested the monk. "Where's Nat?" asked Lance, eager to inform the prince of their accomplishments. "Your friend recruited 8 of the land's greatest warriors and returned with them to your kingdom to face Elos." "Why would he go back to Elos without us?" asked Lance, now beginning to take things a lot more seriously. "You two getting through the gauntlet as individuals had a lot to do with the fact that you two are very gifted warriors. It also had to do with the fact that you were extremely lucky. Splitting up inside the gauntlet was a very stupid thing to do, and I was sure it would cost you your lives," responded Xiong. "So now Nat thinks we're dead, and he's the only one left to face Elos," finished Lance. "How long ago did he leave?" asked Luke. 3 weeks ago," replied the monk. "And we've been in the gauntlet for a month," said Luke, entering into deep thought. "It took us a month to get here from our kingdom, but with Xiong's powers we could easily get home before him," suggested Lance. "It took us a month because we came on a cargo ship. If you put together a small army, then it is very likely they got a boat of their own, in which case it will take them 2 weeks to get home," pointed out Luke. "Does he stand a chance?" asked Lance, now becoming very concerned. "Your comrade is a gifted warrior and apparently a great leader, but if he and his men go up against Elos, they will not survive." When you're ready, I will open a portal that will take you straight to Elos. We can only pray he hasn't already confronted her, said the monk, then making a move to leave the room. You don't think we can win, do you? Asked Luke, sensing a lack of faith in the monk's voice. The armors will not guarantee victory against Elos. All they do is even things out. And even then, both of your skills combined may not be enough to defeat her. If you do not work together, there is no way you can win against her, explained the monk, then leaving the room. While Luke and Lance were on the verge of overcoming the gauntlet of the damned, Prince Nathaniel and his men arrived in the kingdom of Nale, only to find its skies covered with darkness and its lands infested with demons. An army of man-sized goblins stormed Mitch's yard, only to be greeted by a series of booby traps that took the form of swinging tree trunks, catapults, and bear traps. The hideous creatures threw themselves at the traps until they were all used up. Mitch soon found that all he had left to defend himself against a dozen goblins was a wooden stick. The pack of monsters then made a move to tear him into pieces, only to be stopped by a razor-sharp boomerang, which sawed through a single vital organ of each and every one of them, all before finally spinning back to its owner. "Prince Nathaniel, you're alive!" cried out Mitch, who assumed everyone he knew and loved were dead. "Mitch, I need your help," said Prince Nathaniel, with a look that was full of promise and determination, as he stood armed with his teacher's weapons and his newly found comrades that were forged in the birthplace of Kung Fu. 24 hours later, in the center of Nale's royal hall, which now housed the ruthless evil that is Elos, Sir Vitro, a young brown-haired and eyed surviving member of late Sir Nathaniel's elite squad of knights, was chained to a large rock placed in front of Elos's new throne. Because he was the present leader of the resistance against the sorceress's evil rule, Elos, in an effort to destroy what was left of those that opposed her, decided to break his fighting spirit piece by piece. "Ah!" screamed out Vitro, as he took the pain of being blasted with a high volt of electricity. Elos had been torturing him for hours, while Han stood silently by her throne. "You're wasting your time, witch. I will never betray my people. You might as well kill me now," said the knight in a weak, defiant voice. Elos responded with a smile as she circled the tortured warrior. "You're right. I am probably wasting my time. I mean, after all, a kingdom under my rule will only cater for barbarians, demons, wild animals, and the insane. A noble warrior such as yourself really has only two options: destroy me or die trying," said Elos, then firing another bolt of electricity at the young warrior. "My life is of no significance, for others like me will find a way to destroy you," said Vitro, on the verge of falling unconscious. "On the contrary, you see, I happen to think all life is important, right down to the little-bitty insects we take for granted. This is why I intend to keep you alive. You see, with my powers, I can inflict as much pain as I like on you without actually killing you. So you see, Sir Vitro, we have all eternity to get well acquainted," said Elos, then signaling Han with a hand gesture to take over the torturing session. While Sir Vitro's body endured more suffering than it deserved, Mitch's flying machine floated over the castle, while Prince Nathaniel and his men jumped down onto its roof. Back in the castle, Han had begun sharpening a set of knives he intended to use in his torturing session. As the shapeshifter moved towards Sir Vitro to begin his fiendish process, a razor-sharp boomerang spun right through him. By the time the enchanted weapon spun back to its owner, Han had been reduced to nothing more than a lifeless puddle. "Witch, your time is up!" yelled out the young prince, as he and his men prepared to do battle. "Finally, some real action. I was beginning to get bored," said Elos casually, as she revived Han and summoned up hundreds of demons. "Things have been a little dull since I crushed Nale's greatest warriors, so I'm counting on all of you to make things interesting. Don't disappoint me now," said Elos, then signaling her monsters to attack. Prince Nathaniel's men had all got their weapons and clothing touched by the Hilarion waters, and they were all experts of their individual fighting styles. Demons began to drop like flies. "Aren't you going to help your men?" asked Elos, as she sighted the prince run towards her. "The best way to kill a snake is to cut his head off," said the prince, then leaping into the air to execute a devastating aerial attack with the late teacher's staff, only to be brought down by a roundhouse kick courtesy of Han. "That only works if you're fast enough," said Elos, as she watched her shapeshifter do battle with one of Jacob's greatest students. Han immediately learned firsthand that Prince Nathaniel was no pushover, for despite his shape-shifting abilities, the young warrior had no problem keeping up with him, It was almost as if he had been trained to face an opponent like him. Two of the prince's comrades joined in the fight against Han, and he immediately proved to be too much for the shapeshifter to handle. Elos, interested in knowing exactly how much skill Prince Nathaniel possessed, threw his comrades aside with an invisible force and elevated the ground he and Han were fighting on to more than 20 feet above everyone else, to ensure that no one but her could interfere. Immediately Han got some privacy with the young opponent, he executed a 3-hit roundhouse kick. The prince managed to block the first two but got struck down by the third one. Han then leaped into the air where he multiplied himself into 7. Prince Nathaniel, spotting 7 new problems, acted quickly by using his staff for leverage to aerially kick continuously in a circular motion, enabling him to knock down all 7 versions of Han, including the original one, before they could even get their feet on the elevated floor. As the Hans hit the battle-infested ground below, they all became a liquid substance that formed a big pool, which in turn shot up to the elevated floor like a geyser and became a humanoid. Han, however, was given no time to get himself together, for he was quickly greeted by a series of the young prince's attacks. The eagerness to restore his kingdom and avenge the death of all the loved ones he had already lost took his skills up 2 levels, but it also made him careless, for Han managed to disarm and knock him to the floor with a back kick. As the young warrior scrabbled to catch hold of his staff, which eventually fell 20 feet to the ground below, Han transformed his hands into 2 very sharp blades. Prince Nathaniel flipped to his feet and took the fight to Han, who tried as hard as he could to ensure the young warrior was on the receiving end of his blades. But the young warrior was quick on his feet. Eventually, Han's persistence and speed paid off, only to find his blades were unable to penetrate the young warrior's clothing, for they had been touched by the Hilarion waters. Prince Nathaniel, pleased with the advantage he had over his opponent, began to bombard the shapeshifter with powerful punches and kicks that knocked him right to the edge of the floating floor. Elos, a bit unpleased with the young prince's upper hand, fired a ray of energy at Han that increased the shapeshifter's powers a great deal. So much so, the prince's enchanted clothing was no longer an advantage for him. Prince Nathaniel made a move to knock Han off, but the shapeshifter quickly responded by regaining his balance and driving his blade right into the young warrior's stomach. While Prince Nathaniel was still in a state of shock, the evil being flung him off the floating ground like he was an insignificant piece of rubbish. As the young prince fell towards the ground with his injury, Luke and Lance leaped out of an interdimensional portal and into the middle of the battle. Lance, the first of the 2 to sight the fallen prince, caught him. "Nat, you're hurt!" blurted out Lance, out of concern, as he laid his fallen comrade in a safe corner. "I'll be alright," said the prince with a brave face, but it was clear that the injury was serious. Han, with his new improved powers, leaped down to the area the students of Jacob had gathered, with the intention to finish off Prince Nathaniel and destroy all his comrades. Luke, unable to contain his rage, wasted no time in proceeding to give Han the most severe beating of its whole existence. Luke, who was much too fast and strong for Han, began to bombard the shapeshifter with a variety of attacks, at the same time not allowing the evil being to fall. After striking the shapeshifter about 50 times, Luke raised him off the ground with a jumping front kick. The young warrior, with the power of the armor, then manipulated the air around him to create an energy ball, which he used to scatter the shapeshifter into pieces, while he was still in mid-air. Elos, who witnessed everything, acknowledged he was about to face a formidable opponent by raising an eyebrow and mentally preparing herself for battle. Luke then turned and stared at the evil sorceress for a couple of seconds, before finally leaping at her with a battle cry. Elos responded by firing a huge fireball at the young warrior, but Luke, who was now a grand master of the soft elements, deflected the fireball back. Elos in turn jumped right through the attack and kicked Luke out of the way, only to land unharmed in a black bikini-like battle gear. Lance attempted to attack from behind, but the sorceress unleashed a fire whip from thin air and used it to strike the young warrior down to the floor without even looking at him. Elos then used the whip to counterattack another aerial attack begun by Luke. Lance then got to his feet and drew out his father's sword, and Luke got to his feet and kicked up his father's staff. At this point, even Elos couldn't help but see the spirits of their fathers in them. "If I had known you boys were going to be this much trouble, I would have killed you all on the mountain," said Elos, still pretty confident that she could defeat them. Lance, who was now very tired of her voice, attacked first. The sorceress reacted by jumping out of the way of the young warrior's enchanted bait, at the same time transforming her whip into a sword. As Elos's feet touched the ground, she immediately began to outcast Lance's excellent swordsmanship with style and grace, before finally slashing him twice across the chest and kicking him to the floor. Luke then attacked from behind with his enchanted staff. Elos in turn executed a backward somersault over him and transformed her weapon into a fiery staff. Luke, who like his father was excellent at battling with a staff or stick, found himself being outclassed in his own area of expertise. Elos, first taking time to mock the young warrior's fighting skills, finally took him down with a leg sweep and then horizontally spun over him. By the time her feet touched the ground, her fiery staff had become 2 fiery short swords, with which she rotated backwards and went into a Wing Chun fighting stance. Both warriors then took hold of each of their father's weapons and attacked at the same time. Elos fended off their attacks artistically with so much ease it almost seemed as if she was playing with them. Finally, she proved her superiority as a fighter by disarming both warriors, slashing them across the chest and flooring them at the same time with an aerial split kick. She then transformed her short swords into a firing aura around her hands. "Come on, boys, I'm beginning to get bored here," said Elos, who more than anything else seemed to be enjoying herself. As Luke lay on the ground beside his comrade, Xiang's warning came flooding back. If you don't work together, there is no way you can win against her. Luke then turned to Lance, who seemed to be waiting for a new strategy. "Lance, I'll be yin and you be yang," said Luke, signaling to his comrade to concentrate on using each other's strengths. Lance acknowledged the plan with a wink, indicating he was down but not out. Both warriors in unison then flipped to their feet and went into their individual fighting stances. Elos smiled and the warriors attacked. Lance literally threw the first punch, and Elos made a move to counter, but Luke intercepted her counter-attack and redirected it back towards her, causing the sorceress to be struck with twice the amount of energy she released. Lance then followed up the attack with a devastating roundhouse kick that violently flung Elos into a throne. Elos then literally bounced back with a flying fist attack. Luke in turn took the force of the punch and used the energy to rotate the sorceress's body while she was still in mid-air, giving Lance the opportunity to hit her with a steel-shattering kick that threw her into a wall. Lance, eager to destroy the murderer of his father and teacher, picked up his sword and threw it at the evil sorceress, who was now pinned to the wall. Elos reacted by using an invisible force to stop the sword in mid-air and redirect it back towards the young warrior. Luke jumped in front of Lance and manipulated the air around the sword, causing it to dart towards Elos at 10 times the original speed. The sorceress was unable to act quickly, causing the blade of the sword to shoot right through her. Despite Elos' immeasurable power, she was not immune to the blade of an enchanted sword. Elos desperately tried to hang on to life, but her efforts were in vain, for it was not possible. She then gave out a large scream that echoed across the land. Then there was an explosion of light. When the light cleared, all the demons across the land ceased to be. The sun regained its presence, and the unnatural darkness was no more. "Nat, stay with us. Xiang will have you back to full strength in no time," said Lance as he gently lifted up his injured comrade. "You guys worked well together," said the prince in a weak, fading voice. "Of course we worked well together. We argue a lot, but after all said and done, we're all a team," said Luke, desperately trying to keep his friend awake. "I'm sorry I didn't have faith in you guys. I know now you guys can do anything," said Prince Nathaniel, then closing his eyes and taking his last breath. Lance and Luke then began to weep uncontrollably, for they had just lost a childhood friend, who was no less than a brother. Now they were left with a new dilemma, for without a direct heir to the throne, the kingdom of Nale had truly fallen. The Fall of Nale is now available on paperback and Kindle at Amazon. For more details, go to JOMAJstudios.com and click on Bookstore. Also at JOMAJstudios.com, you can check out our YouTube page, Facebook page, Twitter page, and our Instagram page, and other website features. See how you can get involved with us at JOMAJstudios.com.